I mend carts and roofs in Austin Ford, which is 90 souls on a river nobody outside the valley has heard of, and I had been married a year and a half. On a Tuesday night, my wife said my name 9 times in the dark, and 9 gold crowns hit the floorboards. By Thursday, a collector called Pell was standing in our square with a writ for 400 gold crowns my dead father borrowed. He took Rona for it in front of the street politely. Every coin I have ever owned came out of my wife screaming. The Tuesday went like this. I was asleep. Rona was not, because she had been chewing on something all evening, and she woke me by saying my name into the dark, flat, the way you tap a plank to hear whether it is sound. First crown came out of nothing, about 2 feet above the bed, and opened my eyebrow. Gold does not drift down, it falls like what it is. I sat up with blood running into one eye, and she said my name again, louder, because now she was frightened. That was the second. I was on my knees on the boards before the fourth came down, counting, because a number is the one thing I can always hold. The rest went into the blankets, and by the 7th, she had both hands over her mouth and was saying it through her fingers. 9 crowns. Then I sat on the floor of my own house at 2 in the dark and told her the roof was leaking money. She did not laugh. She asked what I had been doing that evening, in the tone she keeps for a customer who has changed his mind about a price. I told her the truth, which was that I had been asleep and she had been saying my name. So in the morning, we ran the stupidest experiment 2 people have ever run. She stood at the window and said my name flatly, on request, twice, while I waited in the middle of the room with my hands out like a man expecting rain. Nothing came. She did it again, and nothing came again, and she said the word had gone strange in her mouth, like a coin you have held too long. I concluded that the bed was magic, which tells you how clever I was on my first morning as a rich man. I took the lot to Sedge at the forge, because a man who mends carts does not believe in money he has not tested. He bit them, filed one, weighed the lot, and said they were true crowns with no clip and no sweat on them. Then he asked where a roofer gets gold like that, and I told him. And by noon the square knew. Pell came in on the Thursday with 2 carters and an empty cart, at the hour the market is fullest, which was not an accident. He set his box on the trestle outside the alehouse and tapped it twice with his knuckles before he spoke. He had the writ read out loud so the square would hear the sum. 400 gold crowns, borrowed against the house in the yard by my father, who had been dead 19 months and who had never once told me he owed anybody a copper. Then he read the clause under it. An obligation made out of a person is property, and property may be dealt in by anybody. He read out the name that signed it, a chancellor called Austri, in the same voice he used for the date. I heard none of it. I said we would pay. Pell went on eating a heel of bread while I said it, and asked what with. I said what I had today and more coming. He asked where from, and I had no answer, so I gave him the crowns and he weighed them on a little brass hand scale he carries. He said they were good and handed them straight back because nothing had been entered yet, and good money does not change what is written. While he was saying it, a copper came down off the alehouse thatch and rang on his box, and another landed in the mud by his boot, and 90 people watched it happen. They had been saying my name across that square since noon on the Wednesday, muttering it over their baskets, and every mutter paid. It rained small money on my wife's worst morning, and I could not switch it off. Then he explained his business decision out loud, because being seen to be reasonable is the only thing he sells. The writ allowed one body. He would take the one who could read and keep accounts. That was not me. He put a price on my wife in front of her neighbors. 1 crown a week for 4 years, which would service the interest and never touch the 400, so the 4 years would buy nothing at all. He said it kindly. Nothing personal, friend. I put my hands on him. I got one fist into the front of his coat, and no further, because his carters are carters, and I am a man who mends things, and they had me face down in the road inside 3 seconds. 90 people watched that, and not one of them moved. I have never held it against them. Pell had spent 20 years being the man who never broke a rule in front of them, and I was a roofer with coppers falling out of the sky. They brought Rona out with her box under her arm. She had packed it herself in the night, which is the thing I cannot think about, and she climbed onto the cart without help and told me, from up there, not to do anything stupid. I said I would not. I meant it for about 4 minutes. She knew that when she said it, and she said it anyway, in front of witnesses, so that it would be on the record. Then the cart moved and she came apart. She screamed my name and screamed it again, 61 times between the trestle and the top of the lane. I know the number because I counted the coins and there was nothing else I could do. 61 gold crowns came down into the mud of Austin Ford Square in about 90 seconds. They came off the alehouse thatch. They came down on a man called Fossick, holding a basket of eggs. 2 of them went into Pell's open collecting box. He took those 2 out and handed them back to me while I was on the ground because they were not on his paper. He was right to do it, and the correctness made it colder than cruelty, and he managed it without looking at my face. I went after the rest on my hands and knees in front of the entire village while my wife was carried up the lane screaming my name. I am not going to dress that up. I filled both coat pockets and my hat. That is the picture this district kept of me, and every one of them is right about what they saw. A husband on his knees in the mud after money, a woman on a cart, and the collector already writing. The idea arrived while I was down there, and I will not pretend it came later. One mouth said it 9 times and paid 9 crowns. There are 200,000 mouths in Velen. Once a day, out of habit, forever. I traded my handcart to a drover called Tulk for a place on his tailboard to Grail, a day north, where Pell keeps his counting room. Tulk told me where they take bonded bodies on that circuit. A chalk estate called Cold Harrow. 3 days on beyond Grail, he said, and the chalk gives everybody the same cough. His brother had been bonded once. Then, he stopped talking about it and I let him. The next evening, I put 70 crowns down on Pell's counting table in Grail. The arithmetic is worth saying out loud. 61 crowns out of the mud, 9 off my own bedroom floor, and my handcart gone to Tulk for the ride. His counting room is a back room over a chandler's with one window and a long table, and he had a Hesper clerk in it and 4 debtors waiting to be told what they owed. I walked past the queue. Nobody stops a man carrying gold in both hands. I had done the sum on the road up. 70 crowns in a roofer's coat is 70 crowns somebody takes off him inside a week, and 70 on his paper is 70 nobody can ever charge me for twice. What it actually bought was a room full of debtors watching him take money he did not want. I set it down in 3 stacks and told him it was against the writ served on Austin Ford and that he was going to write me a receipt in front of the room. He tapped the table twice. He asked whether I understood this changed nothing about the bond. I said I understood the arithmetic fine and would he please weigh it. He said the estate would not release a body against a part payment, not for him and not for anybody. I said I had not asked the estate for anything. I had asked him for a receipt. One of the 4 debtors, an old man with a cart license in his hand, said out loud to the room that a man cannot refuse cash. Nobody answered him. The clerk looked at the ceiling. Pell reached for his scale. That was the trap, and he had built it himself over those years while I was still learning to lay slate. He sells being reasonable. A reasonable man does not refuse gold on a recorded writ in front of 4 debtors who are about to be asked for theirs. So he weighed all 70, unhurried, coin by coin, in front of people who were watching very carefully indeed. He is not a fool. He knew precisely what that room was learning about him while he did it, and he did it anyway, because the alternative was worse. Receipt says 70 crowns received against 330 owing. He signed it, and the clerk sealed it, and the old man with the cart license said the sum out loud when he heard it. It is the first document with my name on it that I ever kept, and Pell did not say my name. He got through that entire evening without it. He said the alderman, and this one, and friend, and when the paper required a name, he read it off the paper like a street sign and put the paper down again. I noticed because I had spent 2 days learning that my name was money, and here was a man who would not hand me a copper of it. That night, I filed it under rudeness. It was not rudeness, and working out what it actually was took me the next 2 years. He gave me the correction on his way out of his own room, over his shoulder, pulling on his coat without slowing down for it. Money buys paper. Money does not buy people. Paying against it reduces the writ and never releases the body. Only the whole sum, at once in cash, takes a bonded woman off an estate. The estate is Cold Harrow, 3 days on beyond Grail, and he asked whether I would like that repeated. 2 of the debtors followed me down the stairs to ask how a roofer walks in with 70 crowns. I told them the truth, and they laughed at me in the street, and one of them said my name while he was laughing, and a copper landed on the step between us and stopped the laugh dead. So that was the shape of it by the second evening. 330 crowns in one hand at once, or my wife spends 4 years breathing chalk to pay interest on a debt a dead man made. I had a receipt and nothing else in my pockets, which is how I spent the next day in a strange town, trying to make the rule work on purpose. 3 attempts, and all 3 of them failed, and the failures cost me more than anything I have been taught since. First, I walked out to the stubble field north of the Grail Road where nobody could see me, and I shouted my own name at the sky until my throat gave out. Fenn Alder, Fenn Alder, 30 times, and I meant it more each time, not less. Nothing came down at all. A man cannot pay himself, which is the first thing anybody would try and the first thing anybody would lose. A plowman on the far side of the hedge watched all of it and said nothing at all to me, which at the time I thought was rude. Second, I went to the Grail smithy and asked the smith straight out as a favor to say my name a few times. I offered to mend his shop door for it. He is an obliging man and he thought about it and then he said it, twice, obligingly. No coin came. He said it a 3rd time, watching my face, and still nothing came. And then he asked whether I was quite well and went back to his fire. I walked out of there having learned the most expensive thing in this business for free. Third, and I still think this one was clever, I borrowed the corner of a bread stall off a woman called Pinnock against the promise of a mended axle, and I chalked my own name across the board over it. Fenn Alder, in letters a foot high. 2 loaves went out under that name inside an hour. Both buyers said it. One of them said it twice because she wanted the smaller loaf and had to ask again, and she said it clearly, and she meant every word of what she was saying about bread. Nothing came, because a name on a thing is not a name on a man. Pinnock wanted to know why a roofer was going white over 2 loaves of bread. I could not tell her. That loophole cost me an axle to find, and it is going to cost me a great deal more before the end. So the ledger for that day ran like this. 70 crowns out, the same balance still owing. 30 shouts, 3 favors from a smith, 2 loaves, and a total income of nothing whatsoever. I did the only useful thing left in that town, which was my actual trade. I took the two worst jobs on the market square because the worst jobs are the ones nobody else has taken, and I got them by walking up and pointing. A collapsed cart shed behind the wool hall and a stable roof that had been letting water in since spring. 2 nights of work, 1 silver and 6 coppers for the pair, paid on finishing. The first bookings anybody has ever made with me. I did the shed by lantern with a borrowed maul and got the ridge back out of the wreck of it, and the wool hall man said I worked like somebody was chasing me. Rona would have written them in a book with a date beside each one, because she sells wax and tallow to strangers and thinks in columns. I had nobody to tell, so I told the stable door. I walked the 18 miles home on the Monday with the silver and 6 coppers in my coat, got in at dusk, and found that the village had already read the thing I had come home to read. Somebody had chalked Pell's next circuit date on the Austin Ford Post. 5 days. He would be back in our square on the Saturday with a cart and a list, and every household in that village knew it before I did, which told me 2 useful things. He works a circuit, so he comes round again, and everything he takes on a day you can count towards. 5 days is a number. I can do something with a number. I could not do anything at all with a magic bed. Fossick's wife was at her door, and she went inside when she saw me coming up the lane. She did not slam it. She just was not there anymore by the time I drew level, and that told me what my name was worth in my own village. The house was cold, and the door was not locked because we had never locked it, and her box was gone off the shelf where her box lives. I was standing in the thick of that room for a while, doing nothing that would look good written down. Then I lit a candle, put the receipt on the table, put the silver on top of it, and sat down to work out how a man who mends things raises the entire unpaid balance before 4 years of somebody's lungs are spent. And while I was sitting there, a single copper came down out of nothing, landed on the table beside the candle, and rolled against my hand. Somebody in Velen had said my name. It came down copper, so they had not meant much by it, and it was somebody I will never meet, in a place I will never find, thinking about me for about as long as it takes to swallow. I looked at it a long time. 1 copper, 240 of those make a crown, and I needed 330 crowns, which is 79,200 coppers, and I scratched that sum into the table with a nail so I would stop hoping. I stopped scratching, because there is another way to read the same sum. 200,000 people in Velen say good morning to somebody every day of their lives. If 4 letters of mine were the thing they said instead of good morning, 79,000 coppers is not a mountain. It is a morning. Ifeal. Then I put the copper in my pocket, because a man who can do the sum can carry the first coin of it, and I went to bed in the magic bed, alone, in a house with no wife in it, and slept like a dropped sack. 3 days on beyond Grail, there is a chalk estate called Cold Harrow, with a gate and a keep book and a cough that everybody there gets sooner or later. My wife was inside it. She was already awake, and she was already counting. Grail holds its market on a Tuesday, and I got there with 3 silver in my coat off 2 roadside jobs and a goat on a rope that I had been meaning to sell for a year. Bed theory died on the road. I had slept in a ditch outside Marham Hollow and woken with 2 coppers in my hair, so whatever was paying me had never cared about the bed, and I had wasted 4 days being wrong in comfort. What I had instead was a market of 900 people, which is that many mouths, and a plan I would now describe as the single most expensive, stupid idea of my life. I was going to buy speech. Pell was working the same market, because that is what a circuit is. His trestle was set up between the wool hall and the corn cross, and there was a queue at it, and he was eating an apple while a carter explained why he was short. I stood in that queue for a while without meaning to. Then I got to the front and asked him what the writ stood at, and he said 330, which I knew, and I said I would have it by autumn, and he asked with what? I said, with my name. He looked at me for the first time that day, put the core of the apple down on his ledger, and said that men who tell him where the money is coming from are usually the ones who bring none of it. Then he called for the next in the queue. Thing about him that I could not get past for a long time. He is never rude. He does not need to be. He had already priced me and moved on, and being priced and dismissed by a man eating an apple does something to your judgment, which is how I came to hire Widow Tap for a silver. She is the woman Grail pays to weep at funerals, and she is very good at it, and I had decided by then that the coins came out of love or grief, because Rona had been frightened and my father was dead. The bargain was simple. She would stand at the end of the stall row and grieve my name for half an hour, out loud, with feeling, and I would pay her a silver, which is more than she gets for an actual dead man. She did it beautifully. I have never heard anything like it. She rocked. She held her own elbows. She said, Fenn Alder, the way you say a name over a hole in the ground. And by the 4th minute, there were 14 people standing around her looking for a body. She asked me first whether the man was a relative. I said he was not. She asked whether he was dead. I said he was standing in front of her. She looked at me for a while and then said that she had grieved for stranger reasons and would want the silver in her hand before she started, which I gave her. 2 coppers came down. That was all. 2 coppers in the first minute and then nothing for 14 more, while the best mourner in the county tore herself in half for a stranger and a crowd gathered to watch her do it. Those 2 coppers were worse than nothing at all. If she had paid me none, I would have learned something clean. Two told me the door had been open for 1 minute and had shut while she was still working, and I could not read it. So I did what any reasonable man would do and asked for my silver back. Widow Tap told me, in front of all 14 of them, that she had delivered 15 minutes of grief as agreed, and that the quality was not in dispute. She was completely right, and I argued anyway. We were still going at it when a debtor called Niall came out of the corn cross, having just been told what he owed, saw me, and cursed me across 4 stalls for a lucky bastard with a hat full of gold and a wife on a cart. He meant every syllable of it. A silver hit the mud between us before he had finished, and he saw it land, and he stopped dead, and then he went away very fast because he thought he had done something. Was still looking at that silver when a beggar at the Woolhall corner, who had watched me hand Widow Tap her fee and had drawn his own conclusions, called out and thanked me by name for the price of a bed. Another coin came down. 2 strangers, no arrangement, no fee, no 15 minutes. One hated me and one wanted something from me, and they paid me more in 10 seconds than the finest mourner in Grail managed in 10 minutes. Widow Tap kept the silver. She also told me, on her way off, that I had bought the wrong thing, and that if I ever wanted somebody to mean it, I should try being worth meaning. Then she went to look for work with a corpse in it, and while I was standing there getting my education, my goat got off its rope. Goodwife Tar had 4 rows of late cabbage behind the fish row and had been there since dawn with the good ones stacked in a barrow. The goat went through the barrow first, which was efficient of it, and then into the rows. She came out of that stall like weather. She knew whose goat it was because everybody in Grail knew who I was by then, and she stood in her own cabbages with a stave in her hand and screamed my full name at me 3 times. 3 coins came down in front of 30 people. One of them bounced off the barrow, and one of them hit her in the shoulder, and she stopped mid-word and looked at it, and 30 market people looked at it with her, and nobody said anything for a second and a half. Then somebody at the back laughed, and Goodwife Tar said, with the stave still up, that if her cabbages paid that well, she would grow me by the acre. I paid her 8 coppers for the barrow and got 2 of them back off the ground while she watched, but I had it by then. Standing in a wrecked cabbage row with a goat chewing the evidence, I finally said the thing out loud, and I have never had to say it again since, because everything after that was just the bill arriving. Word alone does nothing. Payment comes from being meant. A bought word is empty in the mouth that says it, and everything that happened to me afterwards came from that rule being true. I wanted it proved properly, so I ran one more experiment, and then I never ran another. There is a man in Grail called Nicket who will do anything for a copper, and I gave him one to stand by the horse trough and say my name all day. He was delighted. He is not a subtle man. He took the copper, put it in his boot, planted his feet, and started saying Fenn Alder in a steady voice like a man calling sheep, and he kept it up without a break for 2 hours and 10 minutes. 3 coins. They came in the first half minute, 1, 2, 3, while he was still thinking about the strange man who had just paid him. Then he was thinking about the saying, and about his boot, and about his dinner, and nothing came down ever again. Not that day, not the next day, not once in the 2 years since. I have tested it without meaning to 100 times. Nicket's mouth is finished. He can say my name until his jaw goes and the sky stays shut over him. So I put the 2 results side by side on the edge of the trough and did the arithmetic out loud, because I was in public and because I have never in my life been able to keep a sum in my head where nobody can hear it. Nicket worked for a copper because he is Nicket. Anybody you would actually hire for a day in Grail costs 3 silver, which is 36 coppers, and what any of them will ever pay me is 3 coppers, once, before the mouth dies forever. 36 out and 3 back is 33 coppers gone for every mouth I buy, and there is no volume that fixes it, because every mouth I buy is a mouth I burn. Buying speech is a machine for turning money into silence. I said all that at a horse trough with a goat, and a wool factor called Party, who had stopped to listen, told me I should be doing sums for somebody with sums worth doing. I have thought about that man more than he would like. She left one thing on the table, and I went for it with both hands. Niall the debtor had paid me a silver for hating me. Hate is free. Hate does not need a fee. Hate, I decided that Monday was a renewable crop and I was going to farm it. Tuesday morning, I went to the fish row, joined the queue, and stood there arguing about the price of a herring for 40 minutes, while 12 people behind me got hotter and hotter. Then, I bought nothing at all and walked off. I made 12 silver out of 40 minutes of herring. The whole queue said my name. Some of them said it to my back, and some of them said it to each other, and one woman said it to a constable, and every version of it paid. Thursday, I went to the horse trough at watering hour and sat in it. I sat in the trough with my boots on while 7 carters waited to water 22 animals, and I explained pleasantly that I had a right to wash. That was 7 silver and a boot full of coins. The problem with earning money in a trough is that gold in water is ballast, and I came out of there sodden and clinking and had to be helped up by a man who was calling me every name I have, including my own. Constable Gerald Pike fined me 2 silver for the trough. He is a decent man having a bad year. He wrote the fine out on his knee and said my name 3 times while he was actually angry at me, and those 3 paid, one of them in silver. Then he checked the spelling with me twice, with his mind entirely on the word, and those 2 paid nothing at all. I paid the fine out of the fine. I want that understood, because Pike worked it out about 4 seconds after I did, and the look on his face is one of the 3 or 4 things from that autumn I would still pay money to see again. Saturday was the mayor's daughter's wedding, and I do not defend what I did. The wedding cart came down from the church with the whole town lining the road, and I stood in front of it and would not move, and asked the bride's father for a word about a debt he does not owe. Horse went sideways. The cart went into a stall. A stall of glazed pottery went into the road, and the bride went into it, in white, in front of 400 people, and the noise that came out of that crowd was the sound of a coin mint. I made 11 crowns and 4 silver on Saturday, most of it inside 90 seconds. It rained gold on a wedding, and I stood in it in front of the entire town of Grail, picking coins out of a broken pot with a woman in a white dress crying 4 feet away. The bride's father found me before Pike did. He is a corn factor, and he did not hit me, which I had been expecting and would have accepted. He asked me one question, which was whether I had known there would be a woman in that cart, and I said I had. And he walked away and did not say anything else at all. He took me in for that one. He did not shout. He put his hand on my arm and said my name once, quietly, and that copper landed on the road between us, and neither of us picked it up, and I think that is the moment I stopped enjoying the week. Sunday night, I sat in a cell and did the accounts on the wall with a bit of stone. 12 crowns and 2 silver gross for the week. Fines for the queue, the trough, and the cart. Damages on 1 stall of pottery and 1 cart shaft. The bride's dress. Net for the week, 4 coppers, not 4 silver and not 4 crowns. 4 coppers, which is a ninth of a day's wage for a man who does not mend anything, and I had earned it by wrecking a wedding in front of 400 people. Being hated is a business that exactly feeds itself and pays out nothing. It grosses like a fortune and nets like a beggar, because every crown it makes comes attached to something you have to buy back, and the price of the damage is set by the people you damaged. And then the whole crop died in front of me anyway, which is the thing that actually taught me something. The insults went hollow inside a fortnight. The same men who had paid me a silver each on the Tuesday were saying my name on the Thursday out of habit, and habit pays nothing. By the second week, Grail had stopped using my name altogether. I had become the coin man, and I stood in that market and heard myself called it 19 times in an afternoon by people who genuinely despised me, and the sky over me stayed shut like a lid. That was the first time I understood that I could be famous and broke at the same time, and that the two things had nothing to do with each other. A town that size was talking about me all day long and paying me 4 coppers a week for the privilege. So I took what was left of the gold to Anselm Thryle, who is the money changer of Grail and the man who tells you what your metal is actually worth, and I asked him to handle it for me. He would not touch it. He weighed 1 crown to be polite about it, said the metal was clean, and then said the words I did not understand for another year. Money with no trade behind it is somebody else's problem walking into my shop. I told him the metal was the same metal. He agreed that it was. He said the metal has never been the question, and that a man who thinks a changer deals in metal has misunderstood every changer he has ever met, because what a changer actually deals in is knowing where a thing came from. I asked him what trade had to do with it. He said that when a man brings him coin, he can see the field it grew in, or the cloth it came off, and if it goes wrong, he knows who to shout at. My coin came out of the air. There was nobody to shout at. Then he said the sentence I have never forgotten, which is that he was not refusing my money. He was refusing my future, and would I please come back when I had one. I have made that man a great deal of money since, and he has never once apologized for it. I walked out of Threel's yard with 4 coppers, a goat, a broken week, and a market that would not say my name, and that is where I would have ended if I had not stopped at the corn cross to hear what the shouting was. It was Pell, and he was doing business with the elders of a place called Larkhow, which is a road village 8 miles up the Sallow. They were in arrears on a bad barley year, and they had come to beg, and he had come prepared, which he always is. He offered them an extension. 6 months on the whole village's arrears, no interest added, on his word, granted where they stood. Then he named the condition, and he named it loudly enough for the wool hall to hear, because he wanted it heard. Condition was that Larkhow undertakes to keep the alderman out, not to call him in, not to write to him, not to let him work there, and to say so to anybody who asks. And an elder asked him how he could grant 6 months without asking Ambry. And Pell said pleasantly, with his mouth full, that he stands behind his own circuit's arrears personally, with his own name on the paper, and has done for 20 years, which is why his word is worth granting an extension with. I heard him say it. He knew I was standing there, and he said it anyway, because it was not a secret, and because a man who has been correct that long does not think of his own guarantee as a weakness. Neither did I then. I just wrote it down in my head and kept it. Larkhow took the extension. Larkhow had a bad barley year and 30 households on the edge of it, and they took the 6 months, and I do not blame a single one of them for it. What it meant was that a village I had never been to had just agreed, out loud, in front of witnesses, never to say my name. Pell walked back to his trestle and finished his apple, and I stood in the corn cross with 4 coppers and understood that I now had a competitor. I came home to Olsen Ford with 4 coppers, a goat nobody would buy, and a reputation for wrecking weddings, and I sat on my own doorstep and went through the list of mouths I had left. Pell had come through on the Saturday, exactly as the post said he would, and he took nothing off me at all. He said good afternoon and went on up the lane, and I have never been so insulted by a greeting in my life. I had spent 4 of those days working out whether I could sell the house. I cannot. My father borrowed against the house and the yard, so it is the security on the writ, and a man cannot sell the roof he is standing under to pay the paper that is holding it up, which leaves the mouth that wants something. Nobody has ever gone hollow while they still need you. So I put it about, at the Ford and the Post, and to every drover who watered at Ossen, that I would come out at night, for nothing, for the job nobody else would take. Not the good jobs, the ones people are ashamed to ask for. I told Tolk to tell it down the Sallow Road that if it is filthy and it is at 3 in the dark and there is no money in it, send for Fenn Alder and he will come. Tolk told me it was the worst offer he had heard in 30 years on that road, and then he told it at every water stop between Ossen Ford and Grail, twice, with the details improved, which is exactly what I had hired him to do without either of us saying so. 4 days of nothing. Then Ivy Bissell came up the lane in the dark, and the Bissells farmed the low ground below the mill, and she stood in my doorway with her hands in her apron and would not say what it was for a full minute. There was a dead ewe under her kitchen floor. It had got in through the crawl in the wet 3 days back and died under the middle of the room, and by then the smell had taken the house and her husband had a bad back and her boy was 12 years old. She had asked 4 men. 2 wanted money she has not got, and 2 would not do it at any price, which I understood completely when I got down there. She asked me what I would take. I said nothing. She asked me again, because nobody says nothing, and I said nothing again. The crawl under a Bissell floor is 14 inches. I know because I measured it with my own shoulders, going in on my back, with a lantern held in my teeth and a sack folded over my face, and I have taken a roof off in a storm, and it was better work than this. Her husband came to the hatch twice while I was under there to say that he would come down himself if I would take his back into account, and both times his wife told him to sit down, and the second time she did not say it kindly, and I heard a marriage in it that had been having that argument for a fortnight. You cannot pull a 3-day ewe. It comes apart. So it is done in stages with a short knife and a sack, and the stages have to be done in an order, and I worked out the order lying on my back under the joists with the whole family sitting in the room above my head. They sat there the entire time. The thing about him about the jobs nobody will take. The people who need them done have usually stopped being able to leave the room. Ivy Bissell sat over me on a stool for 2 hours, and every so often she said my name to check I was alive. And a silver came down into the crawl about half an hour in, out of nothing, in the dark, and lodged against my ribs. I did not understand it. She was not grieving, and she was not furious, and she had not been paid to say anything. She was sitting on a stool being frightened for a man under her floor, in the dark, and it paid me a silver, and then a copper, and then 2 more coppers from somewhere else entirely. I came out at midnight with a full sack and a silver and 3 coppers I could not account for, and there were 14 people standing in the Bissell yard who had come to watch a man be paid by the sky, and one of them had brought his brother. That was the start of the tale. From that night on, I have never walked home alone, because a man that coins fall on collects the sort of company that stands about hoping. I fed 5 of them out of that first silver, and told the rest to come back when I had work, which 2 of them did. Ivy Bissell would not let me leave without something, so she gave me a jar of pickled beans and told me to my face that she would say my name in that house every day for a year. It is a lovely thing to say to somebody. It paid twice more and then stopped, because you cannot keep a promise like that awake. Something else was happening on that bank the same evening, and I did not put it together for weeks, because I spent all of it under a floor with a lantern in my teeth. Rit server of Pell's had come down the Ossen the same day to serve 2 households below the mill. He served Corbet and he served the Fossicks on the same evening, and a Rit server does not leave quietly, and a village does not stay indoors after one has gone through. So, at about 1 in the morning, when the sluice went, half of Ossen Ford was out of doors in the dark arguing about paper instead of asleep in bed. That is the only reason 40 people were on that bank inside 2 minutes. Pell put them there. He will never know it, and I have never told him. The river was up from 4 days of rain, and the mill was running. The Ossen Weir has an old oak sluice with a rack and pinion on it, and the rack is worn, and everybody in that village had known for 10 years that it wanted replacing. It jammed half open, which is the worst position, because half open takes the entire river through a gap the width of a door and puts it into the race at a speed that will strip the bark off a post. Sam Bissell was 11, and he was out of doors like everybody else, and he went along the top of the weir in the dark to look at the water because he was 11. He went in above the gate, and the race took him down into the wheel and pinned him under the 3rd paddle with his head out. His head out. That is every bit of it. He was alive and he was breathing, and the water was coming over his chin at every fourth beat of that wheel, and there was no way to reach him, and no way to stop the wheel while the sluice was pouring. 40 people screamed my name at once, the way a crowd does when it has all understood the same thing in the same second. And the sky over the Assen Weir opened like somebody had cut a sack. Gold falling in the dark makes a sound like hail on slate, and it came down on the mill roof and the bank and the water for the better part of a minute, and none of it was money to me. It was the volume of the screaming, made visible. Crown came down edge on into the mill pond, about a foot from my face, while I was going into the water, and I swallowed one on the way past. A gold crown in the throat is a gold crown in the throat. I coughed it into my hand at the bottom of the race, and put it in my mouth again because I had no pocket I could reach. The bank wanted me to pull him. Everybody on a bank always wants you to pull. I have taken beams off people twice, and you never pull, because the thing holding him is also the thing holding the water off him, and the paddle across his chest was the only reason his head was up. So I stood in the tail race in November water, with a boy's face a hand's breadth from mine, and I priced the job out loud, because that is how I think, and I cannot do it any other way. And the whole bank heard me do it. 3 problems, I said. The wheel wants stopping. The sluice wants shutting. The paddle wants lifting. Do them in the wrong order and we drown him ourselves. And the sluice is first because everything else is just water until the sluice is shut. Somebody on the bank shouted that we did not have time to be told a list. Ivy Bissell, standing in the water to her waist, told them to shut their mouths and let the man count. She had watched me work under her own floor for 2 hours in an order and she had decided about me. The miller wanted the wheel stopped first because the wheel was his and he could see it. I told him the wheel was the last of the 3 and he argued about it with the water coming over a boy's chin. And Ivy Bissell told him to go and get the wedges out of his own loft, which stopped the argument by giving him a job. The rack was jammed on a broken tooth with the whole river holding it. You cannot wind that. What you can do is take the load off it for 1 second, which means wedging the gate from underneath, in the flow, blind, and I sent 2 men for the oak wedges out of the mill loft and 1 for the maul. They came back with 3 wedges and no maul because the maul was in a locked shed, so we used a granite curbstone off the mill yard, 2 men on it, and I lay along the sill in the water and set the wedges by feel while they hammered above me and hit my hand twice. The gate lifted 1/4 of an inch off the broken tooth and the miller wound it and it came down, and the noise stopped. The race went from a river to a trickle in about 10 seconds, and every one of those 10 seconds is still in me somewhere. Then the wheel, which is a bar in the spokes and 4 men leaning on it. Then the paddle, which had gone across the boy's chest and pinned his jacket into the shroud boards and could not be lifted and had to be cut off him with a knife 1 seam at a time by hand under water. That is where my shoulder went. I had my left arm up under the paddle, taking the weight while my right hand worked the knife, and I heard it go before I felt it. And I kept my arm where it was because taking it away meant a paddle on a boy's chest. Cutting a jacket off a boy underwater is slow, and it cannot be hurried, and everybody on that bank hated me for how slow it was. You get 2 fingers in behind the cloth, you feel for the seam with the knife blade laid flat, and you take 4 inches at a time, and you come up and breathe and go down again. He came out at about the small hours. He was white and cold and furious, which is exactly what you want, because a furious boy is a breathing boy. He was sick down his mother's front, and then he asked whether his boots were still on, and they were not. The shoulder never came back. It sits about a thumb's width lower than the other one, and it will not hold anything above my head for more than a minute, and I am a roofer, and it has cost me more than everything else in this business put together. I did not sleep. At first light, I went back down to the mill pond with a rake and a hook and a borrowed length of line, because a minute of gold had gone into that water, and gold does not float away, and the unpaid balance was still the only number in my head. Fenn Ford had dived it in the dark. Of course they had. They had been in that pond with lanterns while I was lying on a floor with my arm strapped up, and by the time I got there, the bottom of the mill pond had been raked over twice by people I had known my entire life. I got 31 crowns. Out of a fall that 40 people watched come down in front of a village of 90, I recovered 31, and I stood in the shallows with them in my hat and did the sum I did not want to do. I have never once asked where the rest went, and I am never going to. That pond paid Assen Ford for a boy. They took it out of the water in the dark, and I took a shoulder out of the race, and the accounts on that night balance better than anything I have arranged on purpose since. It is the reason the village turned, and it is not the reason anybody thinks. Gratitude did not do it. They had my money in their houses. A man who has your money needs you to be worth having taken it from, and by the Sunday I could not walk to the ford without being greeted. Sedge mended my rake for nothing. Fossick's wife, who had gone inside rather than look at me a fortnight before, came out with a plate. They said my name at me constantly for about a fortnight, which paid me 14 silver and then wore out entirely, exactly as it always does. That did not bother me, and it was the first time it had not bothered me, because I had finally seen the machine clearly. The machine was a bad hour. Assen Ford went quiet again, because nothing in Assen Ford was going wrong anymore. Pike sent word up from Grail on the Tuesday. A cellar under the wool hall had taken water, and something had died in it, and the wool factors would not go down. And Pike wrote that he needed a man who does not mind the dark and would not be particular about the smell. That letter is the funniest document I own. The constable who fined me 2 silver and took me in over a wedding cart wrote to ask a favor, and he spelled my name correctly at the top of it, having checked it with me twice under different circumstances. What was down that cellar was a dog and about 100 weight of spoiled fleece, and the wool factors had been paying 2 men a week to stand at the top of the steps arguing about whose job it was, which is the most expensive way of doing nothing I have ever been shown. I did that cellar in 2 nights, and got 3 crowns and a fee from the wool hall on top, and Pike stood at the top of the steps the entire time with a lantern and would not come down, and told me on the second night that Grail had been wrong about me and was not going to say so. And then the thing happened that changed the shape of everything, which is that 2 sendings arrived from villages I have never worked in my life. One from Nettlestair, 11 miles up the Sallow, about a well. One from a place called Harrow Deeping, that I had to have described to me. Neither of them had ever seen my face. Both of them had heard it off a drover who had heard it off Tulk, which is a chain of 3 mouths and about 10 days. I sat in my kitchen with 2 letters on the table and a shoulder I could not lift. And for about an hour, I was as happy as I have been in this whole business, because a man being sent for from that far away is a man with a trade instead of a trick. And a boy came down on Thursday with the Harrow Deeping letter cancelled, not postponed, withdrawn with regret, no reason given, and they had sent a copper with the boy for his trouble which they could not afford. I gave him bread and sat him down before I asked him anything, because he had walked 9 miles to deliver a cancellation and had clearly been dreading the last of it since about the 4th mile. I asked him why. He said he did not know. I asked him who had told them to. He said he did not know that either, and he was 10 years old and he was telling the truth, and he went home with my copper and a piece of my pickled beans. I sat with that cancelled letter for a long time, because nobody cancels a well. A well does not stop being broken because somebody has had a thought about it. Somebody had been to Harrow Deeping between the sending and the Thursday and had said something and had been believed. Both of those villages are on Pell's circuit. I checked it against the post at the ford, where the whole circuit is chalked up 4 times a year, and there they were, in the same hand as the date he was coming back for the rest of my father's 400 crowns. So the trade exists. Somebody 11 miles away can want me in the small hours, and I can be there, and that is an income no market and no mourner and no hired mouth has ever given me. That is the good news. And it is real. The bad news is a man I have never met who walked into Harrow Deeping between the sending and the Thursday, said 1 sentence to 4 frightened elders, and was believed. He is a fortnight ahead of any rumor I can start, and I did not find out for another month how much of the map he had got to before me. The first thing I did with the millpond money was buy a horse, and every sensible person I knew told me not to. Sedge said a horse eats whether you work or not. Ivy Bissell said a horse is a way of owing a farrier. We're both right, and I bought her anyway. A 15-year-old grey mare off a drover at Grail for 18 crowns. Because a man who can be at Nettlestair by noon is a different trade from a man who can be there by Thursday. That, 1 wasted day riding to a job in Braycombe that had been done by the time I got there, 4 days of feeding the men who follow me about, and the Grail cellar money going straight back out into a farrier's hand, left me with 14 crowns. 14. Against the balance on Pell's receipt. I did that sum on the road at least 4 times, and it came out the same on every occasion, which is the trouble with sums. I had 2 sendings in my coat, and one of them had been cancelled, so I went to the cancelled one first, because I wanted to hear it from somebody's mouth. Harrow Deeping did not let me get to the village. There were 4 of them standing in the road at the head of the lane, and one was the man who had signed the letter about the well, and he had his hat in his hands before I was off the horse, which told me everything. I had come 9 miles in the rain, and I had a speech about wells worked out on the road, and I did not get 1 line of it out, because the man with the hat started talking before my boot was down and did not stop until he had said all of it. They had been waiting since dawn. That is the thing that stayed with me. They had put 4 men on a road at first light in case a stranger came, because they did not want me to have to be turned around in front of their own houses. The man with the hat told me straight out, Pell had come through 6 days before with an offer. Their arrears stood at 91 crowns after 2 bad years, and he would carry it another 6 months, granted on the spot, on his own word, if they undertook not to send for me. I asked whether he had said why. The man said Pell had been very pleasant about it, and had said only that he preferred a quiet circuit, and that anybody who has money falling out of the air near him tends to attract people, and Harrow Deeping had enough troubles. Then he said the thing that cost him something to say. He said the well can wait 6 months, and the arrears cannot, and he asked me whether I would have chosen differently in his boots, and I would not have. I said so. He shook my hand, and I got back on the horse. He did not stop me working. He stopped people needing me. A village that has been carried for 6 months does not go looking for a man who comes at night for nothing, and he did not stop doing it for the next 2 years. Nettlestair is 2 miles further up the Sallow, and it is a road village, which means 1 street, a water trough, and everybody's business happening outdoors. I got there at noon and there was nobody at the well I had been sent for. They were all up the street at the Crow House, and the reason was a writ for 26 crowns against a widow called Mara Crow, and a cart due at noon for her son. Got the story off the woman next door in about 90 seconds, which is what a road village is for. Her husband died owing on seed. The debt had been sold on twice. The boy is called Owen, and he is 19, and he sets hurdles, and hurdle setting is not literate work. So he was going as labor at 8 silver a week. 8 silver a week, and 6 of it goes back to the estate for his keep, so 2 silver a week comes off the writ. 2 silver a week against 26 crowns is 5 years, and I did that sum standing in the street and then wished I had not, because Owen Crow was 4 feet away and heard me say the number. Owen Crow was standing against his mother's wall with his hands in his pockets and a face on him, like a man waiting for a tooth to be pulled, and he had been standing there since 7, and nobody in that street had been able to think of one useful thing to say to him. Pell's man had been there since 8, and it was not Pell. A quiet one called Rusk who does the arranging, and he had made Mara Crow an offer in her own kitchen with the door shut, and she had brought it out into the street to answer it, which is the whole reason any of what follows happened. The offer was a private arrangement. The boy stays, the writ goes quiet, and Mara puts her name to something in the Hesper book that would not be read out anywhere. Rusk had been very reasonable about it, the way Rusk is always very reasonable about it. She turned it down in front of 14 of her neighbors and said why loudly, and what she said is the best piece of business advice I have ever been given for free. The last 3 families that took a quiet arrangement in Nettlestair are not in Nettlestair anymore. Nobody could tell her where they went. A deal with no witnesses can be changed later by the only person holding the paper, and the family finds out about it in a room with the door shut. So she said in the street that whatever was going to be done to her would be done in the open where the village could see it. Rusk wrote something in a small book and went to meet the cart. Rusk asked her, before he went, whether she was quite sure, and he asked it the way a man asks a woman about weather. She said she was. He said that a public settlement is entered publicly and that she should not expect any part of it to be forgotten, and she said she was counting on precisely that. And I went down the well. That sentence is all of my judgment that morning, and I have never managed to make it sound better than it is. I have thought about it a great deal since. The sensible thing was to stay in the street and be useful, but I had been sent for about a well. The well was fouled. The village had asked me 11 days ago and had got nothing but silence out of me since, and I had exactly one thing to trade in that place, which was work. So I was 30 feet down a Nettlestair well with a bucket and a hook in the dark at noon when Pell arrived. Early. He is always early. The cart was loaded and moving before anybody got a rope down to me, and I came up that shaft with one arm and my teeth. 2 men on the rope got me out in under a minute once they understood what the shouting was about, and I came over that wellhead wet to the chest with a bucket hook still in my hand, and the whole street was already moving up the road ahead of me. I caught them 100 yards past the last house. I got in front of the horse and put my hand on the bridle, and 2 carters came off the tail, and Pell said good afternoon and told them to stand. I had 14 crowns, and I counted them out on the tailgate one at a time, in front of the village, in front of the boy sitting on his own box with his ankles roped, and his mother and Rusk and 11 miles of road behind me. 14 against 26, and every single person on that road watched me get to the last coin and then keep patting my coat as though there might be a 15th in it somewhere, which there was not, and which there had not been for 3 days. Pell waited. He did not gloat, and I could never decide whether that made it better or worse. He waited until my hand stopped moving, and then he said that 14 against 26 leaves 12, and asked whether I had anything further. That was the moment. Standing on a road with my whole fortune on a tailgate and my arithmetic wrong in public, in front of the exact people I had spent a fortnight telling to send for me. So I turned round and asked the village for 12 crowns, out loud, household by household, which is not a thing anybody had ever done to Nettlestair before, and is not a thing I had ever done to anybody. It was not a collection, and it was not a plea. I stood on that road and I priced it like a job, because pricing it like a job is the only thing I know how to do, and I said the number and then I said what it bought. 12 crowns, I said. 22 houses in this village. That is roughly 11 silver a house, and I know that is a fortnight's bread. What it buys is a boy who sets hurdles staying in the street where he sets them, instead of 13 years on somebody's estate. Nobody moved for what felt like a year and was probably 4 seconds. Then Mara Crow took a purse out of her apron, walked to the tailgate, and put down 3 crowns and 8 silver, which was everything she had in the world, and said that was hers and who was next. She spent her standing first. The thing I did not understand until she did it. She had a widow's credit in that street, and she put all of it on the table before she asked anybody else for a copper, and after that, nobody could refuse without refusing her. Owen Crow tried to stop her. He said from the cart, with his ankles roped, that it was his debt and his father's before that, and he was not having the street pay for it, and his mother told him that it had stopped being his about 4 minutes ago and to be quiet. The wheelwright came second with 2 crowns, then a woman with a jar. then 4 households at once, and after that it stopped being a queue and started being an argument about who had more, which is the noise a village makes when it has decided something. 19 households out of 22. 3 did not, and I have never asked which, and Mara Crow will not say. It came to 12 crowns and 4 silver, and about a seventh of it was in coppers. There was a silver spoon on that tailgate. There was a jar of coppers that a woman had clearly been keeping for something specific because she looked at it for a long moment before she tipped it out. And while they were doing it, they were saying my name to each other up and down that road in the way people do when they are working out what to give, and about 14 coppers came down out of the sky and landed among the money on the tailgate. I picked them up and put them on the pile. 19 households watched a man be paid by nothing at all in daylight on a public road and then go on counting somebody else's coppers, and that did more for me in Nettlestair than the 12 crowns did. Then Pell had to weigh it, and that is the payoff, and it took 20 minutes, and I would sit through it again tomorrow. Got out the little brass hand scale, and he weighed a village's small change on the tailgate of his own cart, coin by coin, in the road, in front of every person whose good opinion is the only thing he actually sells. There is no dignified way to weigh 400 coppers on a hand scale. It goes 11 at a time. He had to do it about 40 times, standing at the tail of his own cart, with a village watching him do arithmetic he could have done in his head if the amount had arrived in gold. Coppers do not weigh clean. There were 7 bad ones, and he set them aside, and Mara Crow replaced them out of her neighbors. A silver spoon is not coin at all, and he had to be asked in public whether he would take it, and he could not say no. And he took it and wrote it into the book as plate. 26 crowns and 4 silver received. He gave back the 4 silver. He is exactly correct, and he will always be exactly correct, and it is the most frightening thing about him. Then he had his man cut the rope off Owen Crow's ankles and hand a 19-year-old boy down off a cart into his mother's arms in front of 19 households that had just bought him. His tick broke. He had said nothing personal, friend twice that morning, once to Mara in the kitchen and once to me at the tailgate. When he handed the writ back, marked settled, he started to say it, and he got as far as nothing personal, and then he looked at the road full of people and he stopped and did not finish it. I heard him not finish it, and so did the wheelwright, and so did Mara Crow, and 12 crowns is cheap for the sound of a man running out of his own sentence in front of the people he says it to. I pushed my luck, because I always do. I asked him in the open to read out who had settled it. He said the village had. I said the village and who else, and he said the village and the alderman. I said my name is Fenn Alder and asked him to say it. He looked at me the way you look at a stain, and he said that he had been serving paper for 20 years, that he had never yet used a debtor's given name, and that he was not going to begin on a road in Nettlestair. Then he got back on the cart. I did not know why it mattered to him. I only knew it was the one thing in the kingdom I could not buy, and that a man who will not spend 4 letters on me is a man I do not understand, and I do not like not understanding a mechanism. I asked Mara Crow that evening whether the village would make my 14 crowns back up, because it had put up nearly as much as I had, and I had come off that road with nothing at all. She would not have it. She said the 14 was the reason anybody put anything on that tailgate, and that if I took it back it turned into a loan, and the street would be paying it off for 2 years. What Mara Crow did next was worth more than anything I did that day. Nettlestair is on the Sallow Road, and the trough is at her end of the street, and from that afternoon she talked to every drover who stopped to water. She did not tell them about the coins. She told them about the cart. She told them that a man came 11 miles and put 14 crowns on a tailgate for a boy he had never met, and that if you are in trouble on this road, you send for Fenn Alder. That went up and down the Sallow at the speed of drovers, which is about 15 miles a day in both directions, and it cost me nothing, and I could not have bought it for 200 crowns. Ottilie Crane told me later that no troop alive plants a word that fast. I slept in her woodshed that night because I had nothing to pay for a bed with, and in the morning she gave me breakfast and a list of 4 names on the road north who owed her something, and told me to use them badly if I had to. By the time I was back at Austinford, there was a sending waiting from Marrowgate and another from a hamlet I had to be shown on a map, and Pell had already moved. He came through his whole circuit the following month a full week ahead of his chalk dates, all of them, one after another, so that a village found the cart in its street on a Tuesday when the post said the Tuesday after. You cannot send for a man in a week that has not happened yet. He took 4 bodies off that circuit in 10 days, and not one household had time to write a letter, and I heard about every one of them afterwards, which is the only way I ever hear about anything. And the sendings kept coming in from further off, from places I had to be shown on a map. Every one of them at 3 in the morning, and every one of them away from the road that goes north. I had not seen my wife since a Thursday in October, and I was riding harder every week to get further from her. A letter came to me in a lime sack at Marrowgate off a woman called Nan Skeel, who had done 4 years at Cold Harrow and had 10 days of freedom on her when she handed it over. She had walked it down from the Marrowgate side with a lime crew and had asked 4 people on the quay for a man who gets paid by the sky, and the 4th one had pointed at me, which tells you what I had already become on that road without earning any of it. She would not take money for it. She said the woman who wrote it had done her keep book for her and got her out 4 days early on a rounding, and that anybody who can find 4 days in a keep book gets a letter carried for nothing. It was a strip off the edge of a bill of lading with 4 words on it in my wife's hand. "Do not come here." Read it a dozen times on the Marrowgate key. 4 words, no name at the top, no name at the bottom, because a bonded servant writing to her husband is writing evidence. And every one of those 4 words was correct, and I was on the Cold Harrow Road within the hour. Cold Harrow sits 3 days on beyond Grail, where the green stops and the chalk starts, and you smell it before you see it. It is a bond estate and a chalk works, 190 bonded on the books, a wall the height of a man and a gate with a keep on it. You do not climb that wall because the ground inside it is white and there is no cover on it anywhere, and a man crossing it in daylight can be seen from the house for 400 yards. What goes through that gate every day is lime. Cold Harrow burns chalk into quicklime and sends it out and brings coal in, and the coal carts come up from the river with 6 men on them to unload, and nobody counts 6 men very carefully. I paid the driver 3 crowns to be the 7th, which was 3 of the 11 I had made on Mara Crow's 4 names in the fortnight since Nettlestair. He took it and then he warned me, twice, and I have thought since that he earned the 3 crowns entirely for the warnings and not at all for the ride. The first warning was that Cold Harrow's steward counts men off a cart when the paper says a number. The second was better. He said that half the men on his cart had done bond somewhere, and that a man who gets caught inside is a man they can put a price on, and prices at Cold Harrow have a way of being paid by somebody else. The other 6 had their own reasons for not asking me questions, 2 of them being that they had done bond themselves, and 1 of them being a name that was not his. I got on the cart anyway with a coal sack over my shoulders and my hands black, and about a mile short of the gate, the sky started paying me. 2 coppers came down in the coal on the way up the lane, and both of them rang. A man called Neb, who was sitting on the tail with his boots off, looked at the coal, looked at the sky, looked at me, and I coughed, and he decided to mind his own business, and I have been grateful to Neb ever since. At the gate it was worse. The steward's man was walking the cart with a tally board, and I had my head down, and a copper came off the canopy and landed on the board in his hand. He looked at it for what felt like a fortnight. Then he put it in his pocket, because a copper that arrives on your tally board is a copper, and he waved the cart through, and I have never been closer to 4 years in a chalk pit in my life. The unloading yard is behind the stock barns, and it takes about 20 minutes for 6 men to get a ton of coal off a cart in 12 sacks. That is the clock. That was always the clock, and the driver told me so twice, and I still spent the first 3 minutes of it standing in a barn doorway being useless. Housekeeper found me. Maud Ivry is a square woman with a ring of keys, and she came round the end of the barn, took one look at a coal man standing where no coal man has business, and said one word, which was barn. Then she went and got my wife, and she did it without asking me a single question, which I did not understand at the time and understood completely about an hour later. I have had 4 minutes in my life that I would buy back at any price, and those were them. Rona came round the corner of the stock barn with a keep book under her arm and her sleeves rolled, and about 9 weeks of that place in her, and she did not run, and she did not cry. The first thing she said was, "How long?" And I said the length of an unloading, and she said, "Then talk fast and do not tell me anything I can work out for myself." She asked what she was allowed to know, which is the sort of question a woman asks when she has thought about being questioned afterwards. I said everything. She said, "Then say it in the order it matters, and do not tell her anything she cannot use behind a wall." I told her the rule in about 30 words. She listened to all of it with her head on one side, and then told me she had most of it already, and I asked her how, because she has not seen a single coin fall since the square. She said she had been listening. There are 190 bonded at Cold Harrow, and about 50 of them talk about the coin man in the south, and she had been counting which of them meant a man and which of them were telling a story, and the difference is audible if you have heard it once. She heard it once. She heard it on our own floorboards at 2 in the morning with blood coming out of my eyebrow, and she is the only living person who knows what full meaning sounds like from the inside, and she has been sorting mouths by ear ever since. She gave me the 2 things she had made, and both of them were better than anything I had built in 3 months. The first was a strip of sacking with 14 place names scratched into it with a nail. Cold Harrow buys and sells bodies with the 11 estates on that circuit and takes debtors off 40 villages, and every one of them comes in talking and goes out talking. She had not asked a single person for help. That is what I could not get over standing in that barn. She had asked people where they were going, which is a question a woman is allowed to ask while she is carrying linen past somebody, and she had built the thing out of the answers. She had been asking every departing servant one question, which was, "Where do you go now?" and then telling them who to send for when it goes wrong there. 14 towns, written down as a list, in order, with the ones that owe her a favor marked. I stood in a stock barn and looked at 14 towns on a bit of sacking and understood that my wife had been running my business from inside a bond estate the whole time I was earning 4 coppers a week, being hated in Grail. The second thing was a man. There is a bonded laborer at Cold Harrow called Corse who was 6 days past the end of his term and still working because nobody had told him to stop and he had nowhere in particular to be, and the estate was in no hurry to notice. She said, "Do not try to take him out." She said, "Say his name where the lime crew can hear it, on your way out, and let the estate decide it does not want an argument." Then she asked me how many sacks were off the cart. I did not know. That was the whole trouble with the 4 minutes. I could hear the sacks going down, and I had stopped counting them at about the third, and she had not because she never stops counting anything. 9 left, she said. So here is the only argument we are going to have time for. You are going to want to buy mouths again, in bulk, because you have found out that the trade is real, and you think the answer is more. I said the answer probably was more. She said that was the difference between us and always had been, and that I count coins and she counts people, and that 100 mouths saying my name out of habit are worth less than one that wants something. I said 100 mouths cost less to get than one man in trouble. She said that was true, and that it was going to be the most expensive true thing I ever believed. 6 sacks. Then she took hold of the front of my coat with both hands, and she looked past my ear at the barn door, and she said, Fenn Alder. Once. Properly. 9 weeks of it in 2 words. And a gold crown came down between us in the straw and hit the barn floor like a dropped hammer, and we both stood absolutely still with our eyes shut, and outside the barn the unloading did not stop. She put her foot over it. Then she said, very quietly, that she was never going to do that again, and I said that was a stupid thing to say, and she said it was not stupid, it was arithmetic, because she had just found out that the loudest thing in any room I am in is a woman loving me. 4 sacks. She told me to write to her through Maud Ivory and never through the gate, that the keep book records who takes letters, and that she was well and eating, and it was nothing. 3 sacks. She told me about Maud Ivory in about a dozen words, which were that the housekeeper is not a friend and is not an enemy, and feeds 190 people on nothing, and that anybody who wants something out of Cold Harrow should be asking her what she needs rather than what she thinks. 2 sacks. She asked me what the writ stood at, and I said 330, and she said, good, that is a number, and go and get it, and stop coming here. Then, the last sack went down, and I went out of the back of the barn and across the yard, and the steward's man was standing at the tail of the cart counting 7 men onto a cart that had brought 6. There is no talking your way out of arithmetic. They had me on the ground in the lime dust in under 10 seconds, and the driver looked at the sky and said nothing at all, which was the correct thing for him to do, and I hope nobody made him pay for it. And Pell was on the estate. Of course he was. Cold Harrow's bond paper is Hesper paper, and Hesper paper is his circuit, and he inspects their bonded 4 times a year, and it was the quarter, and he came out of the counting house with his hat in his hand and a napkin still in his collar. He looked at me on the ground in the lime dust and said, to the steward and not to me, that this one was his. So I did the only thing I had, which was noise. I got up on my knees in the lime, and I said, at the top of my voice, to the 6 men on the cart and the 4 men in the yard and the steward and Pell, that there was a man on this estate called Corse who had been free for 6 days and was still shoveling. I said it 3 times. I gave them his name, his gang, and the date his bond ended, because my wife had given me all 3. And I said it in front of a lime crew who go back down that road every day and talk to everybody on it. A gangmaster told me to shut my mouth and put a boot near my head to help me decide about it. I said it again with my face in the lime and got most of it out. And then Neb said the name back from the cart, once, loudly, checking he had heard it right. And after that, it was in the yard and could not be taken out again. The yard went quiet in an ugly way. Pell asked the steward whether that was correct. The steward said he would have to look. Pell said pleasantly that he would wait and stood there in the lime dust with his napkin in his collar while a man went for the keep book. It was correct. Corse had been free since the previous Wednesday and had not been told, and it was not malice, it was that nobody had looked, which at Cold Harrow is the same thing arriving by a different road. Pell had Corse fetched, had his discharge read out, and put him on the cart with the lime crew inside 10 minutes, and did it with the air of a man tidying a shelf. He does not fight on ground he cannot win on. He has never once fought on ground he cannot win on. Then he tidied me. He priced the intrusion at 20 crowns for the estate's trouble, told the steward it would be entered against the Alder writ so no cash need change hands here, and wrote it in front of me in a small book. 350. Then he did the thing that I did not see coming and should have, and he explained it to me in the yard without any pleasure in it at all, which is what I cannot forgive. He moved my wife off housework and into the chalk gang, and not for spite. He said so, and it is true. The chalk is the 1/4 of Cold Harrow with no visitors, no deliveries, no lime crews, and no keep book contact, and it is therefore where you put a bond servant whose husband climbs into carts. He said it the way a man says he is putting a good tool somewhere dry. He was protecting an asset, 20 crowns for the trouble, and 4 years of somebody's lungs for the tidiness, and he wrote both of them down and neither of them cost him a moment. Corse did not understand what had happened to him for about an hour. He kept asking the lime crew whether the discharge was real paper, and one of them read it to him 3 times, and then he asked whether he was allowed to take his own blanket, and nobody could tell him. And in the end, he left it behind. Maud Ivory walked me to the gate herself, which was not her job. At the gate, she gave me 2 dates out of the keep book, being the days on which those estates buy and sell bodies between them, and said that if I ever wanted to buy somebody out, I had better know which Tuesday to be standing there. I asked her why. She said she has fed 190 people on nothing for 7 years, and has now watched 2 men in one afternoon decide what happens to them, and that she has made up her mind which of the 2 she would rather owe a favor to. Then she opened the gate. I went south on that cart with 14 towns on a bit of sacking in my boot, 2 dates in my head, and a free man sitting beside me who kept turning round to look at the gate as though it might change its mind. Course talked the entire way to the river. He had a sister at Whitlow and a plan involving hurdles. I have never seen a man so pleased, and I could not look at him properly, and I sat on a lime cart in the dark with the best haul of my life in my boot and did the sum that was actually in front of me. 20 crowns added because I came. All that work of hers behind that wall traded for 4 minutes of mine. And a woman who does not cough now going into a chalk pit for the next 4 years because her husband could not do the one thing she asked him to do in writing. I did that to her. Pell only wrote it down in a small book in the yard, with a napkin still in his collar, and the estate will have the entry in its keep book long after everybody standing in that dust is dead. 14 towns on a strip of sacking, the increased balance on his paper, nothing in my coat but the sacking and 2 dates, and 4 years running on a clock that I had just added 20 crowns and a chalk pit to. 3 months on the 14 names, alone, sleeping in carts, and the last job of it was a bridge pile at a hamlet called Stint that was standing on nothing at all. Stint sits on a bend of the Ossen with a 3-arch bridge, and the middle pile had been undercut since the autumn. When the spring water came down, it was going to take the pile out, and the pile was going to take the middle arch, and Stint would be 7 miles from its own market. They had asked a mason from Grail who had said 14 crowns and could come in April. April is after the spring water, so they sent to Nettlestair, and Nettlestair sent them to Mara Crow, and Mara Crow told them to send for me, which is how a thing on a bit of sacking turns into work. You do not shore a pile from above. You go in the water, and you drive raking props against the bed on the downstream side, and the water is chest deep and moving, and it was the second week of March, and I could not feel my hands after the first hour. Raking prop that is not footed on something is a stick you have given the river, so the first day was not props at all. It was feeling along the bed with our boots for sound gravel, marking it with stakes, and dropping 4 sole plates that took 4 men each to walk into position. 15 men of Stint stood in that river with me for 2 days. That is the sort of thing that does not get written down anywhere. A village that has no money will give you 15 men and a plank dinner and then apologize for it. And on the bank, watching, stood the 19 people who now follow me about wherever I go, in all weathers, without being invited and without ever quite going away. I feed them. I have never worked out how not to. They started at 5 after the Bissell floor, and they were 19 by Stint, and about half of them are decent, and about half of them are waiting for me to be struck by lightning in a useful direction. What they do at a river job is stand in the shallows downstream with their hats, because coins come down where I am, and where I was that week was in 4 feet of moving water, and gold in a river goes downstream at the speed of the river. Lost 11 crowns into the Ossen at Stint in 2 days, and got 7 of them back off men who brought them to me, which says more about that hamlet than anything else I could tell you about it. The other 4 are in the gravel below the bridge, and Stint knows it, and Stint has left them there. The pile went in on the second evening, 4 raking props and a sill, and the miller's wife counted the arch as sound, and the village fed everybody. And while I was eating, a traded servant walked into the yard with a letter for me. She had come out of Cold Harrow to an estate at Harrow Deeping in a swap of 4 bodies, which is a thing that happens on the second Tuesday, which is a date Maud Ivry had put in my head. Rona had written on the inside of a piece of packing paper, and it was 1 line. The line said, "Do Whitlow before break home." It did not say why, it did not ask how I was, and it did not have a name at either end of it, because a woman writing out of a bond estate writes nothing a steward could hold up in a room. I had been going to do Bracombe, because Bracombe is closer and has a fair, and a man works where the people are. I sat on a plank at Stint and could not for the life of me work out how a woman in a chalk pit knew what order I should work 14 towns in. I argued with a piece of packing paper for about an hour. Then I asked myself what she had that I did not, and the answer was Maud Ivry, who reads every keep book on that circuit and knows which body goes to which estate on which Tuesday, and who walks down to the chalk with the rations. So I did Whitlow. It is grain and ricks, and its granary had a sprung roof tie. 4 days earned 15 crowns and put my name before a market serving 14 villages. The smaller Bracombe roof would have earned 4 and left the story inside 1 village. She was right, and she has been right about the order of things every single time since. My wife is at the bottom of a chalk pit, hearing the kingdom secondhand off a housekeeper with a ration basket, and she is still reading it better than I am with a horse. By the middle of April, I had 206 crowns, and I had them in coin in my own hands, having started that winter with 14, and having given all 14 of those away on a road in Nettlestair. 206 against the whole sum. I could see it. For the first time since the square, I could actually see the end of it, and I made every mistake a man makes when he can see the end of something. First mistake was going back to Anselm Thryle, who had refused to touch my money in the autumn, and who I was now going to ask for 350 crowns of his. I had it worked out on the road. The stream is real. Everybody in Grail can see it is real. A money changer lends against a stream all day long, against a harvest, against a wool clip, against a ship. I would take the whole sum now, buy my wife back in May, and pay it off out of takings by autumn. I had 206 crowns in a bag on his counter to prove it with, which I thought was the strongest argument any man had ever walked into a changer's yard holding. He looked at the bag for about 2 seconds and then did not look at it again for every bit of the rest of the conversation. He heard me out in his yard with his hands behind his back. Then he refused me in 3 sentences and I have never got out from under any of them. He said that a harvest is in the ground and a wool clip is on a sheep, and both of them are still there if the man who owns them drops dead. He asked me where mine was. I said in the mouths of the kingdom, and he said that was the first true thing I had said. And he gave me my own arithmetic back, the arithmetic I had done out loud at a horse trough in front of a wool factor who evidently talks. Bought mouths pay 3 and die. Hated mouths die inside a fortnight. So the stream is made of people meaning you today, and nobody has ever secured a loan against how somebody feels this Tuesday. I said the stream had run for 4 months. He said that a thing which stops the day people stop needing you is not security, it is weather, and that he does not lend against weather, and that when I found something that would still be worth money on the morning after I was disliked, I should come back. I walked out of that yard with 206 crowns I could not turn into the full release sum and no way to leave them anywhere safe, which is how I came to be carrying the entire fortune myself on the Marrowgate Road in a cart with 19 followers and no guards, like a complete fool. Marrowgate is where the Ossen widens, and the ferry is the only crossing for 15 miles. It is a chain ferry with a ramp at each side, and it takes 2 carts or a couple of dozen men and a horse, and Hesk has run it for 30 years and dislikes everybody equally, which I have come to think of as a form of honesty. I got there at noon, and I needed a message run to Braycombe, 9 miles over the hill, to tell Audley Crane's people that I would be at the fair by the end of the week, and that what I wanted off a troop was one word put into 11 towns. There was a queue for the ferry, and I could not go myself. There was a girl on the quay wall who had been watching my cart since it came down the hill, 11 years old, all elbows, permanently out of breath even sitting still. I asked her if she knew anybody who could run 9 miles. She said she was somebody who could run it. I said I would give a copper. She asked whose message it was, and I said Fenn Alder, and she said she would be back by dusk, which I did not believe, and she was gone up the hill before I had the copper out of my coat. Then the ferry loaded, and the sky paid me in front of everybody, which it does about 4 times a day, and which I had stopped noticing months before, and which I should have gone on noticing a great deal more carefully than I did. 4 coins. 1 silver and 3 coppers in about 90 seconds, coming down out of a clear day onto the deck of a chain ferry with 14 people standing on it. One of them went into the river, one of them bounced off a barrel, and a drover picked it up and handed it back to me without a word. And on the far bank, there were 12 men sitting on the grass who were not waiting to cross, had no carts, no beasts, and no baggage, and had been there long enough that Hesk had stopped looking at them. Sarn Ruddock came down the far ramp while the chain was still running. He is a big, untidy man with a length of knotted cord round his wrist, and he laughs at the wrong moments, and he did not draw anything, and neither did any of the 12, because they did not need to. He asked whether he might do a sum out loud. Then he did it, standing on the ramp in front of every passenger, and it was funny for about the first half of it, and I heard people laughing, including me. He said a road captain's trouble is that most men are worth less than the cost of stopping them. A drover with wool is a week of moving wool. A pilgrim is a bad meal. He said he had spent 12 years working out what a thing is worth against what it weighs, and he had never been so pleased with an answer as he was with mine. Because I do not have a purse, he said. I have a day's takings, and a day's takings has this quality that a wool clip does not, which is that it happens again tomorrow whether anybody robs me or not. Then he stopped being funny. He said, and he was correct, that everybody on that ferry had just watched money fall out of the sky onto me, and that he had 4 separate men tell him about it before he ever bothered to come and look. One of the passengers, a wool factor with a mule, asked whether his own goods were at risk. Ruddock told him no, not today, and told him why in one sentence, which is that a man who robs everybody on a ferry has to leave the county, and a man who robs one person on it can work that crossing for years. He took the bag off the cart himself. He counted it out on the ramp planks in front of the passengers because he wanted it witnessed, and he called out the number when he got to it. 195 crowns. He said that was a fair split. I said there had been no split. He said there had, and that he had left me the cart, the horse, the shoulder, the 19 followers, and tomorrow, and that in his trade leaving a man his tomorrow is generous. I asked him why he did not simply take me. It was a genuine question, and I regretted it before it was out of my mouth, and he liked me for asking it, which was worse. He said he had thought about it for 2 days. A man in a cellar stops being sent for, and a man nobody sends for stops being needed. Inside a month, nobody in Velen has any reason to mean a man in a cellar, and then you are feeding a prisoner who produces nothing, and the entire thing has cost you a cellar. He said that owning me was the poor man's version. He did not say what the rich man's version was. He had not worked it out yet, and I could see him not having worked it out yet, and that has cost me more sleep than the 195 did. Then he put the cord back on his wrist, said he would be seeing me, and said it as a courtesy rather than a threat, which from him is the same thing said politely. The 12 of them went up the bank and over the ridge and were gone in about 4 minutes. Nobody on that ferry moved for a while. A woman asked me if I was all right, and I said I was fine, in the voice of a man who was not fine. And then Hesk the ferryman spat over the side and jerked his chin at the water under the near ramp. He did not say one word to me. He has never said one word to me about it since. During the loading, with 12 men sitting in plain sight on his far bank, Hesk had taken one of my bags off the cart and wedged it under the ramp planking below the waterline, and then let me stand there and be robbed of the other one. I asked him afterwards why he had not simply kept it, since I would never have known it existed and nobody on that ferry had seen him put it there. He said that a man who steals off a robbed man is working for the robber, and that he had been running that chain for 30 years without working for anybody. Went in with my boots on. It is 4 feet of cold brown water under that ramp, and I got my hand on the canvas at the second try and came up with it against my chest, and the passengers made a noise I have not forgotten. 11 crowns. Out of 206, I sat on the ramp with my boots in the river and 11 gold crowns in a wet bag and did the only piece of arithmetic available, which was that 3 months of my life had just been sold for 11 crowns. Hesk said to nobody that he wants his crossing left out of other men's wars and that he had done that once and would not be doing it again, and would I please get off his ramp. I have paid full fare at Marrowgate ever since, and he has never let me pay more. And that is when the girl came back over the hill, at a pace that I would have described as impossible if I had been asked to put money on it 2 hours earlier, which by then I could not have done anyway. Bet Coyle had run to Braycombe and back, the whole distance each way over the ridge, inside the time she said, and she came down onto that quay with her hair stuck to her head and gave me Ottilie Crane's answer word for word without missing any of it. And she gave me the 2 other things nobody had asked her for. She had learned in the Braycombe yard that the fair was a week earlier than I had been told, and she had come back by the Drove Road because the hill track was cut, and she told me the Drove Road was 2 miles longer and 40 minutes faster and wet. I sat there in wet boots with everything I owned in a bag on my knees and listened to an 11-year-old give me better information than my entire 3 months had produced. I asked her who she ran for. She said for whoever paid, which was mostly the corn factor and the ferry, and that neither of them gave her anything but the run itself, and that she had been waiting since the spring for somebody to turn up who needed the same road twice. She named her terms before I could offer any. A copper a run, paid on arrival and not after. No lying to her about distances, because a runner who is lied to about distances makes a promise she cannot keep and then nobody sends for her again, and she keeps her own count of the runs on her own stick. I said done. She took a split hazel stick out of her belt, cut a notch in it, and asked when I wanted the next one. Ruddock's men were still visible on the ridge behind her when I hired the first employee of my life. I came into Braycombe Fair with 11 crowns, a runner, a wet bag, and the idea I had said out loud on my knees in the mud 6 months earlier and had never once had the money to try. 2 jobs on the way up paid for the road, a sprung cart shaft at Harrow Deeping, which they let me do because a village that will not send for you will still let you mend something while you are standing there, and a chimney at a place called Cold Ash that had been smoking a family out since Michaelmas. The idea has always been simple, and it has always been stupid. My wife said 4 letters in the dark and paid me a year's wages for it before breakfast. Velen holds 200,000 mouths, and I do not need love or hatred from any of them. I need all of them to say 4 letters once a day out of habit. Every honest attempt at that had failed. You cannot buy it, because bought speech is dead speech. You cannot force it. So the only door left was the one I had been walking past for months, which is that people say things every day that nobody paid them to say and nobody made them say. They say them because everybody else does. And there is one trade in Velen that does nothing else for a living. Braycombe Fair runs 3 days in the last week of April, and it is the biggest thing that happens in that valley. 4 valleys worth of people, a horse line, an ale row, 2 wrestling pitches, and about 50 stalls. And I walked into it with everything I had and no idea who I was looking for. Ottilie Crane's troupe works 11 towns a season, and they were pitched at the top end of the Braycombe Fairground between the horse lines and the ale, which is where you pitch if you understand your business. I found her behind the wagons with a painted board on her knees, adding up the day's takings, and I made the mistake of opening with the money. She did not look up. She said everybody opens with the money and it tells her nothing. And would I say the actual thing? So I said the actual thing. I need a word to stick in a season's worth of towns. She asked which word. I said my name, and that is when she put the chalk down and looked up at me properly for the first time. She did not laugh, and I have always liked her for it. She said that she had planted words for a soap cellar, a horse fair, 2 lords, and a religion, and that a name was harder than any of them, and asked me to give her my 3 best ideas so she could tell me why they were unusable. First was a song. She said songs are a season, and then a season is over, and that the ones that last are the ones about somebody dying. And did I want a kingdom singing about my death? That was the end of that idea in about 10 seconds. The second was a toast. She said a toast happens at night, in drink, 4 times a year, in a room, and that I would be buying the smallest number of mouths in the kingdom at the highest possible price in beer. The third was a joke, and she was hardest on the joke. She said a joke is used and then it is used up, and that I would be famous for a season and unbearable for the rest of my life, and that a man cannot live on being a punchline because a punchline gets tired and nothing gets tired faster. Then she told me her trade, and it is worth having, and I have used it in every single thing I have built since. She said a crowd does not repeat a word because the word is good. A crowd repeats a word because repeating it makes them one of the people who say it. The word is a door, and being inside is the thing being sold. And the moment saying it stops making you one of us, it stops moving. And no amount of shouting will start it again. So it has to be something people say to each other, she said, not something they say about you. And it has to have a hole in it that another person is meant to fill. I said a greeting, and she went very still. And then she said that was either the best idea anybody had brought her in her whole life or the most expensive. And that in her experience, those two are frequently the same idea seen at different distances. What I wanted was both words, because a piece of a name pays nothing at all, and I had learned that off 19 people in Grail calling me the Coin Man. She said 2 words is too long for a hail, and that people will shave it inside a fortnight, and I would be left with half a name and no income. I told her I would rather have no business than a hail that does not pay. She said that was the first sensible thing I had said all afternoon, and then she solved it in about 4 minutes, because that is what she is for. She made it a call and an answer. One says it, the other says it back. Fenn Alder going out, Fenn Alder coming home, both mouths whole, and the answer is the door. If you say it and nobody says it back, you are outside. Nobody in a market town can stand being outside for more than about 2 days. She tested it on 4 people before she would take a copper off me. She stopped a cheese seller, said it at him, waited, and watched his face do the thing a face does when it does not know whether it is being spoken to. Then she did it 3 more times and came back and told me it would need a fortnight and a hook. 18 crowns for the season. The towns, the act, the wagons, the fair circuit, and the drovers who drink with her people. I had 11 crowns on me, and she took 9 of them, and told me the rest was payable at Whitlow in September, and then she wrote it in her own book because she is not a fool either. And then the Criers and Heralds Company of Ambry turned up to explain that I was not allowed to do it. His name was Prine, and he was the company's advance man for the Northern Fairs, and he came down the horse lines with a fair steward beside him, and his voice already warmed up, because those people warm their voices the way a carter greases an axle. His claim was clean, and I could not answer it. Public speech for payment is the company's by charter. A man paying a troop to put a word into that many towns is buying a cry. The company sells cries. Therefore, I was an unlicensed, and he used that word as a noun about me 4 times in 2 minutes, and he was enjoying himself. Adelie's answer was the professional one. Her people are licensed as players. A line inside a play is not a cry, it is a line. And if the company wanted to argue that everything said aloud on a stage was a cry, then every mummer in Velen was going to have opinions about it. Prine said the fair's own charter would settle it. And it would, because a fair charter says who may sell what on that ground. And the steward said the charter was in the chest, and the chest was in the tithe barn, and had been for 19 years. Prine did the thing that lost it for him, which was to be impatient with a fair steward in front of the fair steward's own stallholders. He said the box could be broken open and the charter read, and the steward said that box has a lock on it because the men who made it wanted a lock on it. Nobody could open it. The hinge pins on a fair chest are peened over, and the lock had rusted solid in a barn with a bad roof, and the steward had never opened it in all his years because nobody had ever asked, and there was a good deal of standing about looking at a box. I mend things. That is all of what I am. I got the pins out with a nail punch and a mallet off the wheelwright's stall in about 4 minutes with a crowd of about 90 people watching me do it, and I took the lid off backwards, and Prine watched me do it too. Braycombe's charter is older than the Company of Criers by about 70 years. It grants the fairground to the stallholders and their elected steward, and it does not mention Ambry anywhere in it, because when it was written, Ambry was 2 streets and a mill. The steward read the relevant line out 4 times, once for the company, once for the stallholders, and twice because he was enjoying himself. Prine went back up the horse lines to a considerable amount of noise from people selling cheese. He stopped level with me on his way past and said, without any heat at all, that the company would be taking an interest in me now, and that I should understand the difference between winning on a fairground and winning in Ambry. Then he went, and I did not think about it again for 4 months, and that was expensive. The planting itself was a designed thing, and I want to be fair to Ottilie about how much of it was hers. She built the call and answer into the act as a running gag, so that the audience learned it as a game before anybody told them it was a greeting. It was carried out of the tent by the fair. Fairs are how words move. 4 valleys stand in the same field for 3 days and then go home carrying whatever they picked up, and the drovers carry it further because drovers talk to everybody and remember nothing else. Inside 12 days it had taken in Braycombe, and it had taken in Whitlow, and it had taken nowhere else at all. 2 towns on Ottilie's list had it played at them, word for word, by the same people in the same act, and it died at the tent flap both times. I could not work out why, and neither could she, and we lost a fortnight arguing about it, and the answer came from Neb, who had been on the coal cart at Cold Harrow and was droving that season, and who thought he was making conversation. He said nobody wants to be the first man in his own village to say a strange word to a neighbor's face. In a tent, it is a game, and everybody is playing. In your own street at 7 in the morning, you are a grown man saying a stranger's name to a woman you have known since you were 4, and she is entitled to look at you. That is all of it. And I would never have got there on my own because I had been thinking about mouths and Neb was thinking about neighbors. Being first is a risk, and a greeting is a thing somebody has to be first at every single time it happens. So we took the risk away, and the fix is the only genuinely clever thing I have contributed to this business. We stopped putting the hail at the start of a conversation and put it on a transaction. You say it when somebody hands you something. A loaf over a counter, a bucket at a well, a rope end, a coin, a child. The person handing says it and the person taking says it back. And nobody is being strange because they are both doing a thing with their hands at the time and the word is just what goes with it. Neb would not take money for it either, and when I pushed, he said he had told me a thing everybody knows and that he was not going to be paid for knowing what a village is like. Then he let me buy him a great deal of ale, which is a different arrangement entirely, and which he was quite clear about, until he changed the act in one afternoon. The gag became a handing gag, everything in it passed from one pair of hands to another, and the tent laughed at the same joke in a different shape and carried it out into towns where people hand each other things 100 times a day. 3 weeks, 3 towns. Braycombe, Whitlow, and a place called Underash that we never even went to, which took it off drovers and had it inside a fortnight. Found out that it had taken from my wife, which is not how a man wants to hear about his own business. A servant traded out of Cold Harrow came down to me at Whitlow with a line on the back of a keep book page that Maud Ivory had carried up out of the chalk in a ration basket, and Rona had heard my name used as a hello inside a bond estate 3 days before I had a report of it. Underash is the one that told me the thing was alive. Ottley's people had never played there, and I have never worked a job in it. It took the hail off 2 drovers in a fortnight and started hailing itself, and I did not pay 1 copper for it and could not have stopped it if I had wanted to. The money started as a trickle, and then it stopped being a trickle. Copper, mostly. The occasional silver off somebody who was actually pleased to see the person they were handing something to. Nothing gold, and I did not think about that at the time, and I should have. First full day of it, once all 3 towns were hailing each other from dawn, paid 11,000 coppers, and I did not believe the number until it had been counted twice by 2 people who did not like each other. I will be plain about the hour after I understood that number, because it is the happiest hour of my life, and I have never had another one like it. I sat in a barn at Whitlow with copper coming down on the roof like weather, and I laughed until I had to sit on the floor. 11,000 coppers is not 11,000 of anything you can carry. It is 2 barrow loads. It took 4 of my followers and a plank to move it, and when we got it to Grail, Anselm Thryle had to come out into his own yard to look at it, because it would not go through his door. Getting 2 barrows of copper from Whitlow to Grail is a day of work with 4 men, and a plank and a wheel that goes at the 11th mile, and we lost about 400 coins into a ditch outside Grail, and picked up most of them by hand in the dark with a lantern. He walked round it twice. He put his hand into 1 barrow and let a handful run out. Then he weighed a sample, did his sums on a slate, and said 45 crowns and change, and asked me whether I would like the change in silver or was I planning to bring another one tomorrow. I asked whether lending was back on the table. He said his judgment had not moved an inch. He would change my copper because changing copper is a trade with a fee attached, and a fee is not an opinion. Then he told me the thing I did not want to hear on the best day of my life, which is that copper at that volume moves the price of copper, and that if I brought 2 barrows every day for a month, he would be paying me less per barrow by the end of it than he was that morning. And he was right about the weight, which I had not thought about once. 2 barrows of copper is not money. It is metal. It has to be carted, guarded, weighed, changed, and got to a place. And every one of those costs something, and none of it can be done by a man on a horse with a bag. First night nearly took the lot. I had all of it in a barn with a door that did not lock, 4 followers asleep on it, and no guard, and I woke at 3 because somebody was in the yard, and it turned out to be 2 of my own men helping themselves by the hatful. I did not have them beaten, and I did not have them taken to pike. I paid them their 4 days and put them off the place at dawn in front of the others, and told the others what the wage was going to be from that morning, because I had just learned what unguarded money does to people who have none. By the end of that week, there was a man on the Sallow Road asking drovers, in a friendly way, how often the copper barrows go down to Grail and by which road. Neb told me about it. He said the man had a knotted cord round his wrist and laughed at the wrong moments. Rona's answer came back from Cold Harrow on the 2nd Tuesday, and it was not congratulations, and it was 1 line, as always. It asked me how it sounded when the second town said it. A man who is paid by the barrow needs a barn, and a barn needs a floor, and a floor needs a wall round it, and inside a month I had stopped being a roofer and become a warehouse with a horse. I took a stone barn on the Grail side of the Ossen for 4 crowns a quarter, 2 wagons off a bankrupt carrier at Whitlow, a weighing floor, which is a level flagged square with a beam over it, built by me and 2 of my followers in 15 days, and the beam is the only thing on that place I was ever proud of. A weighing floor is not a floor. It is a level bed of rammed chalk with flags laid on it and a hardwood beam across 2 posts, and if the flags move by a finger, the beam lies, and every count you take on it is wrong, which is why it took 15 days instead of 2. 4 men on wages. 3 silver a day, which is the going rate, and which I paid because I had learned in a dark barn at 3 in the dark what a man with no wage does with an unlocked door, and over the door I burnt my name. Fenn in 4 letters, and it is the first time in 29 years that my name had been on anything but a writ. I stood in the lane and looked at it for longer than a grown man should. 4 burnt letters on a barn door on the Grail Road. Sedge would have charged me 2 silver for a proper board, and I did it myself with a poker, and it is crooked, and I would not have had it straight for money. The man who made the place work was not me. I found Dob Weller through Mara Crow, because Nettlestair remembers everybody who has ever taken a body off that street, and Dob had taken 4 of them before he stopped. He served writs for Pell's house for 12 years and 300 papers, and then he quit in the middle of a morning and would not say which one did it. He has a writ server's staff with a brass foot on it that he has since had bent into a firehook, and he still carries it. He counts out loud, always, everything. Men going into a building, men coming out, coins onto a scale, sacks off a wagon, and he does it in a flat voice that makes you want to hit him for about a week and then makes you sleep at night for the rest of your life. I asked him twice which writ made him stop, and he would not tell me. The third time I asked, about a year later, he finally named a staircase as the thing that stopped him. He had gone up it 4 times in 1 week and had known on the 4th what he was going to see at the top. That is every bit of what I have ever got out of him about it. He would not take the job on wages until he had asked me 2 questions, which were how many men I had and how many I intended to send anywhere at once. And when I said 4, and all 4, he said no, and explained why, and then took the job. His rule is that he does not take a job he cannot staff, not a job that is dangerous. A job he cannot put enough hands on. He says danger is a thing you argue about afterwards, and a head count is a thing you can settle before anybody leaves the yard, and he has never once broken it, and it has cost us money about 4 times, and cost us nobody at all. First convoy went out on a Tuesday, loaded to the axle with a day's take and change, 4 men on wages, 6 followers walking, 2 horses, and me riding in front like a man who has thought of everything. The Austin Bridge would not take it, and the reason that sentence is in here at all is that of the 12 people standing on that road, the one who should have known was me. Nobody had checked. Not even me. And I am a man who mends bridges. The middle arch of that bridge is posted at 1 ton. A loaded wagon with 2 horses in front of it is over 2. We found this out when the wagon went onto the crown, and the span made a noise I have only otherwise heard from a roof about to arrive in a kitchen. Taking a loaded 4-ton wagon off the crown of an arch is worse than driving it on. You cannot turn and you cannot brake with the load behind you, so it is 2 men on the heads of the horses walking backwards and 2 men on drag ropes and everybody else off the bridge entirely. So we backed it off, and then 12 of us carried the whole load over that bridge in grain sacks, at a walk, spread out, 4 sacks at a time, and it took most of 2 hours, and every one of us was paid to do it, including me. What a fortune looks like in practice is a middle-aged roofer with a bad shoulder carrying half a hundredweight of small change across a bridge for the 4th time, while a man counts him out loud on the far side. The second convoy is the funniest thing that has ever happened to me, and it happened in daylight on the Sallow Road. Ruddock took it properly. 12 men, a felled ash across the road, our 4 off the wagon, and face down in the verge inside a minute, no blood and no argument, and Dob counting his own men out loud in the ditch to make sure he still had 4 of them. And Ruddock got up on the wagon and looked at the load and stood there for a long moment, and then he laughed, which he does at the wrong time. And he called down to Dob that this was not a wagon of money, it was a wagon of weight. He was completely right. 11,000 coppers is 45 crowns and it weighs 500 weight. 2 decent horses are worth 30 crowns between them, and they walk. His men could not carry it, could not sell it near, could not change it anywhere without being asked where a road captain got 500 weight of copper. He asked what it changed for. Dob told him 45 crowns and change. He asked what the cart and horses were worth, and Dob told him 30, and Ruddock did the sum out loud in the road for the benefit of his own 12 men, who had spent 2 days on a wood for 15 crowns of difference. Took 9 silver out of Dob's coat, took nothing else at all, put the felled ash to one side himself with 4 of his men so we would not be delayed, and left the entire fortune sitting in the road because it was not worth the trouble of stealing. Then he came back down the line to where I was and asked me, quite seriously, whether I would be doing this every week. I said I would. He said good, and that a man wants a rival he can think about, and went off up the bank. That robbery cost me a handful of silver, and it cost him 2 days, and it taught him more than it taught me, and I did not understand that until a night on the Marrowgate Ford 2 years later. Thryle ended the argument about the whole business with 1 number, and he did it in his yard, on a slate, with my 4 men standing there. I'd been telling everybody that we were taking 410 crowns a month. It was true. It was on the beam and in the book, and I had said it out loud in an alehouse at Grail, which is where Thryle heard it and why he came out to correct me in front of my own payroll. Carriage, guard, change. Wastage on bad coin. The barn, the beam, the wagons, the horses, and the farrier. He put every one of them on the slate at what he actually charges and what a carter actually charges, and then he drew a line and wrote 60. 60 crowns of every 410, gone before I touch it, purely because my money arrives as metal instead of as paper. He asked whether I had ever seen a wool factor carry wool. Then he wiped the slate, which he always does, because he does not like a number sitting about where anybody can misread it. Dob asked him what a wool factor pays to move a clip. Thryle said about 1 crown and 40. Dob said we were paying 1 in 7 and did not add anything to it, and the 4 men standing there worked out the rest of it themselves and looked at me. I did not argue, because you cannot argue with a man who has done your sums for you for free in order to make you feel stupid, which I have since decided is the purest form of generosity Anselm Thryle has. Phil came to the barn on a Thursday in the middle of the afternoon with no paper in his hands at all, and I had known him a year by then and had never once seen him without a document somewhere about him. That is what frightened me. I had been ready for paper since the day I burnt my name on the door. He came into the yard alone, on foot, with his hat off, and he walked the weighing floor from one end to the other at the pace of a man valuing a house. He counted the wagons, he looked at the beam, and he looked at the stack, and he looked at the 4 burnt letters over the door for about 3 seconds longer than he looked at anything else. My 4 men stood and watched him do it, and not one of them said a word, and Dob counted him in and counted him out. He stopped at the beam and put one hand on it. He asked whose work it was. I said mine, which was vanity, and he said it was a good beam and went on walking, and that is the only thing that man has ever said to me that I could not find a second meaning in. I asked him what he wanted. He said he wanted nothing today, and that an attachment on a man's goods has to be entered at Ambry and has to name a sum, and that you cannot name a sum you have not seen. Then he said pleasantly that he had now seen it. And then he left. Dob explained it to me that evening, because I still did not understand it, and Dob served 300 of these things, and does. An attachment is not a robbery. It is a paper that says a named sum of a named man's goods belongs to the debt, and it is served at the barn door, and it takes wagons, beams, stock, and beasts. What it cannot take is money that is not there. So we weighed out 350 crowns that night, the 2 of us, on my own beam, by lantern, and I have never counted anything more slowly in my life. 330 for the writ my father made, and 20 for the trouble I made climbing into a lime cart. It went into 2 grain sacks, sewn shut with sail thread, and under a false floor in the corner of the barn that Dob laid himself and would not let me help with. Sewing the full amount gold crowns into grain sacks takes about an hour and a half, and it is the worst hour and a half of needlework anybody has ever done. Dob did the stitching because my hands were shaking, and he did not say anything about that either. From that hour that money stopped being money to me, I could not spend it on horses or guards or a better bridge or a second troop. Every time I went past that corner of the barn, I was walking past my wife, and a man cannot make a business decision about his wife. And then Dob told me the 2 things he thought I ought to know about his old trade, and he told them to me sitting on the false floor with the lantern out, and one of them saved me, and the other one took 2 years to come due. The first was that assets can be attached, and cash in a hole cannot, and that is why the money went into the hole and stayed there. The second was about Pell. Dob said that every extension Pell grants on that circuit, and he grants them constantly, is granted on his own guarantee to the Hesper House. 20 years of being the reasonable man is 20 years of standing behind other men's arrears with his own name on the paper. I asked what that meant if a bad year came. Dob said it meant that if the house ever called those guarantees in, Pell would owe the Hesper counting house everything 11 villages had failed to pay for 20 years, personally, in one demand. I said that would be a great deal of money. Dob said it would, and that the house had not called a guarantee in living memory, and that it would take something the size of the sky falling to make them, and we both laughed, and I put it away in my head with the other things I keep. And all the while, the thing I did not see coming was sitting on my own beam, in my own barn, being weighed by my own men twice a week, in a bag that Dob kept aside because Dob keeps everything aside. Tilly sold me the 2 extra towns in a yard at Whitlow, and told me while she was taking the money that 2 more would not fix whatever I thought was wrong. I said nothing was wrong. She said that a man who buys more of a thing he has not measured is a man who has measured it and did not like the answer, and took the 18 crowns. The hails were up. Every week the count was up. 5 towns by then, because I had bought 2 more off Ottilie, and every single week more coppers came in than the week before, and I was going about telling people we had grown again. Bob asked me one evening why the gold sack was light. I told him it always is. He said he counts everything, and that a month back he had put 30 crowns of gold and silver into that sack in 1 week, and this week he had put in 2. So I did it properly on the beam, in front of the 4 men, because I wanted him to be wrong. A week of gold and silver from a month back, kept aside in a bag, because Dob keeps everything aside in a bag. Against this week's 30 crowns of good metal in that first week, 2 in the new one. Dob weighed both again because I asked him to, and then a third time because I asked him to again, and he did it without one word of comment, which was the worst of it. The coppers were up by a third, and the metal was down by 15/16, and I stood there on my own weighing floor doing the sum twice, while 4 men on wages watched me get to the end of it. Every mouth in 5 towns says my name 3 times a day now, and the mouths are thinking about handing somebody a bucket. They are not thinking about me at all. I had built a machine for making people say 4 letters without meaning them, and it worked exactly as designed. The servant came down from Cold Harrow on the 2nd Tuesday, as they do, with a line on the back of a piece of packing paper that Maud had taken off her at the pit head. Rona had not seen a coin since the stock barn, and she named the two towns. Braycombe and Whitlow, she wrote. Those two are gone already. Under Ash has about a season left, and I do not know the other two because I have not heard anybody from them. She was right. And I knew she was right, and Thryll's Beam had said it 4 days earlier. But it was not the being right that put me on the step outside my own barn for an hour. It was that I had bought those 2 extra towns off Audley Crane the week before the scale settled it. 18 more crowns, paid to make 2 more towns say my name out of habit, spent while the answer was already in a sack on my own floor waiting to be weighed. I have made worse decisions since. I have never made one where I got to stand and watch the money leave afterwards. And the money under that floor was no use to anybody where it sat, because Hesper paper clears in Ambry and nowhere else in Velen. The road to a woman held 4 days north of me runs through a capital 6 days south, and the man who had just counted every wagon I own was riding it too. Ambry is 5 days up the Sallow Road from Grail, and I did it in 4, with changed horses paid for off the day's takings, and 350 crowns sewn into 2 grain sacks under the boards of a cart, carrying nothing but oat straw. I had not wanted to come at all. Cold Harrow is south of the capital, and my wife is in it, and I went the wrong way for 4 days on purpose, because the writ is Hesper paper, and Hesper paper clears in Ambry and nowhere else in Velen. That is the shape of the thing, and it is worth having straight. Money at the gate does nothing. A release has to be entered in the counting house here, by their clerk, in their book, and their man has to ride down and witness the payment. And until it is entered, I am a man with a cartload of straw. 4 days, 1 broken trace at Marrowgate, and Dobb counting the followers out loud at every stop because 6 of them came with us, and 14 came anyway. Dobb would not let the cart into the city until he had walked the last mile of road himself, and looked at the gate arch, because a false floor is worth nothing if a wheel comes off, and he made us change a linchpin at the north bar in front of about 200 people. Ambry is a city of about 40,000, and I had never seen more than a village in one place in my life. I am not going to pretend I walked in like a man who owned it. I got off the cart at the north bar and stood there being a village for about 20 minutes. Then I went for the counting house, which stands on the crying square, and I got about 30 feet into that square and stopped, because the square was full of criers and none of them was crying anything. There were 90 of them. I counted later off the company's own rate card, and it was 90 exactly. They were standing in ranks between me and the counting house steps, in their coats, with their horns down, doing absolutely nothing at all. It is not a crime to stand in a square. That is the first thing Corvin Task ever taught me, and he did it without saying a word to me. 90 men standing still, silently, in a public place is not an offense anybody has ever written a law about, and you cannot walk through it, and you cannot argue with it. I went round it first. There are 4 ways into that square, and there were criers standing in all of them, not in a line and not blocking anything, just standing in the places a man walks, in 1s and 2s, being polite to everybody. I tried both. I got about a third of the way in, 1 shoulder at a time, and a man in a green coat trod on my foot with an apology so polite it made me want to lie down. Task came out of the company hall while I was still in the middle of them. He is a wide, comfortable man who hums up and down a scale while other people are talking, which he does without noticing, and which is the most infuriating habit I have ever met in a human being. He said my trade name, which was already the wrong one, and then he corrected himself in a way that let the whole square hear him do it. He said he understood I preferred the other. He hummed 4 notes. Then he told me what he wanted, and he did not waste a syllable. 200 gold crowns a year, a license to be cried in the company's towns, which is 11 towns each for 90 criers, and he said the number of towns twice because the number is the product. I asked what happened if I did not pay it. He said nothing would happen. The company would not silence me because silencing a man is expensive and illegal and slow. The company would simply supply the kingdom with a different word for me at the going rate and let the kingdom take the cheaper one. He said a name is a thing people use because it is to hand. Put a shorter, better one within reach of 90 mouths in that many towns each, and you will not have to take anybody's name away. They will put it down themselves. I want to be honest and say that he was not threatening me. He was quoting a price for a service and describing accurately what happens to people who do not buy it, and he had done it 100 times before, and he did not care about me in the slightest. Clerk in that counting house told me the queue for entering a release was 15 days long, and that there was no arrangement for shortening it and no fee that would. And he told me that from behind a grill without looking up, and about 90 criers stood between me and even that. The letter reached me in Ambry the next morning, in the yard of the inn, off a woman who had been traded out of Cold Harrow to a household 2 streets away and had carried it 4 days in her shoe. Rona had heard about the license before I had. That is not possible, and it happened, and the explanation is that Task's advanced men had been pricing me in market towns for a month, and market towns talk to estates. She had had 4 days to think about the number, and I had had 1 night. Her line was this: 200 crowns is 200 weeks of me, so do not buy it, and do not stand in a square telling them why, because a man explaining himself to a guild is a man they have already got talking. Did the sum in the inn-yard anyway, because I always do the sum. 200 out of 350 leaves 150, and the earning was falling every week, and the honest answer was that if I bought the license, I would not have my wife inside 2 years. So I went back into the crying square and refused him in front of his own guild. And I said the arithmetic out loud, because a number said in a yard is a private thought, and a number said in a square is a position. I said 200 crowns is 200 weeks of a woman on a chalk estate, that the company was welcome to whatever word it liked, and that no word the company sold had ever yet dug anybody out of anything. The square heard me. Task hummed. Then he said that unlicensed men always talk about digging, and that he would give me a public alternative since the crowd was there and it was a fine day. A contest. Company champion against the unlicensed man. 1 hour, the crying square as judge, the purse 15 crowns, and the loser to take whatever the square gave him. He offered it inside 4 seconds, which means it was not an idea. It was a thing he had prepared before I ever got to the city. I took it. I have thought about why for 2 years. I took it because he had put a rule I understood in front of me, and because I had been beaten by paper twice and by 12 men on a ferry ramp once, and none of those had ever let me try. Nib Calloway is the finest throat in Velen, and I have never heard anything like him before or since. He is a narrow gray man of about 50 who looks like a bad harvest, and he opens his mouth and a market square 400 yards long turns round. They gave us a round each, turnabout, for an hour. I went first because he let me, which was not kindness, it was staging. Would like to be able to tell you I was adequate. I got out my own name at what I believed was the top of my voice, and it reached the ale stall at the front and died about 4 feet past it, and a woman selling pies asked me to say it again because she had not caught it. Then Calloway did it. Fenn Alder once, and it went off the far wall of the crying square and came back, and pigeons came off the counting house roof, and about 1,000 people in the middle of buying things stopped and turned round. The crowd was delighted. They had come out to see a village man be terrible, and I was better value than they had hoped, and I have never in my life been laughed at by that many people at once, and I want to say plainly that most of it was funny. By the 4th round, I had worked out that I was not being beaten on volume. I was being beaten on craft. He does not shout. He puts the sound out on a level and lets a wall carry it, and he breathes at the ends of the words instead of the middles, and I could see him doing it, and I still could not do it. By the 6th round, I had gone hoarse, and I started asking him questions between rounds instead, and he answered them, which is the thing about that hour I actually remember. He told me where to stand for the wall. He told me I was pushing from the throat and holding my chin down. He said I would never be any good and said it kindly. The 9th round, the pie woman was crying my rounds along with me in a high voice and getting a bigger laugh than either of us. And in 1 hour, with the best crier in the kingdom saying my name at 1,000 people in the largest square in Velen, I earned 3 coppers. I stood on the platform with them in my hand, and I said the number out loud because there was nothing else left to do with it, and I said it to the square and not to task. 3 coppers, an hour, the finest voice in the kingdom. Nobody in that square was thinking about a man. They were thinking about a contest and a joke and their dinner, and the 3 that did come down came from 3 strangers somewhere else entirely who had needed something and thought of me and had nothing to do with Ambry at all. Then a dray bolted on the north side, and everything that had been funny for an hour stopped being funny between one word and the next, and I have never since been able to hear a horse going wrong without turning round. It came out of the fish lane with a broken trace and no driver, and went into the scaffold stand the company had put up along the north wall for the people who had paid a copper to sit down. 30 feet of it came off the wall in one piece and folded into the crowd underneath. I went off the platform mid-round. I did not decide to. I was on the cobbles before Calloway had finished the word, and he went on crying it for another 3 rounds because he did not know what had happened behind him, which is one of the details from that afternoon I have never been able to stop thinking about. A collapsed stand is a roof. It is exactly a roof. It is poles and boards and load paths, and the thing you must not do is pull, and the thing you must do is find where the weight is sitting and put something under it before you take anything off the top. A crib is a stack of short timbers laid across each other in pairs, and you build it up under the load an inch at a time until the load is sitting on your stack instead of on the people. 4 of the men who helped me build those were criers in green coats who had been standing in my way an hour earlier. I got 4 men and a stall trestle, and we cribbed it in 3 places, and then it came apart in the right order. And there were 14 people under it, and each of them came out, and 2 of them were carried, and 1 of them walked and swore at me. Square paid me more in those 4 minutes than the hour had paid in total. 9 silver and a crown, down onto the cobbles around a wrecked stand while I had my back under a pole, and I did not pick any of it up, and neither did anybody else, and it lay there in the dust for an hour. I lost the contest. I want that stated plainly because it would be easy to leave it out. The judges were 3 men of the company, and they gave it to Calloway in about the time it takes to say his name, and they were right, And I was terrible. Task paid the purse over to Calloway in front of the square with no sign of distress whatsoever. He hummed while he counted it. That was the first warning, and I read it as sportsmanship, which is the most stupid single reading I made in the whole of that year. The Hesper clerk found me under the wreckage. That is the only reason the release was entered that day at all. The counting house is 40 feet from the north wall, and a man kneeling in broken scaffold is easier to reach than a man in a queue on the stairs. He was a thin, nervous person called Letter, and he had my file under his arm and a portable inkhorn, and he asked whether I was the party, and I said I was, and he said he would prefer to do it now while I was findable. So the release on my wife's bond was entered on a plank laid across two barrels in the middle of a wrecked square, with the injured still being carried past behind him, and Letter read the whole entry out to me at a shout because of the noise. Put down the estate, the term, the sum of 350, and the condition, which is that the whole sum is paid at the estate in cash before a Hesper man. Then he sealed it and gave me the counterpart and said in a completely normal voice that he hoped it went off well for me. I have kept that piece of paper. Task started his counter before I was out of the square, which is to say, before the last of the injured were off the cobbles, and he did it where I could watch it being bought, because being watched buying it was most of the point. He put 9 criers on it that evening, at the North Bar and the Fish Lane and the 2 bridges, at the going rate of 4 silver a man, and he had it cried within earshot of the inn where I was staying, which was not an accident. Calloway came and found me in the inn yard afterwards. He did not apologize for winning, and I would have thought less of him if he had. He said I had a chest and no method, and that a method takes half a lifetime. And then he asked whether the coins under the scaffolding had been real, and I said they had. The word was Goldfall. 1 word, 2 syllables, easy to cry, easy to remember, and it is a good piece of work, and I have never managed to pretend otherwise. By the 3rd evening, I heard a child use it in the street without knowing there was a man attached. I stood in an inn yard in the capital and listened to those paid throats put a word into a city, and every single utterance of it paid me nothing at all, and I could not stop one of them, and the company charges 4 silver a man, and there are 90 of them. Chancellor Ione Austri came down the counting house steps while they were still clearing the scaffold, with 2 clerks behind her, and she did not stop, and she did not look up from what she was carrying. Somebody had gone to her about me. I found out later it was the company and 2 petitioners from a shrine on the west side who wanted the coins ruled a sign. She dealt with all of it on 12 steps without breaking stride. She said the coin is property. She said it arrives, it is metal, it is held, it is spent, it is therefore goods, and goods are assessed. She said the man is not a miracle, and the money is not an offering, and that it is already the rule. Then she was in her carriage. I do not think she looked at my face for a full second in her life until much later, and the 2 sentences she said on those steps did more to me than everything Task did in a fortnight. They shut the shrines. Not one bishop in Velen ever came near me after that, because a thing ruled goods is a thing the temples have no claim in, and I have had a quiet life on that side ever since, and it was not my doing. And they made me taxable, in the same breath, out of the same mouth, in one sentence, and the chancellery assessor's men were told to work out what a man who is reigned on is worth to the crown, and that took them about a fortnight to arrive at. I left the next morning with the whole sum still under the boards, a sealed release in my coat, a city that had been paid to call me something else, and 2 days of road south to a gate I had been walking towards since a Thursday in a village square. Maud Ivry met me a mile short of the Cold Harrow gate, on foot in the dark, which is not a thing a housekeeper does unless she has already decided something. She had a better offer than the one in my cart. She laid it out standing in a chalk lane with her keys held in her fist so they would not talk. A gate, a knight, a cart in the lane, and the 190 bonded who would all be asleep and would all say so. It was real. That is what I need you to understand. She had the keys, she had the muster, and a bonded servant is not counted between the evening bell and the morning one. Nobody would have been beaten for it. The estate would have written it off as a runner and put the loss on the Hesper house. I said no, and I said it in 3 words with a cart behind me, holding all of everything I had earned in a year, and I did not give her a reason, because I did not trust myself to get through one out loud. I did not explain it. I said no, and asked her to walk with me to the gate, and she was furious with me for about 30 yards, and then she stopped in the lane and worked it out herself, and said it aloud so that I would not have to. She said a runner is a runner forever. Cold Harrow would enter her as absconded in the keep book, the Hesper house would carry the entry, and every estate on that circuit and 4 others reads the same book. My wife would be a woman who could not be in a market on a Tuesday for the rest of her life. Then she said the rest of it, which I had not got to, because Maud Ivry has fed 190 people for 6 years and thinks about the ones left standing. If a housekeeper opens a gate once, the estate stops trusting the housekeeper, and the next 4 years of everybody else's rations go through somebody who is not her. I said I had the whole sum in the cart. She said, then I had better be very loud about it, because half that estate had spent the better end of a year hearing that a man was coming and had put money on him not coming. She asked me one more thing in that lane before we went up to the gate, which was whether I understood that the estate would try to make the payment happen indoors in a counting room with a door on it. I said I did. She said good, because a thing done behind a door at Cold Harrow gets done twice. We went in at first light with the cart and the followers and the sealed counterpart from Ambry, and the steward tried to take it at the door, and I said in the yard that it would be paid on a table outside, in the open, and that I would wait as long as he liked. He let it happen because he could not think of a reason not to, and by the time he had thought of one, there were 50 people in the yard, and it was too late, and that is the only trick I know that has never once failed me. They brought a table out of the counting house, and not a good one. A trestle with a split top, and I have never seen a better piece of furniture in my life. 190 bonded people came out to watch, and nobody could stop them, because you cannot order a working gang to be uninterested. They came off the chalk in a gray line, and they stood along the wall, and they did not make any noise at all. And that silence was the loudest thing in the county. Pell rode in at 8. He had come down from the counting house at Ambry because Hesper paper is cleared by Hesper men, and he is the Hesper man for the Northern Circuit, and he had ridden 2 days to stand in a chalkyard and watch me do this. He took his hat off, he read the counterpart, he checked the seal, checked the entry, checked the estate's own book against it, and then he said the sum would need counting, and I said I had rather hoped it would. 350 gold crowns, out of 2 grain sacks, onto a split trestle table, in front of 190 bonded people, and a steward and 4 gangmasters, and every follower I own. Letter the Hesper clerk had come down from Ambry with him, and stood at the end of the trestle with the counterpart and the estate book open. And every time a stack went over, he made a mark, and he was the most frightened man in that yard because he had never entered a release of anything like that size in his life. It took 19 minutes. He weighed the lot on the brass hand scale, in stacks of 20, and every time a stack went over, he said the running number out loud, and the line along the wall did not move. And about halfway through the counting, somebody in that line started to cry and was told to shut up by somebody else. 330 for a debt my father made against a house I still live in, 20 for the trouble of a man in a lime cart, 420 crowns cleared in total, counting the 70 on his table in Grail a year and a bit before. Then he had to witness it, and that is the thing I had ridden 4 days out of my way to have happen, and I got greedy with it, and I would do the same again. I asked him, before 190 bonded bodies, to read out what was on the paper. He said he had read it. I said read out the name on it. He did the whole thing. He read the estate. He read the term, 4 years, entered on the 9th of the month, discharged this day. He read the sum, the writ number, the Hesper entry, and the clause. He read the condition and the date and the seal. And where the name is written on that paper, in front of 190 people who were waiting for it, he said the party named herein. I asked whose name. He said the party's, so I said it myself, Fenn Alder, out loud, to a wall of bonded people. I told him that I had walked 420 crowns across a kingdom for 4 letters, and he could not spare me one of them. He folded the paper, said the release was good, and promised to enter it that evening. I did not understand it then, and I still do not. At least 60 people in that yard understood exactly what had happened, because they had watched a man refuse 4 letters after spending 19 minutes saying every other word on a page. Then they brought my wife out of the chalk, and the gangmasters did not bring her, and the steward did not bring her, because by then, nobody in that yard was giving anybody orders, and the whole gray line along the wall had turned to look at the pit end. She walked out on her own feet from the pit end of the yard with a bundle and a leather roll under her arm, and she was thinner and grayer, and she had a cough that came up on her twice on the way across, and she did not run, because she has never run at anything in her life. She reached me and gripped my coat in both hands, exactly as she had in the stock barn, and looked at me for a long moment. And she did not say my name. I did not notice it that morning, and I did not notice it that week, and by the time I did notice it, we were 4 months on, and there was no polite way left to ask about it. She said, husband. And then she said, you took your time. And the cough took her again. And I had my arms round a woman I had not touched since the winter in a chalkyard with 200 people watching, and I understood nothing at all about what she had just decided. Cough has never gone. That is the price, and it is the whole price, and no later bargain buys it back. Chalk gets into people. 9 months of a chalk gang is 9 months of it, and she is a woman who has to stop halfway up a flight of stairs now, and she was 27. She had a year of things to tell me, and she told me none of them in that yard, and she has told me most of them since in pieces, at night, when something reminds her, and there are 4 or 5 I have never asked about because she has not offered them. The roll was the other thing. She put it into my hands in the yard and told me to open it there, and it was not the strip of sacking anymore. It was leather, and it was 3 feet long, and it was in 4 hands and not one, and it had 211 place names on it. 14, when I saw it last, scratched with a nail. 211 now. She never got out of the chalk to ask a single one of them. She put the question into 3 other women in 3 other gangs and into Maud Ivory, and it came back down to the pit with the rations, 1 name at a time, for all of it. I said I could not work 200 towns. She said she was aware of that, and it was not a work list. It was a map of who would mean me, and that the difference between those 2 things was going to be the rest of my life. There was a woman standing at her shoulder while she said it, gray to the wrists with chalk and coughing the same cough, and she was carrying a roll of her own. Elspeth Vane came off Cold Harrow that same week under a bond nobody paid, having simply reached the the end of 4 years on a Tuesday, and she had written her own role in her own hand, and it was not a copy of Rona's, and she made that very clear to me twice. Hers was north. Rona's names run south and east off the estate trade. Elspeth had spent her last year listening to the northern gangs, and she had 9 towns above the chalk that Rona had never heard a word about, and she was walking up there with it whether I liked it or not. I offered her wages. She said she would take a copper a run like the child when she ran, and not one thing more, because the northern towns were going to trust that list on the strength of her face, and her face was not for sale. Then she went north on foot, and I did not see her for a year. Elsbeth asked Rona for nothing at the gate, and Rona gave her nothing except 2 dates out of the keep book, and the 2 of them said about a dozen words to each other in every bit of that morning, which is what 4 years in the same gang apparently comes to. But Avery took the standing job before we were off the estate, and named her own terms, and I have never once regretted a word of it. She said she knows every one of those books by heart. She knows which Tuesday bodies are bought and sold on, and she knows to within a crown what any given estate will take to let a body go early. She said give her a purse and a runner, and she would buy people out for less than I would pay for them, by about a third. She has done it ever since. That is how my name became the name of the man who buys writs, and I did not do any of it. And the first 4 she got out cost 81 crowns for 4 people, and I have the figures because Maud sends figures. We went home slowly because of the cough. 2 days to Grail in a cart at a walk, with the followers behind and Bet running ahead. And I spent most of the first day waiting for my wife to say the thing she had come out of that yard already holding. She would not say it. I asked her twice what was wrong, and she said nothing was wrong, and asked me about the barn and the beam and daub and what the Hales were paying, and made me tell her the copper number and then the metal number, and then went quiet. Then at Grail, she did the thing instead, and it was crueler and better than telling me, and she had clearly decided on it somewhere on the chalk before she ever saw my face. She made me go to work on a market day in the middle of the town that had arrested me for wrecking a wedding, and she picked the job herself off a bollard at the end of the fish row without asking me whether I wanted it. There is a fish row at Grail Market, and a carter came into it that morning with a slipped axle on a loaded cart, and Rona sat down on a bollard at the end of the row and told me to go and mend it and to take as long as it took. I asked her whether she was going to tell me or make me find out. She said she had spent all that time not being able to show me anything and had had a long while to decide which she would rather do, and that anything she said in a cart I would argue with for a fortnight. It took 4 hours. It is a job I know. You unload half a ton of fish by hand, you jack a cart with no jack using a beam and a fulcrum stone, you draw a linchpin that has been overhammered by somebody's cousin, and you dress the axle end back to round with a file because you have no lathe within 15 miles. And all of Grail came past. It is market day in a town that size. The carter said my name. The fish factor said my name. 3 men who wanted the row cleared said my name in a way I have been hearing since I was 19. A woman brought me a cup and said it. Pike came by and said it twice. 4 hours. Being needed in public, by name, by a town that has known me for a year and a half, at the exact top of a market day. I counted what came down at the end of it, standing beside a mended cart with my hands stinking of fish and my shoulder gone for the day, and I had to count it twice because the first count seemed to me to be an insult somebody had arranged. 4 coppers, in 4 hours. In a town of 900 mouths that says my name about 6,000 times a day now, because Grail took the hail off Whitlow in the spring, and everybody in it hails everybody else with it all day long, every day, over every loaf and every bucket. I stood there and did the sum I did not want to do. 6,000 sayings, 4 coppers. A dead ewe under a bissel floor, with 1 frightened woman on a stool over it, had paid me a silver and 3 coppers in 1 evening. Rona had not been sitting on that bollard. She had walked Grail from dawn to dark while I was under a cart, up one street and down the next, standing in doorways and by stalls and at the well, listening. She gave me her number when I had finished counting mine. 40. Out of 900 people, 40 mouths in Grail still had a man in mind when they said it. The rest were saying a word that goes with handing somebody a thing. I said they say it more than ever. She said that was the whole trouble, and that I had built it on purpose. She said a name that everybody says is not a name anymore. It is a noise that goes in a gap, and that I had spent 18 crowns and a season making my own name into a hollow word. That is her phrase, not mine, and it is the one that stuck. Everything from that morning onward, everything I built, everything Ruddick did to me, and everything the Chancellery did to me, is an argument with 2 words my wife said on a fish row. We got back to the barn on the Thursday, and there was a paper nailed to the door of it, sealed, entered at Ambry in a clerk's hand, naming a sum. Rona read it before I did, standing in the lane with the cart still loaded, and she did not hand it to me. She read it twice and then folded it and put it in her coat, and I had to ask her for it, and she gave it to me and said we would talk about it inside. Assessment of 140 crowns against the goods and takings of the party, payable at the quarter, being the crown's share of a thing ruled property on the counting house steps by a woman who did not look up, which is what Pell was measuring with his eyes on my weighing floor 2 months before, and he had not needed a single piece of paper in his hand to do it, and I had watched him do it and had thought he was being polite. The morning after the assessment was nailed to my door, my wife put the leather roll flat on the barn table, weighted the corners with 2 crowns and a file, and started crossing towns out with a burnt stick. She took out Grail. She took out Bracombe and Under Ash and Whitlow and the 2 I had bought off of Tilly in the spring, and then she took out 13 more that had picked the hail up off drovers without anybody selling it to them, because a good word travels for free once it is moving. Most of the South went off that roll in about 4 minutes. What was left was the far edges of it, the northern names in Elsbeth's hand, the chalk hamlets, the places nobody had ever cried anything at, and she pushed it across the table and said, "Work there." I said no. I said it fast enough to surprise both of us, and then I had to find the reason afterwards, which is not how I like to do things. I could not give her the reason for about 4 seconds, and then I had it. She had crossed out towns that had gone quiet, not towns that had gone deaf, and the deadest name on that roll was the cheapest place in Velen to find out which of the 2 it was. She said I was about to spend money proving a thing I wanted to be true. I said I was about to spend money finding out, which is different, and she said it is not different when you have already decided which answer you would like. Then she asked me which town. I said Whitlow. She put the burnt stick down and said nothing for a while because Whitlow was the first town she ever named as dead, 4 months earlier, on the reverse of a keep book leaf. She asked me what I would do if it did not work. I said I would have spent about 60 crowns finding out something worth knowing. She said that was the most expensive sentence I had said all year and that she was going to hold me to the word finding, because a man who is proving does not find anything. Whitlow is grain. Ricks in the yards from August, a granary at the top of the town holding the seed corn for 14 villages, thatch on half the roofs, and no crew of any kind because a fire crew is 9 men not doing anything for most of the year, and no town will pay for it. And that autumn, there had been no rain since the 2nd week of June, which every farmer between Grail and the Chalk had been saying to every other farmer for 12 weeks, in exactly the tone people use for a thing they have decided not to do anything about. Bob Weller mustered it, and I want to be clear that he mustered it because I would have done it wrong. I said 15 men. He said 9 and told me why, and I have never argued with him about a head count since. 9 is what he can count. He can put a crew that size into a burning yard and know at any moment where every one of them is, out loud, by name, and 15 is a number at which a man goes into a loft and nobody is certain he did. He said he would rather leave a rick standing than lose a body he could not account for. 3 silver a day each and a full day's pay for any day they are called out, whether the fire is real or not, because a crew that is paid for false calls will go out on the doubtful ones. That was his second condition, and it cost me more than the wages did, and it is the reason every one of them came home. The kit was mine, and I am purely proud of it in a way I am not proud of anything else in this business. 12 leather buckets, 4 hooks, 2 made off my own bench, 4 dozen sacking beaters, 3 ladders, and a hand-pumped engine off a bankrupt Grail brewery that took us 12 days to revive. Buckets have to be leather, and they have to be waxed, and they have to be hung, because a bucket lying in a barn goes hard and splits, and a split bucket in a chain is a gap in the chain. Dobb waxed all 12 himself twice that autumn, and made 2 of the crew watch him do it the second time. Whitlow did not want us, though they were polite about it. A town that has never had a crew tells itself a story about why it does not need one. The story is that everybody comes out with buckets, which is true, and that this has always been enough. That is true, right up until the evening it is not. So we stood the crew in a barn on the Grail Road for 3 weeks at 3 silver a day, doing nothing in the driest autumn in 30 years, and I paid out about 30 crowns for men to play at dice. Rona said nothing at all to me about it, and I would have preferred it if she had. The Fenwick rickyard went up on the 9th of October at about 11 at night, and I know the hour to within a few minutes because Dobb wrote it on the barn wall in chalk before we were out of the yard, which is a thing he does and which I have stopped asking about. 15 ricks. Cut that August, standing in a yard on the north side, and there is a granary 40 feet from the nearest one with a thatched roof and 14 villages seed corn inside it, and the whole town was in that yard inside 4 minutes with buckets, exactly as the story says. Fenwick himself was standing in the middle of his own yard telling people to wet the ricks, which is what a man does when the thing burning is his, and Dobb walked past him twice without arguing and put 4 of our men on the granary ladders instead, and Fenwick did not notice for about half an hour. The buckets could not reach. That is all of the problem, and everything we did that night came out of it. The Fenwick yard well went dry in August. The nearest live water is the town pond 100 yards off down a lane too narrow for a cart, and a bucket chain 100 yards long needs about 60 people, and Whitlow put out about 90, so the chain worked and delivered nothing. A rick that is going is gone. You do not put out a rick. Dob told them that inside a minute of arriving and it did not go down well, and he said it again louder and it went down worse, and then he said it a third time and started giving men jobs and they took them. You save is the next thing. The wind was southwest and steady, and it was picking burning straw off the ricks and putting it on the granary roof in ones and twos, and every one of those was a fire and thatch if it sat for half a minute. So the job was a roof, which is the one thing in the world I actually know. You cannot wet an old thatch from outside in a wind. The water runs off the surface and does nothing, and the fire is already under it. You wet it from the inside, along the underside of the thatch, where the water sits in the straw and stays there. We got into the granary loft with the ladders, and a dozen of the town's men and the buckets came up to us, and we spent 2 hours lying along the collar beams throwing water up at the underside of a roof, in the dark, in smoke, with sparks going through the gaps and being killed by hand with wet sacking. Bob stood at the loft hatch the entire time and counted heads out loud, both ways, every time anybody moved. 9 of mine and a dozen of Whitlow's, 20 in the loft, and he said the number about 400 times that night in a flat voice, and nobody told him to stop after the first hour. The coins came about halfway through, and I have priced a great many things in my life, and I could never put a figure on what my own money did to that yard in the 90 seconds it was falling. Half of Whitlow was standing in a burning yard shouting Fenn Alder at the top of their voices, because that is what a town does when a crew arrives, and gold came down into a rick yard in a high wind, into the fire, and out of it again, scattering embers off the top of a burning rick in every direction. A crown into a rick is a crown into a rick. But a crown coming down into the middle of a burning stack is a stone dropped into a bonfire, and it throws burning straw 30 feet, and it did it 4 times in about a minute and a half, and one of those started the eastern ricks that had not been touched until then. Toller came up the ladder to the loft hatch to argue about it while it was happening. Dob would not let him past. Toller shouted that 4 ricks was his year, and Dob said in the flat voice that the loft had 20 heads in it and that 4 men would not save the eastern ricks in any case. And he was right about both, and I made the decision that cost them. I had 4 men and a choice, and I could put them on the eastern ricks or keep them on the granary roof, and I kept them on the roof, and the eastern ricks went, all 4 of them, and they were Toller's whole winter, and he stood and watched them go. I made the choice knowingly. 4 ricks against 14 villages seed corn is not a difficult sum. The eastern ricks caught because my own money arrived, and I want that recorded. Toller knows it and has never once said so to me. The fire was not beaten by anything my crew did, and it was not beaten by me, and there is no version of that night I can tell where the crew I paid for and equipped and argued about is the reason Whitlow still has a granary. About 2 in the dark, the wind got up and the loft chain could not keep pace, and the water at the pond end was down to mud, and Dob came up the ladder and told me straight out that he was going to pull his men off the roof inside 10 minutes because he was not going to have a thatch go over 20 heads. I went down the lane to the almshouse to ask her for 4 buckets and a ladder, which is all I had gone for, and she was already standing in her own gateway with a bar in her hand, having worked out the geography of that hill about 5 minutes before I did. Sister Hallie of the Whitlow Grain Almshouse has a stone cistern behind the almshouse wall that holds the winter water for 40 old people and 13 orphaned children, and it is filled from the roofs in October, and it does not fill again until the spring rain. She opened it. She came out into the lane in her nightclothes with a bar, knocked the plug out of the drain herself, and put the whole winter's water into the lane and down the slope to the granary, and it ran 40 gallons a minute for 20 minutes, and that is what saved the corn. And while it was running out of her wall, she stood in the middle of the lane and made the town promise it back, out loud, before witnesses, with the fire still going. She named the number of barrels, she named the date she wanted them by, and she made 4 named men agree to it, with everyone watching. I have been in a great many arguments about money since, and I have never seen anybody do that better. She did not ask afterwards. She asked while she was giving it, when nobody in that lane could refuse her anything, and she got a guarantee out of Whitlow that has fed my company since, and that is most of why I am not bankrupt today. The last hour of it was the roof again, from the inside, with the cistern water coming down the lane and being thrown up at the underside of a thatch by men who had been doing nothing else since the first alarm and had stopped talking about 4 hours earlier. The granary stood, the 15 ricks went, and the eastern 4 went, and 2 carts and a wall, and nobody died and nobody was carried out, and at dawn, there were about 600 people standing in a yard of black straw looking at a building with a wet roof. 74 crowns of gold came down on Whitlow that night, and Dob picked most of it out of the ash with a rake at first light because I was asleep sitting up against a wall with my boots still smoking. 74 in one night, in gold, from one town of about 600, which is more than the 5 Hale towns paid me in a month between them at their very best. The deadest name on the roll had woken up and paid me like a war. Course was on the bucket chain all night, and I did not know it until the morning. He has his sister's hurdle yard on the north side of the town and 2 men working for him, and he would not sit at the same table as me because he says he still owes me a gate. Whitlow gave the crew breakfast in the market hall at 7 in the morning and would not let anybody pay for any of it, and 4 of the men who had told me 3 weeks earlier that the town had never needed a crew stood up and said so out loud in front of the street, which cost them something, and which they did anyway. Rona counted the mouths at first light and gave me 600, which is every soul in Whitlow. Whitlow had been 40 a fortnight earlier, and she had counted it herself. One night of genuine need, and the entire town meant me at once. There is a thing that happened that night, which I did not learn about for a long while, and I am putting it where it happened because that is where it belongs, and because she told me herself, and told me to stop leaving it out. We were short. 3 weeks of wages at 3 silver. A man had emptied the box, and I was standing in a burning yard with a payroll due on the Friday, and she knew it to the copper because she keeps the book. So at some point in the middle of that night, she went round the back of the almshouse wall on her own, where nobody could see her or hear her, and she said my name out loud on purpose, to put money in my hand. Nothing came. She stood there in the dark behind a wall and said it 11 times, and not one copper fell. Because a mouth thinking about helping me is a mouth thinking about the helping, and she was the only person in Whitlow that night who was not thinking about a man. She has never tried it again. She did not tell me for the best part of a year, and when she did tell me, she was angry about it. Not at me, at the rule. And it is the only time in my life I have heard my wife be angry at arithmetic. We stood in Tuller's eastern field at about 8 in the morning, in ash up to the ankle, with 74 crowns in my coat, and I said the thing out loud once, and I have never said it again since, and I do not intend to say it here twice. Every gold crown I now earn means somebody, somewhere, is having the worst night of their life. That is the business. That is what it is, and I built it on purpose, and I am going to go on building it, and I would like it noted that I said so, standing in the ashes, and not afterwards in comfort. Rona did not answer it, and has never answered it. What she did was take the roll out of the cart in that field and put 4 more grain towns onto it in pencil, standing in the ash. And then she asked me whether the crew were being paid for the day or for the fire, and I said for the day, and she said good. Dob heard me. He said in the flat voice that he had served 300 writs before this, and had not enjoyed those either. And then he counted the crew onto the wagon, out loud, twice. We were not 4 miles down the Grail Road when a rider came the other way to say that a rickyard had gone up in the night at a place called Sedgeholt, 30 miles east, which is a town we do not cover, have never been asked to cover, and had no man within a day's ride of. The chalk uplands had no rain from June to the following March, and by February, the springs at Fallowmere and 4 hamlets above it had gone from a trickle to a smell. Chalk does not hold water where you can get at it. It swallows it and keeps it 100 feet down. And all of that country lives off 4 springs and a set of dew ponds, and when the springs go, there is nothing between you and the river at Stint, which is 11 miles down and the same back up. They were carrying it, 60-odd households every day, 11 miles each way with yokes and 2 buckets, which is a 10-hour day for 8 gallons, and a household of 5 with a cow needs about 30. So they were not carrying enough, and they had been not carrying enough for 3 weeks when Bet came down to the barn with it. Rona put Fallowmere on the roll, and I want to record that she did not argue with me about it once, because it was not a hail town. It was a place that had never heard my name and was about to need something badly. So I put a fire company on water, which nobody has ever done, and which Dob thought was a foolish use of the crew until he did the sum on the barrels. Dob did the sum before he agreed to it. 9 men and 2 wagons cost about 4 crowns a day to run. 60 households paying a copper a gallon at 30 gallons a household is 7.5 crowns a day, and the rest of the load goes to the 4 hamlets above them at the same rate. He said it stands up, and that a thing which stands up on paper in March will still stand up in June, and took the job. 2 wagons, 22 barrels apiece of 30 gallons, filled at Stint out of the Ossen, and hauled up the chalk road to Fallowmere, 1,300 gallons a run. 2 runs a day if the horses hold, which is more water than 60 households can carry in 5 days of walking. We were on the road inside 3 days, and every bit of the chalk knew about it before the first wagon got to the top, because a water wagon on a dry upland is the most visible object in the world. I was offered 6 coppers a gallon twice on the first afternoon by 2 men who had never heard of each other, within an hour, which is how you find out what a thing is actually worth without ever having to ask anybody. First was a factor out of Ambry with 3 carts who wanted the whole run for a brickyard that had gone dry, and he offered 6 coppers a gallon standing in the road, which is 65 crowns for a day's hauling, and I have never been offered so much money so fast in my life. The second was a man from a dye works at Marrowgate an hour later who had heard about the first one and came up to bid 7. I sold it to Fallowmere at 1 copper a gallon, in the street, in front of about 50 people who had walked down to see what a man does when he is offered 7 times his price by somebody from Ambry. I gave neither of those men a reason, and I did not give the Hamlet one either. Rona asked me that night why I would not explain it, and I said because an explanation is a price you can argue with. A copper a gallon is not a kindness, it is a rate. If I say I'm doing it out of goodness, then next month somebody will want to know why the goodness has gone up, and I will be having that conversation for the rest of my life. She said that was the first genuinely commercial thing I had ever said, and she was writing it down. Then she asked me what the copper actually covered, and I said the horses, the wages, and the barrel staves, and she said good, and that was the end of it. And then the road tried to kill the whole idea, and this is where I spent about a fortnight of my life. The only way up onto Fallowmere from the river is the old chalk cutting, which is a sunken lane about a mile and a half long cut into the hill by people who have been dead 400 years. And it has a camber on it because it drains to the low side, and that camber is about 1 part in 6. A wagon carrying 22 full barrels of water is a wagon carrying 3 tons of a thing that moves. The barrels do not care about the camber. The water inside the barrels does, and it goes to the low side all at once at about the same moment as the wheels do. Barrel that has been in a hedge is not a barrel anymore. Staves spring, hoops start, and a coopered 30-gallon cask that has rolled 100 yards down a chalk lane is firewood with a hoop on it. We lost 7 that morning and had to buy them again at Marrowgate at 14 silver each. The first wagon went over on the 4th day, halfway up, on a Tuesday morning, with 15 of us watching it. 600 gallons into the ditch, 22 barrels down the lane like a herd of something, and 1 horse cut across the hawk, and the men from the hamlet who had walked down to help stood at the top and watched a day's water run away downhill. We took a day off the run, cut the load to 16 barrels, chalked them, roped them across in 3 places, and went again, and the hamlet went another day on what it could carry on its own shoulders. It went over again on the Thursday in almost exactly the same place. I was on that one, and I came off the box into the chalk with a barrel across my leg. I lay in the bottom of that lane with water running past my ear and one of my own crowns landing in the puddle next to my face, because somewhere in Velen somebody had just thought about me. Absurdity got me. I lay in a ditch with a barrel on my leg, being paid a copper for it, and laughed. Dobbs stopped the runs. He was right to. 2 wagons over in 4 days is a man killed by the end of the month, and he said so at the top of the lane in front of the crew in the hamlet, and I could not answer him, and we stood there arguing about ropes for about an hour and a half. A boy from Fallowmere called Pier had been sitting on the bank the entire time. He is about 9, and he says almost nothing. He asked, in the middle of all this, why we did not just put less water in each barrel. Somebody told him it was the same water either way, which is what I would have said. He said no, and then he said the thing that fixed it, which is that a full barrel cannot slop and a half barrel can, and a barrel that can slop hangs on the wagon instead of hitting it. He was right, and every carter in Velen knows it, and none of us had thought of it, because we were all thinking about weight, and the answer was about movement. A full barrel is a solid block that shifts all at once and takes the wagon with it. A half barrel of water swings and comes back and swings less, and it eats the camber instead of arguing with it. Dobb made me prove it before he would put a man on a box again. We ran 1 wagon up empty, then a quarter loaded, then half, with 2 men walking the low wheel and a rope on the high side, and it took a whole day of not delivering any water at all to earn back the right to deliver any. So we ran 44 half barrels instead of 22 full ones, which is exactly the same water, twice the cooperage, and about half an hour more loading each end, and the wagons went up that cutting for 12 weeks after that and never went over again. I gave Pier a silver, and he asked whether it would be every week, and I said it would be if he had another idea, and Fallowmere has sent me 4 ideas since, and 2 of them were worth money. That carry stopped. 60 households, 10 hours a day each, ended by 2 wagons and a 9-year-old, and the chalk started saying Fenn Alder for the reason I had wanted it said since the beginning, which is that I had turned up with something they needed. Sarn Ruddock was waiting for me at the bottom of the cutting on a Sunday, on his own, with no horse and no men, sitting on a milestone. He had spent the whole winter thinking. He said so. He said he had lost 2 days and 9 silver on a wagon of copper and had gone away and worked at the problem the way a man works at a lock, and that he had it now and wanted to say it to my face because he thought I would appreciate the shape of it. He said the copper is not the asset and the man is not the asset. The asset is the fear. He had watched me get 74 crowns of gold in one night out of a town that had paid me nothing at all for half a year, and he had worked out what the difference was. And the difference was that Whitlow was terrified. Then he made the offer, and he made it as a business proposal, sitting on a stone in the sun, entirely pleasant. He said fear can be produced. He said he could produce it anywhere in the kingdom on a schedule, 3 or 4 times a month, in places with nothing much to lose, and that I would be paid for every one of them whether I agreed or not. He said the only question was whether I would rather be paid and know the dates or be paid and not know them, and that he would take a fair split either way, and that in his view a man who is already earning off the arrangement has no clean ground to stand on. I asked him what he thought a burnt village was worth to me. He said about 70 crowns on the Whitlow figures, and he had the Whitlow figures because everybody in the county had had them by then, and I had said the number out loud in a field myself. I asked him about Sedgeholt, the rickyard that went up 30 miles east of Whitlow on a night nobody had sent for anybody. He said he had never heard of the place, and then he laughed at the wrong moment, which is the nearest thing to an answer I ever got out of him about it. I told him to get off my road. He said he would see me at the next one, and walked off down the hill with his hands in his pockets, and I stood there for a long time. 9 days later, a rickyard burned at Stint. He had told me to my face what he was going to do, and I had spent every one of those days thinking about barrels. Stint is the hamlet with the bridge pile I shored a year earlier. 15 men in a river for 2 days, and it is at the bottom of the same chalk road my wagons run up, and nobody sent for us because it went at the small hours and was over by 4. I was asleep in a cart at Fallowmere, and I woke up because gold was hitting the canvas over my head. 11 crowns in about 4 minutes, in the dark, 11 miles above the fire, from the mouths of people I had stood in a river with, and I lay there and listened to it come down and knew what it was and could not do one single thing about it. Ruddock's knotted tally cord was on the Fallowmere gatepost in the morning, tied on properly with 2 turns and a hitch. At the height, a man ties something he wants found by the first person out of the gate. It was neither a threat nor a boast, and it took me 2 days to work out what it actually was, which was an invoice. He had produced a sample, delivered it, and left his mark on the door so that the buyer would know who to settle with. He was waiting to be paid for work done. I sent Bet to Stint with 4 crowns and instructions to give them to the man who lost the ricks and to say nothing about where they came from. And Bet came back and told me the man had asked anyway, and she had not told him, and cut a notch in her stick. And then, on the upland road, in the last week of March, Pell took both wagons off me where they stood, loaded, halfway through a run, with 60 households at the top of the hill waiting for them. Not with paper. This is the one time in 20 months he ever took anything without a document in his hand, and I have thought about why ever since. And I believe it is because he did not need one and enjoyed not needing one. 12 men stopped both wagons on the chalk road between Stint and the cutting, took the horses out of the shafts, and stood there. My drivers asked what the charge was. Pell's man said there was no charge and no attachment and nothing to read, and that a company of this kind now requires a charter and that this one has not got one, so the goods were being held. My drivers stood there for 2 hours because they did not believe a thing could be taken without a paper, and Pell's man waited with them. And in the end, one of my own men rode up the cutting to tell 60 households that the water had stopped a mile and a half below them. He was correct, but I could not get past what stayed with me. The Chancellery had ruled in January that fire and water companies operating for hire are licensable. The ruling came on a petition from the Company of Criers and 2 others. An unchartered company undercuts chartered ones, and the precedent went back 100 years. Only a company chartered through an Ambry Guild may hold a license. The guild that would have chartered mine was the Criers and Heralds. Corvin Task held the standing in that city. He had asked me for 200 crowns a year for something else entirely, and I had refused him in his own square in front of 90 men. I refused a license to be talked about, and 7 months later, 4 hamlets on a dry chalk hill watched their water stop in the road because of it. That is what the 200 crowns actually bought, and nobody could have told me at the time, and I would not have believed them. I went to find Ruddock about it, and that is the only fight in this entire business that I lost standing up in a lit room with both my hands free and nobody laying a finger on me. I found him at a drover's inn below Marrowgate, and I put it to him in front of the room. He did not deny anything, and he did not admit anything. He asked me which rick I was accusing him of. I said Stint. He asked who saw him at Stint. Nobody saw him at Stint. Then he did the one thing that ended it. He asked the room, pleasantly, who made money the night Stint burned. Not who lost. Who made? And every man in that inn knew the answer, because the answer had been standing in the doorway shouting for 2 minutes. He said I had sent 4 crowns to the man who lost the ricks. He said that was a fair split and laughed, and I hit the table and not him, and I walked out of there with nothing because he had committed no crime I could prove and had an argument I could not answer standing up. Rona wrote to Corvin Task that week and asked in 4 lines and very politely what a charter would now cost. The answer came back inside a fortnight, and it was not a number. It said that the company does not charter unlicensed persons, and used that word about me twice in 3 sentences, and it was addressed to Goldfall, which is the word Task sold the capital the summer before, and which by then about a dozen people were still using, none of whom have ever paid me a copper. Hamlets got their water. That is the one thing I can put in the receipt. 2 wagons gone, no horses, a license I cannot get, and a hill in the way, and the chalk carried it by hand in barrows and yokes for 2 days. And about 60 of my followers, and the crew carried it with them. 2 days, 380 barrow loads, up a chalk cutting with a camber on it, and Fallowmere and 4 hamlets have been on that roll ever since and have never come off it, and it is the only stretch of country in Vellon that has never once gone hollow on me. I was asleep in a cart in the barnyard on the Grail Road on the 2nd of April when the sky started paying me, and for about 4 minutes it was the funniest thing that had happened all year. A crown came off the barn roof and went down the back of my neck. The mare put her head up because one had gone into her ear, and she spent the next quarter of an hour shaking her head at intervals and being deeply offended. Two went into the water butt with a noise like a bell in a bucket. I got up and stood in the middle of that yard in my shirt with my hands out. Gold was coming down out of a black sky at the rate of a coin every 2 or 3 seconds, off the roofs, into the straw, onto the flags, and Dob came out with a lantern and started, of course, to count it. I was laughing, and I want that fact written honestly beside everything that followed. I stood in a rain of gold in a barnyard at 1:30 in the morning and laughed, and then I stopped because I had done the sum. Gold means desperation. 1 crown is 1 mouth in genuine terror. There is no other way to get gold out of this thing, and I had learned that in a mill race with a boy under a wheel, and I had it confirmed in a burning rickyard in October. 94 crowns in 1 hour, counted twice on the flags by a man who counts everything, and then a third time into a sack because I had gone quiet, and Dob had worked out why before I said anything. 94 mouths, all at once, all terrified, all saying my name inside 60 minutes. That is not a city. A city has 94 people frightened of something every night of the week, and it never falls like that. It is one small place, and the entire place is screaming. And I did not know where, not the county, not the direction, not the road. The thing has paid me every day for 2 years, and it has never once told me a single fact about anybody who said it. That night, it was a bell ringing in a room with no door on it, and I stood in the middle of my own yard with more money than my father earned in his life falling on my head, and I could not tell you which way to turn round. I tried. It is the thing I am least proud of that night, and I am going to put it in. I stood in that yard and tried to work out a direction by listening to the coins land, as though a thing coming out of nothing 3 feet above my head had a road it had come along. Then I stopped being a fool and went to the map, and the map is a leather roll with every name on it in 4 hands, and Rona had it flat on the barn table with a lamp on either side before I got through the door. We had 10 minutes, and we took 12. That is not a figure of speech. Dob had 9 men and a dozen horses standing in the yard inside 10 minutes of the first coin, because Dob sleeps in his boots, and every minute after that was a mile. Rona had the roll under one lamp and Ottilie's scorched takings board under the other, because a fair date tells you when a town is standing together, and she went down the eastern names first on the grounds that Ruddock had never once worked west of the Ossen. 3 candidates. Whitlow, northeast, grain country, 600 souls, the town we saved in October. Braycombe, east, 40 households, the fair town hollow as a drum since the spring, and the Ashcombe Valley north, 4 hamlets and a mill, which we had never worked and which nobody had ever sent for us from. 94 fits Braycombe almost exactly. It fits a bad night in a quarter of Whitlow. It fits the whole Ashcombe Valley. It fits about 30 other places I could name, and about 400 I could not. I picked Whitlow in about 90 seconds, with my finger on the leather, and the crew in the yard already mounted, and the last of the gold still coming down on the barn roof behind me. The reasoning was sound, and I have gone over it 100 times since, and it is still sound, which is the worst thing about it. Ruddock burns grain because grain burns, and because grain is a year of somebody's life. Whitlow is the biggest grain town in the county. Whitlow means me now, so Whitlow would pay in gold. Whitlow it is. Bet said the fort is bad, and she was 12 years old and had been awake for 2 hours and had not been asked her opinion by anybody, and she gave it anyway in a yard full of grown men on horses. She said it standing at the mare's head with her hazel stick in her belt, in front of Dob and the whole crew. The Ashcombe Road crossed at Quartle. The water had been up on Tuesday, and it would be worse now. If I wanted the North Valley, I should go round by the Drove Road, lose 40 minutes, and get there. I said we were going to Whitlow. She said then it did not matter, and she was right that it did not matter that night, and it mattered a very great deal about 2 months later at a place called Marrowgate, because I had heard her be right about a crossing and had not filed it anywhere. Rona did not tell me I was wrong. She asked whether I had chosen the biggest town or the likeliest one. I said the likeliest, and she wrote Whitlow on the slate herself, handed me the roll, and has never thrown that quarter of an hour back at me since. We rode at about 2. A dozen horses, changed once at Grail out of a stable I pay a retainer to for exactly this, which is the single best 4 crowns a quarter I have ever spent, and the second string was fresh, and we made better time on the second leg than the first. There is a middle road between the Whitlow and Ashcombe valleys, and we took it because it serves both, which was the one good decision I made that night, and it was not a plan. It was an accident of geography. About 4 in the morning, we came over the shoulder of the hill above a hamlet called Neither, which is 9 houses and a mill, and the mill was alight. Nobody had sent for us. Nobody there had ever heard of my company. A mill and about 30 people, and the mill was in its second hour, and the wind was putting it into the row of cottages downwind of it, and there were 4 men and 2 buckets on it. Neither had 1 man on the leat with a bucket and 3 on the cottage roofs beating sparks, and the miller's wife standing in the lane with 2 children, and they had been at it for 2 hours and had already lost the argument they did not know they were having. Dob counted the crew off the horses, and we took it. A dozen men, including me. No wagons, no engine, no water, but the mill lead, which was right there and which is the only reason it worked. And we pulled down the cottage nearest the mill with hooks and ropes to make a gap and let the mill go. A mill on fire is a chimney lying on its side. The leat runs under it, the floor is oiled from 50 years of grinding, and there is grain dust in the roof space, and a mill that has been alight for 2 hours is not something a dozen men are going to take back off anybody. That is a hard thing to sell to a man at 4 in the morning. You have to stand in front of somebody and tell him you are going to pull his house down on purpose. Dob did it. He does not argue and he does not soften it. He said the house is going anyway, and this way the other 8 are not, and the man let him do it, and the other 8 stood. It cost us 2 hours. 2 hours, and I did not begrudge them at the time, and I have never begrudged them since, and I have also never been able to stop doing the arithmetic on what 2 hours are worth on a road at 4 in the morning. Pulling a cottage down is hooks and ropes and 8 men on the end of them, and you take the roof first and then the gable, and it goes in about 20 minutes, and it makes a noise that the family standing behind you never forgets, and neither does anybody who pulled. We got to Whitlow at about 7, and it was quiet. Rick's standing, granary standing, market getting ready, and Sister Hallie came out of the almshouse gate to ask me why I had a dozen horses in her street and whether I had eaten. I've never felt anything like the drop I felt in that street. Relief, and then the floor going out from under it in the same second, because if Whitlow is standing, then the 94 crowns came from somewhere else, and it is now 7 in the morning, and I have been riding away from it for 5 hours. Hallie fed a dozen men and their horses in her own gateway, while I stood in the street doing sums I did not want the answers to, and she asked me twice what was wrong and I could not tell her, because the honest answer was that Whitlow standing meant somewhere else was not. A grain factor coming in off the Braycombe Road told us he had come round because he could not come through. Braycombe burned between midnight and about 3. 40 households, the market row, the fairground sheds, and the winter barns at the top end where the troops lay up between seasons. Everything but the chapel and about 4 cottages at the west end. The fairground is where I bought a season-off Audley crane for 18 crowns a year ago and stood in a crowd out of 4 valleys and got a charter box open with a nail punch, and there is nothing on that ground now except the stumps of the stall posts and the wrestling pitch, which does not burn because it is grass. I got there before 8, and I am not going to spend long on what it looked like because you have seen a burnt thing and the rest is just the size of it. Nobody died. That is the sentence everybody said to me, one after another, 4 or 5 times, and it is true, and it is Ruddock's own rule and not an accident. A road that tolerates a burning will hang a man who kills, so he does not kill, and 40 families standing in a lane in their night clothes are alive because of a rule about hanging. It does not help. I want that on the record too. Nobody died, and 40 households have nothing at all, and the 2 facts do not touch each other anywhere. Goodwife Sennett is the midwife of Braycombe, and she is about 60, and she has delivered most of the people standing in that lane. She came up to me while I was still on the horse, in front of about 100 survivors, and she did not shout and she was not unkind, and she asked me one question. She asked what was in the saddlebag, and she asked it in a completely level voice, the voice she has used on frightened women in bad rooms for 40 years, which is what made it impossible to answer with anything but the truth. I could have lied. I did not, because 100 people were standing there, and about 14 of them had watched gold come down on me at a fair in that town a year before, and the truth was going to be in the street inside an hour whatever I said. I said 94 gold crowns, and that they had come down on me at 1:30 that morning, and that they had come out of the mouths of the people standing in that lane while their houses were burning. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then a man near the back said, out loud, that he had been shouting for me and not about me. He had stood in his own doorway with his roof going and called Fenn Alder into the dark until his voice went, because the road says that one comes when he is called, and the one who comes when he is called was 40 miles away being paid for it. Dob put the crew to work while I was still on the horse being asked questions. The crew went along that lane pulling standing walls down before they fell on anybody, and counting people out of cellars, and by 10 o'clock they had every soul in the village accounted for on a slate against the chapel door. Sennett would not take the money. She put her hand flat on the saddlebag and pushed it back at me and said coins are no use to a woman in a lane, and then she told me what Braycombe actually needed, and she had it costed before I got there, which is what 60 years in one place does to a person. 40 roofs of timber, sawn and carted, because there is no standing timber inside 15 miles, and every stick they had is charcoal. A crew for a season, fed and paid, to put them up before the winter, and somebody to stand behind the seed corn at the merchants, because a burnt village cannot buy seed, and a merchant cannot give it away. I said yes to all 3 in the road, out loud, in front of 100 people, before I had any idea what it came to. Dob wrote it down on the spot on the back of the crew slate, because he does not trust a promise that has not been written where the people it was made to can see it, and Sennett read it back and made 2 corrections, and then put her own mark under it. Came to about 400 crowns. Timber alone is 210 because it has to come from the Ashcombe woods and be carted a long way. A crew for a season is the whole company for 26 weeks. The seed is a standing guarantee against a harvest I do not own. Sennett asked me one more question after I had agreed to all 3, and she asked it quietly and not in front of the others, which was whether I could actually do it. I said no. She said she had thought not, and that she was going to hold me to it anyway, and that a man who promises what he has is no use to a burnt village. 4 times what was in the saddlebag, promised in a lane by a man who had that morning discovered that his entire income is a bell with no address on it. I have never regretted it, though I could not afford it then, and still cannot. Bet said nothing about the Ford for 4 days. On the 5th, she came and stood in front of me in the barn and said that if I was going to keep asking her for roots, she was going to keep giving me the true ones, and that it was not much use her being right in a yard at 2 in the morning. A Tilly crane came down the lane at about 10 in the morning, with soot to the elbow, and her hair burnt off on one side, looking for her horses. Her winter barn was at the top end. 2 wagons, the tent, the boards, the properties, 18 years of a traveling company's whole world, and she had got the horses out and lost everything else. And she had been up there since 2 in the dark doing it on her own with a rope. She did not make a speech, and she has never made one since. She has better reason than anybody alive to say the obvious thing to me, which is that she planted the word that made that town hollow, and I paid her 18 crowns to do it, and she has never said it once. What she did was take the takings board off the side of the wrecked wagon and put it in my hands. It is a painted board about 2 feet across with her towns down one side and the season's dates against them, and it is scorched along the bottom edge, and I have it still. She said it is the only map in the kingdom of who is where and when, that a fair date is the one day a year when a town is all in one place, and that if I was going to be sent for, I had better know when people are standing together, because that is when they shout. Then she asked me whether I had seen 2 grays and a brown with a white foot, and went off up the lane to look for them without waiting for an answer. The first thing I tried was bait, and it was the stupidest fortnight of the entire year, and it cost me 2 days, 15 crowns of hire, and a very great deal of my own dignity. I sent a wagon down the Sallow Road in daylight, loaded with sacks of gravel, and 4 crowns of real money on top of them, with 2 men on the box who were told to look nervous, and 15 of us in a wood 12 miles on waiting to come out behind whoever stopped it. Nobody stopped it. Nobody stopped it on the second day either. On the second evening, the drivers came back, and there was a knotted tally cord lying on the seat between them, put there while the wagon was standing at an inn yard with 2 men eating inside it. He had walked past my bait, looked at it, decided it was bait, and left a note. Dob laughed for about 10 minutes, which he does about twice a year, and then he said the obvious thing, which is that a man who knows where my wagons are is a man I know nothing about at all. Rona asked me what the bait had been meant to prove. I said that he would come for money. She said he had already told me to my face on a milestone that he was not interested in money, he was interested in what makes gold fall, and that I had built a trap for the man he used to be. So we stopped trying to catch him and started building the thing I should have built after break home. And it took 10 weeks, and it is the only lasting thing I made in all of that year. The pieces were all lying about. Bet had the routes in her head, every road, drove track and forward between Grail and the Chalk, with the times on them in wet and dry. Maud had the keep book calendar of every estate on the circuit. Rona had the roll. Atelier had a scorched board with fair dates on it. None of them was worth much on its own. Put together on one table by 4 people who had never all been in the same room, they were the thing the coins have never once given me in 2 years, which is an address. Maud gave us the estate calendar for it without being asked twice. Bodies are bought and sold on fixed Tuesdays, and a bonded servant walking between estates is a person crossing 4 parishes with permission, which makes them the cheapest and least suspicious carriers of a message in the kingdom. 9 towns to start. A fixed relay point in each one, which is a named person at a named house who is paid a copper a week to be there, and who takes a message in and passes it on, and who is not a volunteer, because a volunteer is a man who is somewhere else the night you need him. 9 relay men and 2 women, one of them Ivy Bissell, and one of them a Whitlow Carter's widow, all paid a copper a week whether anything happens or not, which is 2 crowns and a half a year for all of it, and the cheapest thing I have ever bought. And the thing that made it work, which was Bet's and not mine. Every leg of it is written in hours and not in promises, which is to say, never soon and never directly. Cordell to Whitlow, 2 hours and 40 in dry, 3 1/4 in wet, drove road adds 2 miles and takes 40 minutes off. She made me put a stick in the barn with all of it notched on, and she checked the times herself over 12 weeks and corrected 4 of them, 3 down and 1 up. And when I asked her about the one that went up, she said a runner who shaves a time to look good gets somebody killed. Tam Bissell came in as the second runner. He is the boy I got out from under the mill wheel, and he is 13 now, and he is faster than Bet over 5 miles and slower over a long one, and he is a worse judge of water than anybody I have ever employed. He went into the Cordell Ford twice in 1 month. Bet tested him on it, sent him by the drove road on purpose, and he took the Ford anyway to save the 2 miles, and came in wet with a ruined message and no shame at all. She fined him a copper out of her own pay and told me she had done it afterwards. The leak was Maud Ivry's, and she bought it with the only currency in the kingdom that a road captain paying a fair split cannot match, and she did it without telling me she was going to. She came down from the estates in June with a name. One of the 12, a man called Ferris, has a younger brother who went into Cold Harrow on a seed debt 2 years ago and had 15 months still to run. She had it out of a keep book because she reads all of them and remembers all of it. She did not offer Ferris money. She went and discharged the brother. 9 crowns and 4 silver. Entered, sealed. The boy walked out through the gate on a Tuesday, and then she wrote to Ferris and told him it was done and asked for nothing. I asked her afterwards whether she had known it would work. She said she had not, and that it was a great deal of money to spend on a man who might simply take the boy and say nothing, and that she had done it because the boy was owed the discharge anyway on the arithmetic, and the rest was a bet on top. He came to the barn on his own 12 days later and stood in the yard and would not come inside. He said he was not going to inform on 12 men, and he said he would tell me one thing once and never again, and that after that he was going to go and be a carter somewhere else, and he has, and I have never seen him since. The one thing was that Ruddock works out of Marrowgate side and crosses to the South Bank on a fixed night in the month because his men are paid on the same day the drovers are, and they all drink on the same bank. Dobb refused my second plan flat, in the yard, in front of the crew, and that refusal is the reason my whole crew came home off the Marrowgate bank instead of some smaller number of them. My second plan was to take him on the north bank in the open ground above the ferry with 15 men. Dobb counted it out loud in front of everybody, which is what he does instead of arguing. 12 of them, 15 of us, open ground, no wall, night, water at our backs. He said he would not staff it. He said it in the flat voice with the whole crew standing there and me giving him a very hard look, and he did not move at all. And after about a minute, I stopped giving him the look because he was obviously right. The third plan was his, and it is smaller and worse, and it worked. Take them on the water instead of on the land. 12 men on a ferry deck cannot spread out, cannot run, and cannot get behind anybody, and the ferry is a chain ferry, and a chain ferry can be stopped from either bank by one man with a bar. A chain ferry runs on a cable across the current, and the deck is about 20 feet by 12, with a rail on 2 sides and open ramps at both ends. 12 men standing on that have nowhere to be except on it, and Dobb walked the deck twice in daylight with a rule before he would say the number out loud. So we bought Hesk's Crossing for a night and not his help, and he was extremely clear about that. He took 4 crowns for the hire of a ferry he would not be standing on, went to his sister's at the top of the town, and told me that if anything happened to his chain he would want it replaced in oak and not in ash. Hesk asked me one question before he went to his sister's, which was whether anybody was going to be killed on his crossing. I said I hoped not. He said that was not an answer, and then took the 4 crowns anyway, and I have thought since that he took it so that he would be somewhere he could be asked about afterwards. 28 men, which is 9 crew, 13 hired out of Whitlow and Nettlestair, 4 of my followers who insisted and were useful, and Dobb and me. Split 14 and 14, 1 lot at the near ramp and 1 at the far, and the far lot went across at dusk and lay up in the reeds. And then it went wrong. And it went wrong for the plainest reason in the world, which is that a river is not a thing you can book. He had drawn the ferry up, and not out of treachery. He had taken 4 crowns and gone to his sister's, and, being a ferryman of 30 years, he had done what he does every night of his life before he went, which is winch his ferry out of the water so that it does not sit in a current all night. And the water was a foot higher than Bet had been told. She had it from the Cordal relay man, who had it off a miller, who had looked at his own mark at noon and not since, and by 10 at night there had been 10 hours of hill rain coming down the Ossen, and the ford by the ramp was chest deep instead of thigh deep. So at about midnight, with 12 men coming down the far bank to a crossing they use every month, my 14 were on the wrong side of a foot of water with no ferry in it, and the other 14 were lying in reeds a quarter of a mile from anywhere useful. I have never been so completely finished so quickly. Ruddock's men came down to the ramp, saw no ferry, turned round and started back up the bank, and the entire thing was over and had cost me 10 weeks and 4 crowns and the use of a river. It went, and nobody told her to. And nobody would have thought of telling her to, because there was no plan left to give anybody an order out of, and I was standing in a foot of water saying so. She was on the near bank with the horses because that is where a runner is put. She got on the mare and went up the towpath. She rode 9 miles round by the Drove Road and the Cordal Bridge in the dark. It was the exact route she had named to me on a key in this same town 2 years earlier, and I had not used it once. She got to the far bank ahead of 12 men walking, because 12 men walking on a bad bank at night go about 2 miles an hour, and a 12-year-old girl on a good mare on a made road goes 3 times that. She did when she got there is the funniest thing anybody in my employment has ever done, and she has never once been able to explain why she thought of it. She went up the bank past them in the dark, got in front, and started shouting that the ferry was down and there was a wagon in the river and a man under it. 12 road captains turned round and went back to the ramp at a run to look at a wreck, because a wagon in a river at night with nobody guarding it is the best thing that can happen to a man in that trade, and every single one of them went down that bank as fast as he could go. She had not lied to them. That is the thing I want in here, because 2 men in that company have since told the story as though a girl tricked them, and she did not. The ferry was down, the water was up, and there was a cart in the river a mile below the crossing that had been there since the Tuesday. They came off the bank into water they were expecting to be thigh-deep, at a run, in the dark, in a bunch, and 14 of my men came out of the reeds behind them and 14 came across the ford from the near side, and it took about 4 minutes. Nobody was killed, and I want that stated. 2 of Ruddock's had heads opened, and 1 of mine had a broken arm, and 1 of the Whitlow men was bitten by a horse. It was not a battle. It was 28 men holding 12 men in 4 feet of cold water until they stopped. My shoulder went at the worst possible moment and in front of every man I employ, which is a thing I had managed to avoid for 2 years by choosing my jobs and standing in the right place. There was a line across the ramp mouth that 4 of us were holding to stop men getting past on the outside, and I had it round my forearm and about 2 minutes in the shoulder that has not been right since the Weir simply came out of the job. It did not hurt much. It stopped working and the line went. Dobb took it off me. He put his hand on the rope above mine, said, "Take your hand off it," in the flat voice, and finished the job with 2 men where 4 had been and never mentioned it afterwards to me or, so far as I know, to anybody. 11 of the 12 taken. The 12th is a man called Prewitt who got up the far bank in the dark, and I hope he is a carter now as well. Sarn Ruddock we held under the ferry ramp on the Marrowgate side, in the water, up against the same planking that Hesk hid a bag of my money under 2 years ago, standing about 8 feet from where he stood and did his arithmetic out loud in front of the passengers. Knew it. The thing about him, he was in irons in 4 feet of water at midnight, and he looked at that ramp and he laughed at completely the wrong moment and said that this was a fair split. Getting the 11 of them out of a river in irons at midnight takes about an hour and is done 4 at a time, and Dobb counted every one of them onto the bank by name and then counted his own 28 and then counted them again in the inn yard at Marrowgate, and nobody by then thought that was funny. They wanted him killed. I want to be honest about the yard I was standing in. 15 men of Braycombe had come out for that night, unpaid, and there were 4 men from Stint, and they had a very simple view about a man who burns villages, and they said it out loud, and they were owed an answer. So I gave the answer in trade terms in front of both companies, standing in the water, because a moral argument in that yard would have been an insult to people who had lost their houses. I said a dead road captain is a road captain, nobody can be sold. I said his 12 know 30 roads, 4 fords, 3 inn yards, and every relay point he ever used, and every one of those is worth money to me, and none of it is worth anything if he is in the river. And I said the rest of it, which they did not like at all. I said that Marrowgate has more reason to hate him than any of us, that Marrowgate has a court and a magistrate and a rope if it wants one, and that I was not going to be the man who decided it in the dark on somebody else's ramp. One of the Braycombe men asked me whether I would be saying that if it had been my village, and it was a fair question, and I said probably not, and that this was the reason it was not being decided by the man it was done to. He did not like the answer, and he stayed for the handing over anyway. I handed him to the town at first light in front of both companies and a good part of Marrowgate, and Hesk stood at the top of his own ramp with his arms folded and looked at his chain and not at any of us. And while he was going up the ramp in irons with the water running off him, Ruddock gave me the one thing that was worth more than the capture, and gave it once, and did not repeat it, and would not answer a single question about it afterwards. He said there has been a man taking jobs in the north in my name for 2 months, answering sendings, taking money for work, doing it badly, on the far side of the chalk where nobody has ever seen my face, and he said the company of criers has been crying him, and christening him, and doing it at the going rate. Marlbeck is 4 days north of the chalk on Elsbeth Vane's roll, and it had sent for Fenn Alder 3 weeks before I ever heard of the place, and it had got one. Elsbeth had been up there 11 months by then, walking on her own money, with a list in her own hand built independently from Rona's. She had put 9 northern towns onto it out of nothing but her own face, and 4 years of chalk in her voice, and Marlbeck was the best of them. What they had sent for was a mill dam with a scoured toe, which is a job I could have done in a week with 4 men, and what came was a pleasant man in a leather nail apron who said he was Fenn Alder, took 11 crowns of the town's money for a season's work, put in 9 days of it, and went away. The dam is worse now than when he started, because he cut the toe back to lay a face on it and never laid the face, and Marlbeck had been looking at an open trench under its own dam for 3 weeks with the autumn coming. Elsbeth had told them, in her own words and in her own hand, that if the dam ever went wrong, they should send for a man called Fenn Alder, and she had told those towns the same thing over 11 months on foot, and every one of those 9 was a door standing open for anybody who could say 4 letters. They were not a stupid town, and they had not been careless. They had asked him for his name, and he gave it. They had asked whether the coins came, and he had said not on a working day, which is such a good lie that I have wondered since whether I would have caught it. A scoured toe is the ground being taken out from under the downstream face of a dam, a spadeful at a time, by water that has been doing it since before anybody noticed. You cure it by laying a stone apron out in front of the toe so the water has something to land on that it cannot carry away. I came up with Rona and Dob and 4 men and the timber money that was supposed to be going to Braycombe because you do not ride 4 days north on Ruddock's word without expecting to have to pay for something. We got into the square at Marlbeck on a Thursday at about noon with the town in it for market, and the man was standing at the top end of it by the cross with his sleeves rolled, talking to a woman about a hinge. He had heard we were coming, of course. 2 days of a company on a northern road is a thing every drover in the county talks about. He could have gone. He did not go, and I have thought about that a great deal, and the answer is that he had worked out something I had not, which is that a square cannot tell 2 men apart. Cass and Dre is about my age and about my build, and he was wearing a leather nail apron cut the same as mine, which is not a disguise. It is a working man's apron, and any saddler makes them. When I came into that square, he turned round and said in a completely open voice that he had been wondering when this was going to happen. I said I was Fenn Alder. He said so was he, and had been for 2 months, and asked the square which of us was holding a receipt with a name on it, and neither of us was, because a receipt is a piece of paper, and paper does not follow a man about. That is all of the trouble, and it took about 90 seconds to arrive at. There is no mark on me. The rule does not put anything on my face. I have no license, no guild, no seal, and no letter. In a town 4 days from anybody who has ever seen me, my name is a claim, and so is his. Rusk the wheelwright asked us both the sensible questions, and neither answer helped. Where were you born? Austin Ford, both of us, and he had the river and the weir and the name of the alehouse because he had spent 2 months collecting them off drovers who had told him about me for free. He was better at it than I was, and I will be plain about the 10 minutes that followed because they were the most humiliating 10 minutes of my life, and they were funny, and I could see that they were funny while they were happening to me. He mirrors people. He does it without thinking, the way some men take on an accent. Inside 4 exchanges, he was speaking the way I speak, in steps and orders of operations. He was doing my trick of naming his own limits first, and doing it slightly better than I do because he had chosen which bits to keep. He told the square that he had been in that town for over a week and had put his hands in their dam and asked what I had done in it, which was nothing. I had been there 4 minutes. Then he did the thing that got the laugh, and the laugh is what actually cost me. He said, mildly, that a man who turns up with 4 hired men and a wagon behind him to argue about a name is not a workman, he is a company, and asked the square whether the man they had sent for had sounded like a company. 200 people laughed at me, and not at him, and I stood there in a square 4 days from home and understood that I was going to lose this on manner, in front of people who had nothing to go on but manner. Dob tried the only honest thing available to him, which was to stand up and say that he had worked for me for 2 years and that this was the man. Dre asked the square how much I paid him, and Dob said 3 silver a day, and that was the end of Dob as a witness in about 4 seconds. The test was the town's idea, and everybody agreed to it, including me, which tells you how badly I was thinking. Wheelwright called Rusk said the obvious thing, which is that one of us gets paid when his name is said and the other does not. So let the square say both names and watch the ground. It is a good test. It is the test anybody would design. It cannot work, and it took 2 attempts and about half an hour to prove it. They said his name first. On a count of 3, 200 people at once. Nothing came down anywhere. Then they said mine the same way. Nothing came down anywhere, because nobody standing in a square being asked to say a name on a count of 3 is thinking about a man. They are thinking about the counting, and about the person next to them, and about whether they came in on the beat. It is the widow at the stall and the chanter at the trough all over again, in a bigger hat. Rusk tried to save it. He said do it again and think about it properly this time, and I could have told him what would happen, and I did not, because I still wanted it to work. They did it again, and this time about 40 of them did think about a man, and the man they thought about was Dre, because he is the one who had been in their street for over a week, and had drunk in their inn, and had mended a gate for a woman for nothing, and no coin fell for him either, because he is not me. So the square learned nothing at all, except that neither of us produced anything, which everybody read as both of us being liars, and I lost about a third of the room in that quarter of an hour, and never got it back. Rona was standing at the corner of the market cross the whole time, with the roll under her arm, saying nothing at all. She has not said my name where anybody could hear it since the morning she came out of the chalk. I did not know that then. I knew that she used husband and you, and that she has a way of getting through a whole day without needing the word, and I had put it down to a year of writing letters that could not carry a name in them. She came off the cross into the middle of the square, in front of 200 people, to do the one thing that would have ended it, which is for a wife to look at her husband and say his name and mean it. And she could not get it out. Not, would not. Could not, standing 4 feet from me with her chin up and 200 people waiting, in the one moment of her life when she had decided to spend the word in front of witnesses. I watched her open her mouth twice. She got as far as the first sound of it once, and then she stood there in the middle of a northern market square with 200 people watching her, and her hand went up to her throat, and nothing came. It is the worst 30 seconds of our marriage, and neither of us has ever tried to make it into anything else. She had spent 5 seasons taking that word out of her mouth every single time it came up on purpose, because she had worked out in a stock barn at Cold Harrow that a woman loving a man out loud is the loudest thing in any room he stands in. You cannot put a thing down for a year and then pick it up on demand in front of a crowd. That is the rule, and it applied to her exactly as it applies to everybody else, and she of all people knew it before she stepped off the cross, and she went anyway. And it settled nothing. I got her off the square and sat her on the instep, and she would not look at me for about 4 minutes, and then she said one sentence, which was that she had thought she could put it down and pick it up, and that she had been wrong about herself, and she has never gone back over it since. Ray was kind about it. What I kept coming back to, I have never been able to forgive him for. He said gently to the square that he was sorry for the woman and that nobody should be put through that, and about half of Marlbeck agreed with him out loud. Dre asked the square, while she was still standing there, whether anybody had ever seen a wife unable to say her own husband's name, and about 50 people made a noise that I could not read and did not want to. Then he said that he was sorry to have to point it out, and he was not sorry, and he had won the middle of that square with one sentence. There was a company man on the platform to cry the claim, because Task had sold Dre a christening at the going rate, and the crier the company sent north that autumn was Nib Calloway. He was standing there with the paper in his hand, and 1,000 people would have believed anything he said in that voice, and he had been paid, and the company does not pay twice. He came down off the platform instead. He said, to the steward and loudly enough for the front 4 rows, that he had cried for the company for 26 years and had never cried a claim he knew to be false, and that he had heard this man be terrible in the Ambry crying square for an hour, and this was not that man. It settled nothing. Marlbeck had never been to Ambry and did not much care what a guild crier from the capital thought about anything. It cost Calloway his rate, his christening fee, and his standing in the company, and he did it anyway, in a town he had no interest in, and then went and sat on a wall. I stood at the bottom end of that square for about 10 minutes and worked at it properly for the first time since I got there. The proof has to be a coin. There is nothing else. And every road into a coin was shut, and I had shut most of them myself over 2 years of experiments in front of witnesses who are still laughing about it. Which leaves one. There is exactly one feeling a man can produce in 200 strangers in 5 minutes without asking them for anything, and I had been farming it badly for a week in Grail 2 years earlier and had never once thought of using it on purpose about something true. So I got up on the mounting block outside the inn, and I told Marlbeck the worst thing I have ever done in front of my own wife, who had known what I was going to do about 4 seconds before I started and did not stop me. I had never said it out loud to anybody. Not to Dob, not to Bet, not to Mara Crow, and not once in 2 years to the woman standing at the corner of that cross who had been on the cart. I had let the district keep the picture and had gone round it for 2 years the way you go round a hole in a floor, not a version of it. I gave them the square at Ossen Ford and the writ for 400 crowns my father borrowed, and a collector who takes the one who can read. I gave them my wife on a cart with her own box under her arm. I gave them her screaming my name 61 times up the length of a lane. Then I gave them what I did. I went down on my hands and knees in the mud in front of 90 people and picked up 61 gold crowns while the cart went up the hill. I filled both coat pockets in my hat. I did not look up or run after her, and I have never once been able to say that it was not a choice. You could hear the square change. It is a physical thing, and I have never been on the wrong end of it before or since. 200 people who had spent an hour finding me tiresome stopped finding me tiresome and started to hate me properly, in the way you hate a specific man for a specific thing. Woman near the front said, "What kind of man does that?" And she said my name in it, and she meant every letter, and the first crown came down and hit the cobbles between us and rolled. Then it came down properly. 40 odd of them at once, gold on stone in a market square with 200 people watching, and I stood on a mounting block and let it land and did not pick any of it up, and the noise it made is the only argument that has ever gone entirely my way. Rusk the wheelwright picked one up, looked at it, and put it back down on the cobbles, and said to the square that they had all just watched the answer and that anybody who wanted to go on arguing could do it somewhere he was not standing. Then he went and got his own tools and came down to the dam. Dre was off the square before it stopped falling. He is a professional, and he did not wait for the end. He took a horse that was not his out of the inn yard and went north, and he took the only thing in that town worth taking, which was not money. He took Elsbeth Vane's northern circuit, 9 towns above the chalk, in her handwriting, built by a woman on foot over the better end of a year with nothing but her own face, and now they are towns that think Fenn Alder cheats them, and they have his description, and it is his. I could not do that speech again. I knew it standing on the block with the gold still on the ground, and I have never been more certain of anything in my life. We stayed 12 days and did the dam properly, an apron of 30 ton of quarried stone laid out in front of the toe with the water diverted through a side cut, and Rusk and about 30 of Marlbeck worked it with us and would not take a copper for any of it. Marlbeck will pay me for a year, and then it will stop, and what those mouths think about now when they hear my name is not a man who mends things, it is a husband on his knees in the mud after coins. I bought 1 square with the only fire I own, and I burned the ground under it doing it. It is a match. It is not a lamp. I get one of those per place in every bit of my life. And I had just spent 4 days from home to prove a thing that a piece of paper would have proved if anybody had thought to give me one. And Rona took the roll out that night and struck Marlbeck off it herself. Call came out of Harrow Scar on a Tuesday, and it was verified twice, by Bet on the Wednesday morning, and by Tam Bissell coming the other way on the same day, which is a thing we do now on anything above the chalk. Harrow Scar is a quarry village of about 140 people who take building stone out of a hillside, and it went onto the roll in Elsbett's hand last winter, and the call said the west face is moving, and we have no timber and no money. Bet had it off the relay man at Cordell and came in at dusk. Tam had it off a drover on the Ashcombe Road at about the same hour and came in from the other direction at midnight, and neither of them knew the other had been sent, which is exactly how the thing is meant to work, and the first time it ever had. We rode with the timber. That is the whole of this, and I am going to say it at the start, rather than let it arrive as a surprise. 210 crowns of sawn oak and larch, bought in the Ashcombe woods, carted 15 miles, stacked in my own yard, and every stick of it promised out loud in a lane to 40 burnt households at Braycombe. Rona argued for going without it and buying timber up there, and she was right on the money and wrong on the map, because there is no sawn stuff above the chalk, and a quarry village has stone and no trees, and the nearest yard to Harrow Scar is 4 days back the way we had come. Dob asked me at the gate whether we were taking it. I said we were. He counted the load onto the wagons out loud and did not say one word about Braycombe, and Braycombe was 10 weeks off its winter. Dre had been at Harrow Scar 3 weeks before us, and I did not learn that from a runner or from a rumor or from anybody being clever. I learned it from a quarry master standing in his own yard asking me why I had come back with wagons this time. He had taken 11 crowns and 4 silver off the quarry masters for shoring the west face, which is a fair price and the right work, and he had bought no timber at all. What he did was stand props of dressed offcuts from their own waste heap under the overhang and wedge them, which looks exactly like shoring and holds nothing. A prop of quarry waste under a moving face is a stick in a doorway. It stands there to be seen while carrying no load, so the crew works beneath it, because a man will work under anything that somebody has been paid to put in. The quarry masters had watched him do it. That is the thing nobody up there has ever been able to say out loud without looking at the floor. 2 of them stood in that cut for a day and a half watching a man wedge offcuts under an overhang, and it looked like work, and men who cut stone for a living do not claim to know timber. That is his crime entire, and I want it stated properly, because people up there have said worse things about him since, and they are not true. He did not push a hillside over. He took money for a job, did a picture of the job, and went away, and the picture was still standing when we came up the road. They were working under it when we arrived. The thing I could not get out of my head for weeks. It was a working morning, 15 men on the bench and 4 in the cut, and the face had been coming for 2 days and they were still taking stone out because a quarry that stops taking stone out does not eat. I got them off it in about 4 minutes, and it cost me the only real standing I had up there, because a quarry master who has been told to stop work by a stranger has to decide in front of his own men whether the stranger is right, and one of them decided I was not, and put 4 men back on the bench an hour later. The west face at Harrow Scar is about 60 feet of gray limestone, with a clay band running through it 4 feet off the floor, and when the clay wets, it moves, and it had rained for 12 days. There was a crack open along the top of the bench you could put your arm into. Pell was standing at the top of the yard when we came in a quarry village 4 days north of his own circuit, on ground where he holds no paper against anybody, with his horse tied and his hat already in his hand. He had been there since the previous evening, and not for the quarry. Harrow Scar owes nothing to anybody, and he has no writ up there at all. He was there because an unlicensed company was going to arrive and work a moving face, and an unlicensed company working a face is a penalty entered at Ambry, and he intended to be the man standing next to it when it happened. I asked him how he had known we were coming. He said he had not known and had not needed to. He said a company that answers calls goes where calls come from, and that the west face at Harrow Scar had been on every drover's tongue between the chalk and the Ashcombe for 12 days, and that he reads the same road I do. He said so. He said it pleasantly, with his hat in his hand, at 8 in the morning, in front of my own crew, and he did not threaten anybody, and he did not stop us, and he did not lift one finger. He priced us. He watched the wagons come in, and he counted the men, and he waited. I had a fight with my wife in that yard in front of my own crew and 15 quarrymen, and I lost it, and I would like to say I lost it well, and I did not. She went to get on the face. She had the roll and the count, and there was no reason on earth for her to be within 30 feet of that bench, and she went up onto it with Dobbs' second party because they were 4 men short with the wagon still coming, and she can hold a line and set a wedge. I said no in the open. She asked me, with everyone watching, whether I was saying it to her or to my wife. I said I was saying it to a woman whose lungs I had filled with chalk. She answered that causing the damage gave me a duty, not ownership, and that if I wanted 4 fewer hands on a moving face, I should say so to Dobb, and not to her. I said that a crew is his to staff and a wife is mine. She said that on this hillside, she was not a wife, she was 4 hands, and that if I wanted to be the man who decides who works, then I could say so to the 15 quarrymen as well, and we would all go home. Dobb, who was standing right there, said he needed 4 hands. That was the end of it. I have never been beaten so completely by 2 sentences in my life, and every man in that yard watched it happen. The work itself is craft, and there is nothing heroic in any of it, and anybody who tells you otherwise has never stood under a moving face. Do not hold a face up. Nobody has ever held a face up. What you do is get the men out from under the bit that is coming and put real props under the bit you want to keep in the right order, from the safe end towards the bad end, so that you never have anybody standing under an unsupported span. The first job was taking out every one of Dre's props, one at a time, and everyone came loose with a hand instead of a bar. I pulled the third out with 2 fingers to show the quarry masters what they had bought for 11 crowns, and one of them had to sit down. A sole plate is a flat balk laid on the floor to spread the foot, because a prop standing on quarry rubble punches into it under load and drops the head an inch, and an inch is all of the difference between a prop carrying and a prop watching. We laid 16 of those before a single upright went in. Only then did the uprights go in. 16 large props, footed on sole plates and headed against the overhang with hardwood wedges driven from both sides, each one cut and dressed on the spot, because a prop that is not exactly the right length carries nothing. Braycombe's roofs went into that hillside in about 10 hours, and I have never once pretended otherwise to anybody in Braycombe. Clay band ran all afternoon while we worked under it. It comes out in wet handfuls, and it makes a noise like somebody chewing, and every man on that bench had the same habit inside an hour, which was to stop, listen for 4 seconds, and go back to it. Rona went down twice. The first time was after about 2 hours, on the bench, when the dust off the sawing got into her and she coughed until she could not stand up, and one of the quarrymen sat her against the wall and gave her water, and she went back on. The second time was worse, and it was Dobb who saw it. He came off the bench with her over his shoulder and put her in the wagon and told 2 men to sit with her, and then went back on, and he never said anything to me about it either then or since, and I did not have to be told. The coins came all afternoon, and the one that mattered came at about 4, and every day of 3 years of not being able to be quiet was leading to that 1 minute whether I knew it or not. He had been calling for me since the first cart came up the hill. 140 people, terrified, standing on a hillside watching a face move, saying Fenn Alder to each other and to the sky for most of a day, and it fell all afternoon. You cannot stop it. There is no off. Gold came down into a working quarry with 16 fresh props in it and men underneath them, and for about 4 seconds every time it was funny, and the quarrymen laughed at it the first 3 or 4 times because a man laughs at gold. And then one came down at the head of the 11th prop and went into the gap between the timber and the rock and stuck there, 4 feet up, where a man could see it. Nobody had a rule about it. What I could not get past, I have gone over most. We had a rule about head count and a rule about false calls and a rule about staffing, and in 2 years of gold falling on jobs, nobody had ever written down the plainest one of the lot. Al Corbet went for it. He is from Austin Ford. His father's house had a writ served on it on the night of the weir, and I had known him since he was 9, and he had been on my wages for 2 years, and he was standing 4 feet away with his hand free, and it was a gold crown, and it took him about a second and a half. He put his hand and then his shoulder in behind the prop head, and he shifted it, and the face came down on all of that span while he was in it. Hal Corbet was killed by my money. People up there still want it to have been Dre, or Pell, or the weather, or plain bad luck, and I have had 2 years to find another way of writing that sentence down, and there is not one. Face took about 15 feet of the bench, and the 11th, 12th, and 13th props with it. The 14th held, and everything beyond it is still standing today. The quarry masters have mentioned that twice, and it has never sounded like good news. We got him out in about 40 minutes, and it did not matter. Dobb counted the crew 4 times in the first minute after it went out loud and got to 8, and then counted again and got to 8, and that is how everybody in that quarry found out. He changed the crew rule that evening, standing over the body in the barn they laid him in. Nobody picks up a coin on a job, whether it falls on a face, in a yard, on a roof, or in a fire. It stays where it falls until the work is finished. Then, whoever remains gathers it into the crew's box instead of mine. One of the 8 asked, what happens if a coin lands on a man? Dobb said, then, you move the man and leave the coin. And if the coin has to be moved to move the man, then 2 of you do it with a bar, and neither of you does it with a hand. And nobody argued with any part of that. He chalked the rule onto the barn wall. He asked whether I agreed in front of the 8 of them, and I said I did, and he said good, because he would have had it either way. I went to Austin Ford with the body myself, and told his father in his own kitchen, and I will not write down what was said in it. He asked me one thing at the door afterwards, which was whether the coin had been gold, and I said it had, and he nodded as though that settled something and shut the door. All came to the burial. He stood at the back with his hat off through every bit of it and behaved perfectly, and afterwards he came over to me at the gate and told me that he would not be entering the penalty today and that he would take it Thursday. That is the coldest thing anybody has ever done to me, and it is not close. He did not collect at a graveside because a man who collects at a graveside is not the reasonable man of his own villages anymore. He collected on the Thursday correctly for 60 crowns, and every person in Harrow Scar thought better of him for the weight. Dre went down the hill with 11 crowns and 4 silver while we were putting the props in. Somebody saw him on the Ashcombe Road at noon, and by the time I had men free to go after him, he was 3 days out and gone. And the reason he was gone is that the company of criers had sold him a route. That is what a christening buys. Task's people had cried him into 4 northern towns and had told him which 4, and a man who knows in advance which towns have been prepared for him knows exactly which road not to be on. I could not have caught him with 9 men and a fortnight. Harrow Scar paid us in stone, 30 ton of dressed building block offered by the quarrymasters in the yard. We did not want it and could not carry it. We could not refuse it without insulting a village that had just watched a man die under its own hillside. It went to Braycombe on the return carts and is in 4 of those walls. 3 towns took themselves off the roll that month, and Harrow Scar had nothing to do with it. A man in a leather nail apron had been through them in the spring, and they had worked out what they had paid for, and they had decided that whoever we were not worth the risk of finding out. The one that wrote to say so was a place called Ness, and the letter was 4 lines and perfectly polite, and folded inside it were 13 coppers, being the last of what they had raised towards a job they never got. Bet carried it down and put it on the barn table and did not say anything about it at all. Rona was still coughing on the day she gave me the answer, and she gave it once, in about a dozen words, and would not go over it a second time when I asked her to. I had 4 men and a fortnight costed out on the barn table and a route north drawn on Ottilie's board, and I had been at it for 3 days, and she stood and looked at the whole arrangement for a while before she said anything at all about it. She said, "Stop chasing him." She said a man wearing a name inherits what the name owes, and that Cass and Dre had spent 4 months collecting my debts on purpose and had not once thought about what happens when somebody comes to collect them back off him. And there was a chancellery clerk in Harrow Scar all of that week with a tally board, counting and not counting props or the dead. He was standing in the road stopping people and asking them how often they say the word, and he wrote down every answer, and he did not hide what he was doing from anybody. The border levy came down the Sallow Road in the 2nd week of May, and it was served by writ, which nobody outside a chancellery had expected, because a levy has always been a recruiter and a drum and a table outside an inn. A writ does not ask. That is the point of doing it by writ, and Ione Ostry knew exactly what she was doing when she drafted it. A levy served as an instrument on a village names a number of men and makes the village liable for the number, and the village hands them over or pays. So it was collectors and not sergeants who went out with it, because collectors are the men who already know which door to knock on, and the Hesper House had the Northern Circuit, and the Northern Circuit is Pell's. A village may pay instead of sending at 11 crowns a head, which is a number a chancellery arrived at by working out what a village will just about fail to raise. Ford would have needed 121 crowns in 3 days and had about 14, and every household in it did that sum on the Thursday morning. He served it on Austin Ford on a Thursday off the same post he chalks his dates on, in the same square, and he took 11 men out of 90 souls, and I was 3 days away and did not hear about it for a week. Sedge went. The wheelwright's 2 sons went. Fossick went, who was holding a basket of eggs when the sky opened on him 3 years ago. They walked up the Sallow Road on the Friday with about 400 others out of his own villages, and Pell wrote every name into the book and did not say one of them aloud. Nobody ordered anybody to chant anything. I need that understood before the rest of it, because a great many people have since told the story as though the Crown put my name into 400 mouths on purpose, and the Crown did no such thing and would never have thought of it. What happened is that they were frightened, and it was the 2nd morning, and the rumor on that road for 2 years has been that there is a man who comes when he is called. I have asked a dozen men since where they first heard it, and got a dozen different answers, and not one of them was a crier. A drover at a trough, an aunt at Whitlow, a man who had been at Braycombe Fair the year the greeting was planted and had remembered the wrong thing about it. Mara Crow put that on the Sallow Road herself at a water trough in Nettlestair, 1 drover at a time, before I had a company or a wagon or a name over a door. Ottilie's people carried it round her whole circuit. Every man who walked out of Braycombe or Whitlow or Fallowmere had a version of it. So on the 2nd morning, going up a road none of them had ever been up, some man in the middle of 400 said Fenn Alder the way men say a name for luck, and the man next to him said it, and by the afternoon it was going down the column in blocks. It is not a drill, and it is not a wage, and it is not a joke. 400 men who expect to be dead by the end of the month, praying at a stranger they have never seen, because a woman at a trough told a drover something true about him 3 years ago. Was 60 miles away in my own barnyard at Grail on the morning of the charge, mending a barrel head, with my sleeves rolled and my back to the door, and no more idea of what was happening than the mare had. The sky opened on me at about 8, and it did not stop for the better part of an hour. Gold. only gold. It came down on the barn roof, and the flags, and the wagon, and the water butt, and into the open door of the barn. And it went on and on and on. And Dobbs stopped counting after the first quarter of an hour because there was no point. 1 hour, one charge, and I did not know it was a charge. And I did not know where, or who, or why. And it paid me more gold in that hour than every hale in every town in Velen had paid me in the best month I ever had. I was in the middle of it with my hands full, and my wife in the doorway, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Because there is only one thing that makes gold fall like that, and we both knew what it was, and we did not know where. That is the cruelty of the business at its very purest, and nothing else has ever come near it. Somewhere in Velen, that morning, several hundred people were about to die, and the only fact I was given about it was the weight. I found out 4 days later from a man called Ren Fossick, who is the son of the man with the eggs, and who came back down the sallow road on a cart with his foot gone below the ankle. He sat in my barnyard with the foot up and told me about it in the flat way people tell you those things, and then he said the thing I have not been able to get rid of since. He said he had been saying my name going up the field. He said he was not asking for anything, he just wanted somebody to be there. He had the hour wrong by about a quarter, and everything else exactly right. He said it started in the second block and went forward, not back. The men behind them had picked it up off the sound, not the sense. By the time it reached the front, nobody in it could have told you who they were saying. I asked him whether he knew I could hear it. He said no. He said he knew perfectly well that nobody could hear it and that he said it anyway, and then he asked me what the take had been because the entire column knew what I am and had made jokes about it going up the road. I told him the number. He worked out his own share of it in his head, 400 men, 1 hour. And he laughed, and then he stopped laughing, and I gave him a wagon and a wage, and he keeps the barn book to this day. By the third week, it paid nothing at all, and I know the week it stopped to within about 2 days, because Dobb keeps the metal in separate bags, and Ren Fossick had started keeping the barn book by then. Ren Fossick had the rest of it off the men who came down the road after him. A sergeant of the second company heard them doing it and turned it into a call, because that is what a sergeant is for. By the third week, it was being shouted on a beat before a march, the way any drill is shouted. 400 mouths saying it in time paid me nothing at all. Corbin Slate told me later that the Crown's paymaster had stood in that field and watched the whole curve from one end to the other. Gold in an hour, silver in a week, then a drill order that paid nothing. He wrote it up, and his report is the reason for everything that happened for the rest of that year. Council read it in June and panicked, which is a thing councils do, and voted to ban the name outright. Speaking it aloud in any public place, a fine of 2 crowns, entered as an offense against the coinage. Ostre argued against it in the room. I have this from 3 people who were in it, including Corbin Slate, and all 3 tell it the same way, which is that she told the council in about 4 sentences precisely what would happen, and was voted down by 11 to 4. Then she signed it. She did not resign, and she did not delay it, and she did not water it down. She put her seal on the ban she had just argued against, and the clerk who brought the copy down to Grail told me she said, while she was signing, that it is already the rule. It was the most expensive 9 days in the history of the Crown, and I laughed for most of them, and I do not intend to pretend otherwise to make myself look better than I was that fortnight. Rona said why on the first evening, once, and has never said it again since. A forbidden name is the only name nobody ever says by accident. Every mouth that says it has decided to, on purpose, about a man. And that is the exact condition the entire thing is built on. They cried the ban in 90 towns. 90 criers of the Company of Criers and Heralds at the going rate, reading out a proclamation that named the name in order to forbid it 4 times a day in every market square in Velen. I made 14 crowns off the proclamation itself before one single person in Velen had broken it, and not 1 copper of it came off a crier. It came off the market crowds standing under them, hearing a name read out as a thing to be afraid of and turning to each other to say it. Then people started breaking it, and not in defiance mostly. A man says a forbidden word in an inn to see whether he dares. Boys shouted at each other over walls. 200 people at Whitlow Market said it at once on the Saturday for the pleasure of doing it, and every one of them meant a specific man because they had all had to think about him first in order to be naughty. 9 days, 394 crowns. Dobb kept it in a separate bag with the date on a slip inside it and would not let it go into the general count, and he was right, because it was money that came out of a mistake somebody else made and was never going to come again. I have never earned like that before or since, and it came out of nothing but a law, and the law was signed by a woman who had told a room exactly what would happen. Harold Pike arrested me on the 4th day of it in Grail Market for saying my own name aloud, which is an offense I was in fact committing, and he did it apologetically, and I paid the 2-crown fine, and the coin that landed while he was writing it out covered about a 5th of it. She withdrew it on the 9th day. The proclamation of withdrawal is 4 lines, and it does not explain anything, and it does not admit anything, and the criers read that out too, and I made another 2 crowns off it. And then she did the intelligent thing, and it took her about a fortnight, and it beat me for 2 years. Corbin Slate is master of the Ambry Mint, and he is a man who cares about one thing, which is that his dies are clean, and his weights are right. In February, my company had turned out at 4 in the morning to a timber yard fire on the north side of Ambry that was 40 feet from the Mint's own store, and had stood in it for 5 hours. He does not forget that sort of thing. He put a struck trial coin into Bet Coyle's hand at the mint gate himself, with the striking date scratched on a slip of paper wrapped round it, and he told her what Austri had said to the council, because he had been standing in the room when she said it. He said Austri told them that a forbidden name is spoken with maximum meaning, and that they had just voted to make the man rich, and that if they wanted him poor, they should not take the word away. They should give it to everybody, for nothing, in a form where it means an object. Bet ran it south in 3 days. So, I was standing in my own barn holding a coin with my own name on it a fortnight before the kingdom had ever heard of one. Bet would not take anything for that run. She said Slate had given it to her and not to me, and that she had carried it because she wanted to see my face, and she stood in the barn doorway watching me turn it over for the entire hour and did not say one word. It is about the size of a thumbnail, and it is bronze, and it is very badly worn already because trial strikes get handled, and on the reverse it says 1 Fenn, and that is all. And I sat in the barn and turned it over for about an hour. 4 Fenns to the copper. A quarter of the smallest money there has ever been in Velen, which is a coin for buying a single egg or half a candle or nothing at all, and it has my given name on it because that is what the Chancellery decided to call it. I spent the fortnight buying copper in Grail and Nettlestair and Marrowgate and Whitlow, in lots small enough that nobody in any of those towns had a story about it worth telling to anybody else. Not gold. Copper in small lots, quietly, in 4 market towns at the going rate, out of the levy money. And Thrill thought I had lost my reason and told me so, and changed it for me anyway, because a fee is not an opinion. I could not have explained it then. I only knew that a coin was coming, and that I was going to want the metal that a coin gets measured against. It is the same loophole I found over a bread stall in Grail with 2 loaves and a bit of chalk on my first week as a rich man. It cost me an axle to find, and it was about to cost me everything else I had. The first striking was a public ceremony in the Great Square at Ambry, because a new coin is a thing a crown wants seen, and they threw them to the crowd by the handful off the mint steps. I went because Rona said go. She said that a man who is not in that square will be told about it by 4 people with 4 different accounts, and that whatever happened up there was going to be the thing we spent the next year answering, and that I had better have seen it with my own eyes. I have never seen anything like the noise. 2 million coins had been struck over 5 weeks, and they threw the first few thousand of them into a square holding about 10,000 people, and it was a gift, and it was free money, and it turned into a crush inside 4 minutes. People went down at the front. Not many, and nobody died, and there were about 40 hurt and 13 of them badly, mostly ribs and 1 collarbone and a woman's arm, and they went down under the feet of people going after coins with my name stamped on them. I worked it with my hands for about an hour, pulling people up off cobbles in a square in the capital, while a rain of my own name came down on my head and shoulders out of 100 hands, and I earned nothing at all out of any of it, because not one person in that square was thinking about a man. Rona met Austri on the mint steps while I was still down in the crowd, and I was not there for it, and what I have is what my wife told me that night, and she is not a woman who improves a story. She said she asked the Chancellor one question, which was whether she understood what she had just done to the word, and she said Austri did not pretend, and did not look away, and said yes, and then said that a thing which is ordinary cannot be dangerous, and that this had been true for 11,000 instruments, and was true for this one. Rona said she could hear that the woman meant it, and that she said so, and that Austri looked at her properly for the first time and asked her what else she could hear. My wife told me she answered honestly, and that she has regretted it since, because a woman who deals in precedent had just found out that hearing is a thing that exists. Slate himself came down off the steps at the end of it, and helped in his mint coat, and afterwards he told me that he had asked for the throwing to be done from a stand and out of baskets, and had been overruled by somebody who wanted it to look generous, and that he had put the objection in writing beforehand. 2 million Fenns went out at 4 to the copper, and inside 2 months, give me 3 Fenns meant loose change in every market in Velen. Nobody says a coin's name at a person, they say it at a hand holding out a hand. My income went to about £1 a week. The Hales were dead, the North thought I was a swindler, Braycombe was owed 40 roofs, and Harrowscar had cost me 210 of timber and a man, and the company had 8 men on 3 silver a day. Sister Hallie fed the crew for 12 days on the almshouse guarantee she extracted in a lane at Whitlow, with the fire still going, and 4 named men of that town honored it to the last barrel, and I have never had to ask her for anything twice. Dobweller paid the wages out of his own pocket for 1 week, and did not tell me until the Friday after, and when I found out, we had the only real argument the 2 of us have ever had, and I lost that one as well. At the end of the season, we stood the company down in the barnyard, and not by list or by notice. Dob did it out loud, by name, one at a time, the way he counts them onto a wagon, and he got to the end of the 8 and then said his own name last and put the fire hook against the wall. The queue at Grail Market broke at about 10:15 in the morning, and it broke at the front, where a woman with a baby on her hip was being pushed onto the trestle by 400 people who had been standing since dawn. What I had on that trestle was 1 cart of copper, and I want to say plainly what that cart cost, because everything after it runs on the fact that there was no second cart, and everybody in Grail could see there was no second cart. I sold the barn. 4 crowns a quarter for 2 years, and I sold the lease and the stock and the beam and the weighing floor I built with my own hands in 15 days. And the wagons had gone to Pell on the upland road a year and a half before that and were never coming back. I sold my father's tools. He borrowed 400 crowns against a house I still live in and never told me. And his chisels and his 2 planes and his brace went to a joiner at Nettlestair for 11 crowns and 4 silver. And I do not want anybody feeling anything about that. Ren Fossick sold the last of it for me because I could not stand in the yard for all of that week. And he got 15 silver more than I would have, and he entered every line of it in the barn book in his own hand, and then closed the book and gave it to me. And I took the 4 burnt letters off the barn door with a saw because the door went with the lease, and the man who bought it did not want a name on it. I have that piece of board still. It is the only thing I kept off that place. The whole of it came to 225 crowns, and Thryle turned it into 54,000 coppers, which is 1 cart, and a cart is a great deal smaller than a town when the town is standing round it. The barn went for 15 crowns, because a lease with 2 quarters left on it is worth what somebody will give you on a Tuesday, and the beam went with it. And I stood in that yard while a carrier's man measured my weighing floor for a hay store and told me the flags were laid well. Sarn Ruddock was on the box with a stave across his knees, out of Marrowgate jail, on my guarantee, on wages. Marrowgate would not release him to me until I had stood in front of their own magistrate and put a figure on it. And the figure was everything I had left after the copper, which is to say nothing at all. So the guarantee is my word and my word alone, and the town took it. Marrowgate had held him 14 months and had not hanged him, because a town that has been robbed wants restitution more than it wants a rope, and I put up the guarantee and took him out and put him on 4 silver a day, which is a wage and not a split, and he made a very great deal of noise about that and took it. He said on the first morning that the only man qualified to stop a cart being taken is the man who used to take them, and he was right, and he has never once tried anything, and he laughed at the wrong moment about 4 times a day for all of that year. Ona was on the tailgate with a slate and a stub of chalk when the front of the queue went over, and she did not get down. She said it in the middle of the crush, over the noise, and it is the 3rd time in every bit of this that anybody has said the thing out loud, and it is the last. She said, they say it and mean nobody. Give them somebody. 9 words said over the top of a breaking queue by a woman with a slate and a chalk lung, and I have had 2 years since to improve on them, and I have not managed a single syllable of it. The terms I invented standing on that trestle with a woman's baby in my arms are, I am told, the most reckless thing anybody has offered a kingdom in living memory. 1 copper for every Fenn. 4 times face. From anybody in Velen who brings me one, at my table, in coin, on the day. Ruddock told me from the box that I had just done the only thing in 3 years that he could not have thought of himself, and then he laughed, and then he asked what my security was, and I said the coppers in the cart, and he said the coppers in the cart would be gone by dinner. 4 times face is all of it. A Fenn is a quarter of a copper, and the Crown has just made 2 million of them, and everybody who is paid in them knows exactly what has been done to their week's wages. 4 times face is not a bargain. It is a man saying he will personally undo it. It went round Grail Market in about half an hour. By 11 o'clock, the queue was down the fish row and out past the corn cross, and by 1:30 it was not a queue anymore. Table went over at noon. It simply went with about 800 people leaning on the front of it, and 50 pounds of copper went into the mud, and there were people on their hands and knees in it. And for about 90 seconds, I thought somebody was going to be killed at my own trestle. Dobb and Ruddock held the front between them, one at each end. Dobb counting out loud the way he does, and Ruddock doing something else entirely, which involved a stave and a great deal of cheerfulness. And between them, they got a gap open and got the woman with the baby out through it. A crush is not a crowd being angry. It is 800 people at the back who cannot see the front, all leaning forward 4 inches at a time, and the people at the front carrying every one of those inches on their ribs. You do not push it back. You open a gap sideways and let it drain into the gap. Ona did not help with the table. She walked the line instead, the whole length of it, twice, from the front to the back and out into the fish row, listening. That is her trade, and it is the only reason any of what followed worked. She came back at about 1 and told me 2 things. The first was that about 1/3 of the line was talking about the coin, and the coin pays nothing and never will. The second was that the rest were talking about a man who owed them a copper. I ran out of copper at about 12:10, and Ren Fossick turned the last sack out onto the boards and held it upside down so the front of the queue could see the inside of it, which was his idea and was the right one. 54,000 Fenns redeemed in one morning at a copper each, which is 225 crowns, and 1 cart and a barn and a beam and my father's chisels, and there were about 1,000 people still standing in Grail Market with their hands full of coins. So I got up on the table that was already lying on its side and gave them my word instead, which is the only thing I had left in stock. 1 copper a Fenn. From me personally, not from any company, and not from the Crown. At my tables, in 9 towns on days I would name, until every Fenn in Velen is in. And if I am not at the table myself, then somebody standing at it is paying on my word, and I am good for it. Dick asked me from the box quietly whether I had any idea what I had just promised. I said I would work it out that evening. He said he had worked it out already, and that it was the largest debt any private man had taken on in the history of Velen. And then he laughed, and it was the wrong moment as usual, and it was also correct. Nobody in that market believed I could do it. That is the thing people always leave out when they tell it back to me. They did not cheer. About 400 of them wrote their names and their towns on a board that Ren Fossick held up because Rona had a slate ready before I had finished talking, and the rest went home to think about a man who owed them money. Anselm Thriel refused to back the promise in public in front of all of Grail Market, and I have never held 1 hour of it against him. He came out of his own shop into the market and said in front of about 1,000 people that he would not put a copper of his own behind that promise, and then he did the decent thing, which was to say exactly why instead of just saying no. He said that a promise to pay 4 times face on a coinage of 2 million, made by a man with no barn, no wagons, no tools, and no company, is not a business, it is a wish with a number on it. He said the sum has not been said out loud yet, and that until somebody says it out loud, everybody in that square was going to go on believing something comfortable. Then he said he would change my copper at his standing fee and keep changing it, and that a fee is not an opinion, which is the 3rd time he has said that to me, and the 3rd time it has been worth more than the money. I went ahead without him. I did it because there was nothing else to do, and because 1,000 people in that market had heard me say it, and a man whose entire trade is being sent for cannot be a man whose word runs out at noon on a Tuesday. Attilie Crane planted the promise the same way she planted the greeting, which is the same trade going in the opposite direction, and she did it for nothing and would not discuss the question of a fee. She said it was the easiest job she had ever been given, and the only one she had ever been ashamed to be paid for, and that a word travels when saying it makes you one of the people who say it, and that whole towns of people telling each other a man was good for a copper was going to move faster than any hail ever had. She did not use the fair circuit this time because there was no season on. She used the drove roads and the inns and the relay points of Bet's network, and it moved at the speed of a body, and it was 9 towns in 9 days, and by the 4th day, the word was arriving in towns before I was. The 4th table went up on the ash at Braycombe, under the only roof still standing at that end, which is the chapel porch, and Goodwife Sennett opened it herself with a scale and a lamp because I was still 2 days behind. There is a thing about that table that I did not arrange and could not have. The redemption traffic through Braycombe brought carters and drovers and a quarter of the county through a burnt village every day for a month, and the money that went across that table went into the timber that put those 40 roofs up. I stood in that porch on the 6th day, and Sennett gave me the account of it, ruled in her own hand. 40 roofs, sawn, carded, framed, and thatched, discharged, and she read the line out to the queue because the queue was the people it had been promised to. And the company came back, all 8 of them, without being written to, and without a wage being mentioned by anybody at any point in the entire business. Nobody sent for them. They had been stood down at the end of the season, by name, one at a time, in a yard that I do not own anymore. Dobb went round 8 houses in 4 villages on foot over 3 days and asked them by name, and each of them came. And there were no wages, and everybody knew there were no wages. They came because the tables were the only work left in the kingdom that looked like work, and because Dobb Weller asked them, and I have not got a better reason than that, and I have stopped looking for one. About 30 of the followers who have walked behind me since the Bissell floor came in the same week without being asked at all, and I put every one of them on a table, which is the first honest use anybody ever found for them. Pell came for the copper on the 4th day at Grail, with paper, correctly at the right hour in front of the market. He had an attachment out of Ambry for the assessment arrears and the Harrow Scar penalty, and the interest on both, and it was good paper, and it named a sum, and it was entered, and he came down the fish row to the table to read it out. He came at the right hour, and by the right route, and he had 2 men with him, and neither of them touched anybody, and I have gone over that morning enough times to be certain that he did nothing at all that a collector should not do. He never got to the end of the first line. The queue closed in front of him, not violently and not on anybody's word. About 1,000 people who were standing in a line to be paid a copper each simply did not open, and he stood in the middle of Grail Market holding a lawful instrument and could not get to the table it was addressed to. He asked them to stand aside. He asked politely, twice, and he used the tick, and a woman about 4 back from the front told him that she had been in that line since 6 and that he could join it at the end like everybody else. I did not say one word to him. I want that understood because everybody who tells this back to me puts a speech in my mouth, and there was no speech. I stood behind a trestle and paid coppers out to people for 10 minutes while a collector who had been correct for 22 years stood in a crowd and was not let through. He went. He did not shout, and he did not send for anybody, and he did not come back that week. And the thing he lost in that market was not the copper, because there was no copper to speak of. it was 1,000 people on his own circuit watching him fail to be obeyed. Pell went back to Ambry and had the attachment renewed and came again at the 7th table 10 days later and lost to a Q in a different town on the same terms. And after that, he stopped bringing it to market days and started writing instead. Thrial said the sum out loud on the 9th day in Grail because somebody had to, and he had told me at the start that he would. 2 million Fens at 1 copper each is 2 million coppers. 2 million coppers is 8,333 crowns and 80 coppers over. He said it standing on a bollard so people could hear him, and he said the second half too. Fenn Alder does not have 8,300 crowns, has never had 1/20th of it, and by any honest reckoning, never will. Market went quiet for it. And then it did the thing that neither of us expected, which is that it did not disperse. Because every single person standing there was now holding a coin in their own hand with a man's name on it, and that man had just been proved to owe them personally. And there is nothing in the world people think harder about than a debt owed to them by somebody who cannot pay. The first full day after the word had finished running the length of the kingdom paid 411 crowns, and Dob counted it twice on a plank at the back of the cart because there was no beam left to weigh anything on. Gold most of it, and the gold came from the people whose own wages had been struck in fens, which is to say the crown's own carters and clerks and gate guards and the men off the levee, because those are the people who had actually been robbed. Silver from everybody else. Not 1 copper of it from a hail. Ona did the arithmetic on the tailgate at the end of that day, out loud, with the slate. 411 a day against 8,333 is 21 days, if it holds, and nothing in this business has ever held. Then she got down off the tailgate and went back to the line, because it was dusk and there were still about 200 people in it, and we did not shut that table until the last of them had been paid. Corbin Slate was in the council room again, and he told Bet what happened in it, at the mint gate, in the same doorway he handed her the trial coin, because he pays what he owes, and he owed my company a timber yard. Bostre killed her own 2 best answers out loud, to the whole council, before anybody else could suggest them, and Slate said she did it deliberately so that nobody in that room could come back to her with either of them a week later. The first was to strike 10 million more Fens and drown me. She said it and then answered it. 10 million more coins meant 10 million more mouths paid in rubbish. Each would hold a coin with a man's name on it, be owed a copper by that man personally, and think about him every time they counted their change. The second was to hold me. It is already the rule that a debtor may be taken, and I owed the crown an assessment and a penalty and the interest on both, and there was a lawful instrument in Pell's coat that had been beaten by a Q and not by a court. She would not do it. Slate said she gave one reason and gave it flatly, which is that a man in a cell stops being sent for, and inside a month nobody in the kingdom means him at all, and that the council would then have a silent prisoner, an unredeemed coinage, and 8,000 crowns of public fury with nowhere to go. Then she sent men to 9 market squares to close the tables, which she knew was the weakest thing on the table, and did it anyway, because a council that has been told no twice needs to be given something. Slate did not have to tell anybody any of it, and he knew what it was worth. He said one thing to Bet on his own account before she went, which was that he had asked to have the unnaming put on the record as his own suggestion and had been refused, and that he was telling her so that at least 2 people alive knew it. Bet came in on the Thursday night at 10, with all of it in her head and the tally stick in her belt, and I was on a horse before midnight. 9 towns, 6 days, a table in each one that I had promised to stand behind personally, and chancellery men riding out of Ambry the same morning. I did the arithmetic on the road, and it worked if the roads worked, and the roads did not work, because roads never do. The Marrowgate ferry was out on the second day, which is the crossing I have used 50 times in 3 years, and had stopped thinking of as a crossing at all, the way you stop thinking of a door as a hole in a wall. Hesk had it drawn up with a broken chain and 30 feet of the near ramp gone from a winter flood. The water was up. He stood at the top of his own bank and told me plainly that the crossing was shut for a fortnight. He was very sorry, and I would have to go round by the ford at Cordell. Hesk offered me the one thing he had, which was his own boat and himself in it, for me alone and no horse, and I would have been across in a quarter of an hour and afoot on the far side with 60 miles to go. I turned it down, and he said he had thought I would, and went back up his bank. I was warned about that ford once, in a barnyard at the small hours, by a 12-year-old with a hazel stick, and I did not use the warning that night either. I lost 10 hours to it. 10 hours, a horse lamed, a night in a wet coat, and the second town reached at noon on a day I should have been there at dawn. And the second town had solved it without me, entirely before I got there, and had been solving it for about 4 hours by the time I came down the street with a lame horse and a face like a man arriving at a funeral he has organized. The table was open. About 700 people stood in that square, with 2 chancellery men at the end of the queue. They were not closing anything. They had been paid in Fens like everybody else in the Crown's employment, had come to the front and then gone back to the end out of embarrassment. One of them told me so himself. He had a letter in his coat instructing him to close this table and 12 crowns of face value in Fens at home. Those coins were worth about 2.5 crowns by then. He was going to be paid first and serve the letter afterwards, in that order. And did I have any objection? The other one would not queue at all. He stood at the corner of that square for 4 hours with the letter in his coat and did not serve it and did not go away. And when I asked him why, he said he was waiting for somebody senior to tell him what to do and that nobody was going to. I said I had none whatsoever. He was paid, and then he served the letter on me correctly, and then he stood about looking uncomfortable for an hour, and then he went home. You cannot close a market square with men who are paid in the money the market is there to redeem. That is every bit of Austria's problem in one sentence, and she had seen it in the council room before anybody else and had sent them anyway. Fourth table is where I found Cassandre, 4 days out of Ambry, in a northern square I had never stood in, on the last afternoon of his life as me. I came into the square at about 4 in the afternoon, and there were 300 people taking him apart, in the open, against a wall, and it had been going on for about 20 minutes, and somebody had already broken his arm. They had brought their coins to the Fenn Alder they could find. He had been working the north for a year with my name on him and my apron cut and my manner mirrored, and when the promise came up the road ahead of me, the whole of that country did the obvious thing, and he could not pay 1 copper of it. Tried. The thing nobody believes when I tell it. He had opened a table, because he had no choice at all, and he had paid out of his own pocket until it was empty, which took about 2 hours. And then he had stood there and been unable to do the one thing my name now promises. My worst 4 seconds were the ones I spent sitting on that horse before I moved, looking at a man being kicked against a wall by 300 people who thought they were kicking me and thinking that it was, in a way, exactly what he had bought. I got them off him, Ruddock and Dobb and 4 of the company, and it was not gentle, and I have no complaint about anybody in that crowd. Then I had to decide, in the square, in front of everybody, whether I was going to honor a swindler's version of my own promise, because he had taken names on a board and given his word at a table under my name, and about 90 people in that square were holding his tally slips. I paid them. Every slip he wrote, at a copper a Fenn off the day's takings, and it cost me about 19 crowns, and it took 2 hours, and I did it standing next to him while he sat against a wall with his arm held on by a woman who had been kicking him 10 minutes earlier. He said the thing he always says, which is that I would have done the same. I said I probably would have. Then I told him the only thing worth saying to him, which is that he was free to go on being me anywhere in Velen he liked, and that from that afternoon every promise he made in my name was a debt he was going to be asked for at the next table. That is the end of Cassandre, and there was no chase in it. He went south with one arm, and he has not used the name since, because a name that owes 8,000 crowns is not a thing anybody steals twice. Elsbeth Vane took her roll back herself, and she did it in front of the queue, which is exactly where it should have happened. She had walked down from the north when the word came up the road, and she had her own list with her, in her own hand, the one she made on foot over the best part of a year, and she stood at that table and read out 9 towns and said which of them were hers and had always been hers. She did not hand it to me. She has never handed it to me. She runs those 9 towns and 2 more that she has added since, and she takes a copper a run when she runs, and she has told me twice that her face is not for sale, and she has not needed to tell me a 3rd time. The 5th town had run out of copper before I got to it, which was the thing I had been waiting for since Grail, because it was always going to happen somewhere. Table with nothing on it is worse than no table at all. 400 people had come in off the farms with their coins tied in cloths, and there was a woman standing behind an empty board, apologizing to every one of them, and she had been doing it since 8 in the morning on my word. I bought a coppersmith's entire stock. All of it, sheet and rod and offcut and a barrel of blanks, at his price and not mine, which was about a 5th over what Thrial would have called it. And I paid the 5th without arguing, because a man who argues about a 5th in a town with an empty table deserves what he gets. That put 800 crowns of coppers into the 5th and 6th tables between them, and it took a day I did not have. And while I was doing it, Ottilie Crane's people were 40 miles ahead of me on the drove roads. She had put 4 of her own on horses and sent them up the road with nothing but the promise and the days, and the last 3 tables opened before I ever reached those towns, run by people I had never met, on my word, against a slate, and every copper of it was paid, and every account balanced when I finally got there. Corvin Task caught me on the road between the 6th and the 7th, standing in the middle of it with 2 horses and a clerk, which is a thing he had clearly been waiting some hours to do. He offered me 90 criers, the whole company, every town they hold, to carry the promise into every market in Velen inside 4 days. It would be for a fee, and the fee was not 200 crowns anymore. I am not going to write down what it was, because it was not a serious number. It was a way of finding out what I would pay. I refused him standing between 2 horses on a road, and I did it in front of Nib Calloway, who was holding one of them. Then I asked Calloway his old company rate before he left a Marlbeck platform, rather than cry a claim he knew was false. He named 4 silver a day and a christening fee. I hired him on those terms, from me and off the company's books, starting then, and he took it with Task 4 feet away. Task did not say anything at all. He hummed 4 notes, got into his carriage, and went back to Ambry, and the thing he had just found out on that road is that there is nothing to sell when the word is already running for free. I reached Ambry on the 6th day with a lame horse and 2 hours of daylight left, and rode into the treasury yard while it was still emptying. The treasury pays out on a Friday. Clerks first, then the carters and the yardmen, then the gate guards, and every one of them was being paid in fens because the crown had 2 million of them and no reason on earth to hold them. Calloway opened that table. He had ridden ahead of me from the road where I hired him and had been standing on a barrel in the street outside the treasury since noon, and the finest throat in Velen spent an afternoon telling clerks where to queue and what the rate was, and did it better than anybody has ever done it. The clerks went first. They took their pay in the hall and came straight out of the door and across the yard and into the queue at my table in the street, still holding the bags. And the carters. And then, at about 3 in the afternoon, the gate guards walked off their own posts and stood in a line in the street with everybody else. I did not do that. I had been in the city about half an hour. I sat on a horse in a treasury yard and watched a kingdom's own paid men walk away from their gates to be redeemed by a man who used to mend roofs. And I have never had a feeling anything like it, and I hope I never do again. The chancellery men at the gate told the clerks the promise was void. A private undertaking, no standing, no instrument, no security, and any man relying on it was relying on nothing. And my wife got down off the cart, took a folded piece of paper out of the inside of her coat where she has carried it since the morning she walked out of the chalk, and handed it to the man at the front of the line. It is the copy of the writ that was read out in Osenford Square on a Thursday 3 years ago while I stood in the road, and it has one line on it that I did not understand at the time and have understood for about 2 years. The clause turns a person's obligation into property. Once the law gives it that name, any stranger may buy, sell, or transfer the claim. That is the clause a chancellor signed without looking up, and it is the clause that let a collector take my wife off a cart tail because a debt made out of a woman was a thing that could be bought and sold. Rona did not argue with anybody. She handed it to the first man in line and let 300 queuing clerks read it while they waited, one to the next, all the way down the street. By 4 in the afternoon, every man in that queue knew his claim on me was property and that it was his. The chancellery's own hand had said so 11,000 instruments ago. Ostre lost the yard, the council, and the coin between 2 o'clock and dark on the same afternoon, and she was not in the yard for any of it, and she did not need to be. The council met on the Sunday, and Slate says it took under an hour, and that 4 of the 11 who had voted for the ban were the loudest voices for the unnaming, and that not one of them mentioned having voted at all. She took the only exit that preserves anything, which is the one I would have taken, and she took it fast. She unnamed the Fenn by proclamation on the Monday morning. The coin stands, the weight stands, the value stands, and it is no longer called anything at all except a quarter copper. And the proclamation has to say why, because a proclamation that does not say why is a proclamation nobody obeys. So, the document that went out to 90 towns says, in the Chancellor's own words and over her own seal, that the name was not the crown's to give to a piece of metal, because a name belongs to a man. A woman who has spent 11,000 instruments making monstrous things ordinary had to put her seal on a sentence saying that a word belongs to a person. Slate says she wrote it herself and would not let a clerk draft it. The criers only carried it, 90 of them. 4 times a day, in 90 squares, at Task's own going rate, paid for by the chancellery. The take did not come from the criers. It came from the crowds standing under them, hearing a proclamation that said a name belonged to a man, then turning to each other and saying the name, meaning a man. They did it all across Velen on the same afternoon. It was the largest day in all of this account, and I spent every crown of it before dark. Maud Avery came down to the Ambry table on the Tuesday with a keep book under her arm and one piece of news that I put in the wrong place entirely. She said the Hesper Counting House has started calling in the personal guarantees of its agents. Every circuit, every district, all at once, because the crown's coin has gone strange and the house wants its arrears made good by the men who stood behind them. I said that sounded like somebody else's trouble and asked her about the Cold Harrow book, and she let me change the subject. Bet Coyle brought it once, in one piece, and then sat down on the step of the Grail table and drank a cup of water, and she did not come back with hourly scraps of it all day, because she is not that kind of runner, and never has been. She said the Hesper Counting House had served its northern agent for the arrears he personally guaranteed across 11 villages over 22 years. She said the sum was 400 crowns to the coin, and she said the writ names him Aldous Pell. Aldous, 22 years of paper and 2,000 writs, and a man in those villages who has never in his life used a debtor's given name, and it took a piece of Hesper paper served on his own doorstep for anybody in the county to learn that he has one. I was on a horse before she had finished the second sentence, and I want to be honest about why, because a great many people have since decided it was mercy, and it was not. Answering a call is my entire trade. It is the only thing I have ever built that worked. A man does not spend 3 years telling a kingdom that he comes when he is called, and then sit down on a step when the call is from somebody he hates. Rona did not try to stop me, and did not come with me on the first horse, which is a thing I only understood afterwards. She said she would follow with Dob and the company and be there by evening, and she was. And if she had ridden with me that morning, half of what happened in that square could not have happened. One day, hard, with 2 changes of horse paid for out of the day's take at the table. And the day's take is not mine and never has been since I stood on a fallen trestle in Grail Market. So I put my own name and the sum in Ren Fossick's book before I left, which is a thing I now do without thinking. I got into Austin Ford at about 5 in the afternoon, on a horse I had ridden into the ground, and I had missed a day and a half of it. Our square told me the rest as I came in pieces, out of about a dozen mouths, because a village of 90 souls that has watched something for a day and a half cannot stop telling you about it and does not need to be asked. They had served it on the Tuesday morning off the alehouse trestle, which is his own trestle, and they had read it out loud so the square would hear the sum, which is his own method, and the Hesper man who did it ate an apple while he waited, which I have decided was not deliberate, and which is worse if it was not. Then the alternatives went, one at a time, over a day and a half, in front of the village, and the village counted them off with him. The house would not extend. It is calling guarantees in on every circuit in Velen at once, and there is nobody in that building with the standing to make an exception for one agent in the north. He wrote. The letter came back inside the day, which tells you it had been written before he asked. No other agent would stand for him. He asked 4 of them by name, and Maricrow had all of it off a drover before I was off my horse, and every one of them said no, and the reason they gave was the same reason, which is that a guarantee is what they are all being ruined by this month. He went to the Cold Harrow steward on the Tuesday evening, which is the one call he made that surprised everybody, and the steward would not see him, and Maud Avery had that off the keep-book clerk the same night, and told me at the head of the lane without any pleasure in it at all. His own household came to about 110 crowns, house and horse and furniture and the brass hand scale, and a man cannot sell a house in a day and a half, and everybody in that square knew it, which left him the one way out that every village on his circuit now knows by heart, because I taught it to them on a road at Nettlestair, out loud, household by household, in front of 19 doors. Stand in the square. Ask the neighbors, say the number, and say what it buys, and let them put it on the tailgate a copper at a time. He would not do it, and he had a day and a half in which to do it, and he was standing about 30 feet from the trestle. He would have had to do it off. He stood in that square on Tuesday afternoon, and again on Wednesday morning, and he did not ask. Everybody there understood exactly why. A man who has spent 22 years being the reasonable man of 11 villages cannot go round those villages with his hat out without ceasing to be the thing he is. Maricrow came down from Nettlestair on the Wednesday morning with Owen behind her, who is 22 now, and still setting hurdles in the street he was nearly taken out of, and she stood in our square for 4 hours. She is the one person on that circuit with the standing to have started a collection in it, and she did not start one. She told me afterwards that she had waited to be asked and had not been, and there is a second half to it, and it is the half he built himself. He could not have raised it anyway. Those villages have been carried on his extensions for years. Larkhow took 6 months on 91 crowns of arrears before I had ever earned a silver. Harrow Deeping took 6 months on the same terms and turned me around in the road for it. They are villages that have been kept alive by being carried, and they have nothing in the box. And not one of them had sent for me, on his behalf or on anybody's, in 3 years. The undertaking he wrote into those extensions is still running. Bought those villages out of needing me in the first fortnight of this whole business, and it never once stopped working. And it was still working on the Wednesday morning, holding perfectly in his own square. So I stood at the top of our own lane in plain sight, where any man in that square could see me from any part of it, and I said nothing at all for the better part of 2 hours. I did not go to him. I did not send anybody, and I did not get up on anything. I have been asked since whether that was cruelty, and I have never given anybody a straight answer, because I do not have one. Ivy Bissell came out and asked me whether I was going to do anything, and I said I did not know, which was true. She said that whatever I decided, I should decide it where he could see me deciding it, because a man in that square being watched by a man in that square was every bit of the arithmetic now. He saw me. He saw me at about 6 in the evening, and he looked at me for a long moment across a square he had taken my wife out of, and then he turned round and went on talking to the Hesper man about a valuation. The Hesper man went into the alehouse at 7 to write up the inventory, and Pell stood in the middle of the square with the light going, and about 40 people watching him from doorways, and he called my name, Fenn Alder, out loud, in the square where he took my wife off a cart tail. Once, and quietly, in the voice a man uses to ask somebody at the same table to pass him something, because he had 22 years of not raising his voice in that square, and no other voice available to him. A silver came down on the cobbles about 4 feet from him and rang, and he looked at it, and he did not pick it up, and then he said it again. And then he could not stop, and that is the thing nobody had planned and nobody could have. A man calling for help does not stop at 1. Every call that is not answered is worse than the last, and the next one has to carry the weight of the one before it, and by the 9th or 10th he was not asking anymore. I did not answer, and I did not move, and I could not have told you at any point in that hour whether what was holding me still was patience, or 3 years of arithmetic, or something a great deal smaller than either. The first 60 or so came down in silver, and you could hear him still trying to sound like a man making a reasonable request, and the silver is the sound of a man who thinks this is going to be a short business. Somewhere after that it went to gold, and it did not go back. Gold on cobbles is a different noise entirely, and everybody in that square knew what it meant, because Ford has heard gold fall in it before, in that exact place, 3 years earlier, off a cart tail. The 100th, he had stopped being a man asking for something and become a man who could not stop, and the square could hear the difference. And about a dozen people who had come out to watch a collector be ruined went back inside their own houses instead. Rona counted, not the coins. She stood beside me at the top of the lane and counted the sayings, out loud, quietly, to herself, and her hand was on my arm the entire time. 400. Fenn Alder, 400 times, which is 1 for every crown of the sum on the paper, and I would not believe that if she had not been the one counting, and if 40 other people had not been counting along with her by the end. And towards the end of it, the square started saying it as well, which I had not asked for and could not have arranged and would not have dared to try. Not to summon me. I was standing there. They said it because those villages had spent 3 years being told by that man not to send for me, and they were now watching him spend an hour doing nothing else, and a thing like that goes through a crowd like water through sacking. Mara Crow had come down from Nettlestair. Ivy Bissell was in her own doorway. Sedge was back off the levee with one hand not right. Fossick was there. Every one of them said it, meaning me, in that square on that evening, and the sky did not stop. A Hesper agent came out of the alehouse at about 8 and tried to attach the gold where it was lying. It is the only thing anybody has ever thought of that Dob Weller warned me about on a false floor 2 years before, which is that a fall of coin on open ground is goods, and goods on the ground can be seized against an instrument, and there was a lawful instrument in that square with a sum on it. He was right in law, and I did not care in the slightest. Dob put 8 men across the mouth of the lane, and Ruddock stood in front of the heap with his arms folded and laughed at completely the wrong moment, and the agent stood in Ford Square for half an hour and did not get past a fire crew. Rona went and stood beside the agent and told him, quite pleasantly, that he was welcome to enter every coin on that ground against the instrument, and that the instrument named 400 crowns and that there was already more than that lying there. And would he like the difference explained to him in the morning? Nobody touched him, and nobody threatened him. 8 men who used to put out ricks simply stood where he wanted to walk, which is a thing I learned in the crying square at Ambry from 90 criers and had been waiting 3 years to use. It came down for 50 minutes or so, and it came down on me and not on him, because that is where it lands and there is no off. At the end of it, I was standing in gold above the knee, in the same square, 40 feet from the trestle, where a man priced my wife at £1 a week 3 years and about 2 months after I went down on my hands and knees in that mud in front of 90 people and filled my hat. I did not touch it. Not one coin, and I want that stated plainly because it is the one decision from that evening I remain certain about. I stood in it with my hands at my sides and my wife's hand in mine, let it come down on my head, and Ford watched me leave it there. That is all of the account if you want it in one picture. It took 3 years, and it cost a shoulder, a woman's lungs, a village, a man named Hal Corbet, and my father's tools. And the difference between the 2 pictures is a pair of hands. Then I crossed the square with the gold still up round my knees and paid his writ, and it took 4 minutes, and it is the shortest piece of business in all of this account. 400 crowns counted off the top of the heap on the alehouse trestle, with the Hesper agent watching and the entire village standing round it, and every crown of it out of coin that was lying in that square and none of it out of anything I owned. Rona did the arithmetic out loud because somebody had to, and Thrial was 40 miles away. Of the 400 I counted off, 340 crowns of gold came out of Pell's own mouth. The other 60 came from the 11 villages he had spent 22 years being reasonable at. On the one evening, they decided to mean me anyway. I did not say anything to him while I was counting it, and he did not say anything to me. And the Hesper agent read the receipt out because somebody had to, and his voice was the only steady one at that trestle. Settled in full, on the day, before witnesses, and he entered the hour as well as the date. Tried the tick. He got as far as nothing personal, and then he stopped, in front of the trestle, in front of the village, with the receipt in his hand, and he did not finish it, and he has never finished it in my hearing since. I paid the Crown's assessment off the same heap that evening, 140 crowns, the Harrow Scar penalty, and interest on both charges. Ren Fossick entered it in the barn book. It is the last piece of paper anybody has ever served on me. There was a great deal more than 400 crowns on those cobbles, because a square of 90 souls had been saying it for an hour along with him. Rona counted 200 of it off for Maud Ivory before anybody else touched the heap, and I put every coin of the rest onto the redemption table before I slept, because the promise is still running, and that money has not been mine since Grail. Maud Ivory came the next morning and worked the Cold Harrow Keep book down to its last names on a table in that square, out loud, estate by estate, with Rona's 200 stacked on the table in front of her and the Hesper house in no position to argue about a price. The chalk gang stood there while she did it. She read every name on that book and every discharge and the dates, and she got to the bottom of it at about 2 in the afternoon, and they walked out of the pits that week. All of them, and I was not there for it, and did not need to be. Pell has not served a writ since, and he has not been ruined either, which surprises people who want a neater end than that. He works a corn factor's books at Grail, and he is very good at it, and I have passed him in that market twice, and both times he has taken his hat off, and neither of us has said anything. Then we gave the rest of it away, in the same square, in the same hour, which is the only piece of business in 3 years that my wife and I agreed about completely from the beginning. Whitlow Company went to Whitlow, to Sister Hal, and 4 named men, with the engine and the hooks and the ladders. The Fallowmere wagons went to the chalk. The runners went to Bet, Outright, Roots and Relays, and the Stick, and she has 14 of them now and takes work from anybody who pays. The tables went to the 9 towns. Attilly holds the roster, and Callaway cries the days, and Elsbeth runs the north, and Maud buys writs, and none of them needs me for any of it, which was Rona's condition, and not mine. A company I own needs me. A company a town owns needs the town. She said that at Whitlow on the morning after the granary, and I did not listen to it for 2 years. Austin Ford put a slate up on the alehouse wall for the tables, and Sedge burnt the letters into the board with his bad hand, and got them straighter than I ever did. At home, that night, with the door shut, and the fire down, and nobody else in the house, and nothing left in the square but a slate on a wall, my wife said my name. She had not said it where anybody could hear it since the morning she walked out of the chalk, and that is 2 years. She said husband and you, and nothing at all, and it was a decision she made in a stock barn at Cold Harrow and kept without ever once discussing it with me. The times behind the almshouse wall at Whitlow do not count, and she would be the first to say so. She said those for money, to nobody, with her mind on a payroll, and the sky stage shut over her. She said Fenn Alder once, at about 11 at night, sitting on the end of our own bed, and she meant it more than she has ever meant anything, and 1 gold crown came down out of nothing and hit the floorboards. Neither of us picked it up. It is still in that room. I have moved it twice with a broom and put it back both times, and there is a mark on the board now where it sits, and that is the end of it.
A man gets handed the one thing everybody says they want, which is money for nothing, and then spends 3 years finding out what it costs. He buys mouths, and they go quiet on him. He turns his own name into the word a kingdom uses for hello, and the more it gets said, the less it is worth, because a word everybody uses is a word nobody means. What pays in the end is not volume. It is being needed by one person who has a reason and owing something back to them afterwards. Anybody can be talked about. Being meant is a different thing, and other people are the only ones who can give it to you.